It all began in the middle of a brutal war where the ground was covered with the dead. In the center of the bloodshed, a man coughed up a thick spray of blood, stumbling from a blow that should have been his end. The holy sword of the knightly order had pierced him straight through, buried deep within his chest. Seeing this, the soldiers broke into cheers, their voices heavy with the relief of men who had finally beaten a nightmare. The man bleeding out on the dirt was known to all as the feared demon of the continent, Ashaman, the most powerful necromancer the world had ever seen. As his life faded away, the mage realized his time was finally up. It had been 10 long years of a war that had spread into every corner of the land. He had tried to strengthen his defenses against this final attack, but in the end, his spells had failed him. Looking at the pile of skulls beside him, he accepted that this was his total defeat, and the man responsible was the lone knight standing before him, Berkelheinen. However, the leader of the knights did not claim the glory for himself. He spoke with a heavy voice, explaining that this victory wasn't won alone. Countless souls had fought and died just so his blade could finally reach its target. Berkel begged the archmage to surrender now for the sake of peace and the common people. This request only fueled Ashaman's anger. He let out a rough scream, telling the knight to shut his mouth. With hatred in his voice, he blamed the knights for standing by and doing nothing while a sickness killed the innocent. To the mage, these holy warriors were worse than common beasts, and he ended his angry rant by calling every single one of them pathetic fakes. Suddenly, a sickly green light began to pulse from Ashaman's body as he forced himself to stand. The soldiers watched in total shock, terrified that he still had the strength to use his dark magic even with a broken heart. His friends shouted warnings of the danger, but Berkel simply ordered the mage to stop his madness, and he revealed the terrible cost of the war. 20 million people had died only to be raised as puppets in the Necromancer's army. Ashaman remained cold, making fun of the knight for his foolishness. Berkel then hit a sore spot, blaming the mage for being driven by nothing more than a sick desire for revenge for his own dead people. The Necromancer challenged him to prove him wrong, and for a moment Berkel fell silent. Then the knight spoke of the true reason he had fought his way to this battlefield. He stared down his enemy with eyes full of firm focus, his sword beginning to glow with a bright light. He stated that everything he did, every drop of blood spilled, was for the future of the children. The archmage's body froze at those words. The hero spoke of leaving behind a gift of hope for the next generation, and in that moment Ashaman saw something that broke him. In the reflection of Berkel's eyes, he saw his own ruined, twisted form, but looking deeper, he saw a ghost of his past self. He saw the pure, fair eyes of a knight he used to be, a man completely different from the monster he had become. As Berkel prepared his final strike, thinking of the children who would inherit the world, the Necromancer was filled with shock. His strength vanished, and he finally fell to his knees in the dirt. The knight raised his sword high, preparing to deliver the final blow that would end the age of the demon of the continent. The time had come for the final strike to end it all, but just as Berkel stepped forward, he drops his holy sword and gripped a new sword carved with dark, glowing symbols and whispered a final insult to his killer. He asked Ashaman if he had any last words, his lips curling into a bloody smile as he declared that killing a man of his power was never going to be that simple. Despite being soaked in his own blood, the Necromancer clearly had one last trick to play. Suddenly, a violent shadowy energy burst from his body, rushing toward Berkel with terrifying force. The knight was thrown backward by the pure magical pressure as Ashaman's eyes lit up with a strange, mysterious power. Holding his blade high, he prepared a final act of revenge against the world. A blinding explosion of light swallowed the battlefield, and as the dust settled, the soldiers began to cheer, believing the enemy had finally fallen. Lying broken on the ground, the mage heard the sickening crack of his own neck. As the sounds of victory faded into the distance, his mind slipped away, his eyes closing slowly on the blurry shadow of someone standing over him. And so the 10-year war that had destroyed the continent finally came to an end. This was the death of the demon of the continent, the Necromancer known as Ashaman. Yet in what should have been his final moment, something unexplainable happened. The scene shifted suddenly to a massive, grand mansion during a night of raging storms. Inside, two maids were buzzing with excitement. Having noticed the young master's lips move for the first time, confused by the warmth and the strange surroundings, the mage wondered what on earth was happening. He had been reborn as a baby named Cleans with no clue of where he was or how he had arrived. One of the maids showed him a picture of a duchess, pointing out the woman as his mother. As she tried to get him to speak, he felt his tiny baby body grow stiff with effort. With a massive struggle, the small boy tried to force out words. The maids were amazed, thinking the genius child was trying to speak his first words, but in reality he was trying to call his dark servants to follow his command. He screamed for them to listen to him, but to the women it was just the scared crying of a child. At that moment, a bolt of lightning tore through the sky, lighting up the dark night with a fierce white glow that covered the whole mansion. 15 years passed in the blink of an eye, and the mansion's garden fountain now shined brightly under the warm afternoon sun. A group of young ladies stood nearby, their faces showing a mix of real surprise and deep wonder. A young man walked calmly through the huge estate, his steps steady and confident. The girls began to whisper to each other, completely charmed by his handsome face and his flowing hair. Then his new look was fully shown, an incredibly handsome young man with hair as white as snow. He had looked so perfect it seemed like he had been carved by the gods themselves. The ladies sighed, talking excitedly about how beautiful the young master Cleans had become, with one of them wondering out loud what he could possibly eat to get such perfect looks. The girls were left wondering what magical drink a person would have to drink to look so out of this world. Their daydreaming was cut short when a man walked up to Cleans in the garden, carrying a heavy bucket. Without warning, he splashed the boy with holy water, screaming for the evil spirit to leave the body it was in. This was Garrison, a priest who believed from the start that something was very wrong with young Cleans. He pointed a finger at the three nearby girls, claiming they had already fallen fallen under the boy's dark control. Soaking wet and annoyed, Cleans asked if the priest ever grew tired of this endless cleansing routine. Garrison refused to back down, insisting that the soul of the archmage Ashaman lived inside the boy. Even as Cleans denied being a necromancer, the priest saw a flash of his cold look and splashed him with yet another bucket of holy water. Walking away, Cleans muttered to himself, wondering if the priest was truly crazy, calling him a madman under his breath. Garrison, hearing the insult, ordered his men to grab the boy and drag him away, shouting that he needed a bath in boiling water to learn his lesson. As he was dragged off, the young man thought back to the day he had died. He remembered his death clearly, followed by the shocking feeling of waking up in a baby's body because his first words had been a dark magic spell. He had been labeled a demon from birth. It was in that weak state that he first met the priest of the Holy Order. Cleans remembered the giant shadow of Garrison standing over him, a meeting that started 15 years of total suffering. His childhood included 24-hour prayer sessions that never stopped, forced baths in freezing garlic water, and cleansing fire shows where he was tied to a cross for everyone to see. Under the cover of holy habits, he had suffered through every kind of torture possible. Now 15 years later, he sat at his own party with a look of complete disgust. His personal maid Aaron prayed strongly that he would follow the path of a hero, but Cleans looked like he would rather be anywhere else. Losing his patience with the religious mood, he stood up and threw his party hat across the room. Aaron looked heartbroken, complaining that she had made that hat with her own hands and heart. Feeling a sudden wave of guilt for upsetting her, Cleans moved to pick up the item and apologized. However, his guilt disappeared the moment Aaron revealed that it was actually Priest Garrison who had made the hat. Cleans froze in his tracks, his face twisting into a look of pure horror and deep sickness. Just then, Garrison appeared behind him, his voice loud as he called out Cleans's name. The priest seemed moved to tears, touched that the boy had supposedly worn the hat for a whole week without taking it off. In response, Cleans took the hat and crushed it under his foot, smiling as he declared he would never wear such trash again. Garrison exploded, screaming that the evil spirit of Ashaman had finally shown its true colors. The angry fight was suddenly cut short, however, by the arrival of Commander Dunnell, whose presence changed the heavy mood of the garden in an instant. Commander Dunnell stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension as he noted that the rumors of the boy being the rebirth of Ashaman had been going around for over 10 years. He reminded the priest that the Holy Church itself had officially stated there was nothing wrong with the child. Upon hearing this, Garrison quickly let go of Cleans, nodding in respectful agreement with the commander. Scrambling up from the floor, the boy realized that while the priest chose to ignore him, he obeyed Dunnell without a second thought. It was a cold truth. The priest wasn't just a crazy believer. He was a shark who knew exactly how to play the game of politics. As the priest turned to leave the hall, he stopped to take one last look back, warning that there was always a chance for something to happen in the distant future. With that dark final warning, he said goodbye to everyone, only to pop his head back in to cheerfully remind Cleans that their next cleansing routine was scheduled for the coming Friday. Cleans watched him wave, his blood boiling with a silent anger as he muttered, until then through tightly closed teeth. Left alone, the young man slammed his fist into a sofa, his frustration spilling over. He couldn't understand how a man could purposely torture a child and still be praised as a holy priest. Aaron approached him carefully with a towel, whispering a question that had bothered her for years. Was he truly no longer the archmage? Cleans denied it with all his heart, swearing he never wanted to hear that name again as long as he lived. Privately, however, his thoughts were a storm of secrets. He knew he couldn't reveal the truth to anyone. Since his rebirth, his life had been a golden cage, watched constantly because of the rumors, even leading to him being locked inside a monastery for 7 painful years. Trying to change the subject, the boy asked about the executor, wondering if it was a high-ranking position. Within the order, the man standing beside him took on a serious tone, explaining that the title belonged to the strongest warrior in the entire order, a fact that truly surprised Cleans. It was said that almost no one could stand against an executor, with the only exception being the Duke of Kenz's own noble family. Impressed by the raw power of his family line, Kenz began to clap his hands in real excitement. He asked with interest who was considered the strongest duke in the history of their house. The man noted that while the 7th Duke, Cleans' own father, was very powerful, the 1st Duke remained the absolute peak of strength. Cleans was surprised. He had thought the current family line had reached the top, but the man remained firm in his belief that the founder was unmatched. Seeing the boy's deep interest, the man simply agreed with the young master to please him. Aaron noticed that Clemen's eyes had become stuck on a specific painting hanging on the wall of the Grand Hall. Commander Dunnell thought about the dark humor of it all, thinking how no one could have ever guessed such a crazy twist of fate. It had been 200 years since the 1st Duke started their house, and as Clan stared at the hallway of his past family members, he still struggled to understand the craziness of his new life. He looked across the paintings of the men who came before him. His eyes finally landed on the very 1st Duke, the strongest of the family line. There, framed in gold and looking back with eyes full of justice, was the 1st Duke of the Heinen family, Berkel Heine himself. The necromancer Ashaman had not just been reborn. He had been born again as the direct family member of the man who had killed him. The ghost of his own dying scream still rang in his ears, the moment he had spit his enemy's name with his final breath. He remembered the weight of Berkel's words, that annoyingly pure speech that the killing was all for the sake of the children's future. With that final crushing blow, the evil necromancer had fallen toward the frozen, snow-covered earth, beaten and broken. Suddenly, the young boy jerked awake in his bed, his chest rising and falling heavily as he fought to steady his breath against the soft mattress of his fancy room. He cursed the repeating nightmare of his past life. Hundreds of years ago, he had been a giant of evil who nearly crushed the continent to dust, only to be killed by a hero and spit back out into the world 200 years later. Running a hand through his snow-white hair, he complained complained to himself, unable to match his current fragile reflection with the monster he used to be. The heavy silence of the room was broken by a creepy voice from the doorway, teasingly noting that the young master was talking in his sleep again. Standing there with an evil, knowing smile, Priest Garrison questioned him about those memories, causing Cleans to rush for an excuse about simple tiredness. Before he could recover, his red-haired maid Erin burst into the room in a state of extreme panic. She spilled out that she had heard his dark sleep talk and began copying his evil whispering out loud. In a panic, Clint jumped to silence her, begging her to keep her mouth shut before things got worse. It was too late. The head butler arrived to announce that the family's sword show was beginning, and hearing the reports of the boy's weird behavior, Garrison coldly declared that Cleans's cleansing sessions would be doubled. Clamping his hand over Erin's mouth, the young heir shook with a mix of hidden anger and shock at the total unfairness of his situation. As they moved toward the courtyard, Cleans mentally threw every curse word he knew at the priest. Convinced the man was completely crazy, he turned to the servants to ask about the sword event. The butler explained that the Duke himself had personally ordered Cleans to be at the ceremony. Surprised by the sudden interest from his father, he reached for a cloth offered by a young maid. The butler with a mustache yelled at the girl for bothering the master, but Cleans stepped in to defend her. He handed her a cookie that sent her into a state of pure happy chewing. As he looked out at the huge property, he tried to figure out the reason behind his father's call. The butler then shared the bad news. Relatives from the side branches of the family had arrived for a visit. Cleans's face turned sour right away. He knew exactly what kind of annoying fake drama was waiting for him. The moment he walked into the hall, the noble relatives crowded around him, their eyes lighting up with cruelty. They right away began to make fun of him, saying the name of the ancient bad guy on purpose just to see him jump. They laughed among themselves, loudly reminding everyone that the demon child had spent 7 awful years wasting away in a church prison. Cleans watched them with cold, planning eyes, spotting the heavy eater from the northern branch, who had clearly only shown up to stuff their face for free. His look then shifted to a blonde girl whose body language gave off an unbearable pride. She was another relative from the side branch who looked ready to turn the family gathering into a war of insults. The girl from the western branch stood with a cold sense of being better than everyone else. Her eyes judged everyone in the room as if they were not even worth her breathing. Ignoring the small teasing and the sharp insults, the main heir simply walked straight past the group, leaving them steaming with anger behind him. One of the cousins finally lost his patience. His face turned red as he yelled out a question, asking if that piece of trash truly meant to ignore them in his own home. The snobby noble continued to shout, but the former archmage found it almost funny that these side family members acted as if they owned the house. Suddenly, the crowd's attention shifted toward the fighting ring where 2 young swordsmen were locked in a fierce practice fight. A boy with purple hair jumped forward, pouring his nervous energy into a hopeless strike against his rival. However, the pressure was too much. He broke under the counterattack and fell backward, hitting the ground in defeat. Boiling with shame, the purple-haired boy demanded that his rival stop holding back and actually fight him with everything he had. The golden-haired boy standing over him blocked the quick storm of attacks with smooth and easy moves. A confident and calm smile rested on his lips as he declared, "The match is already over." This was the genius Delan Rinland, Cleans's older half-brother. His pure feeling of greatness made it clear that he was the one protecting the family's famous name. Cleans watched the fight closely, his eyes beginning to glow with a faint, magical purple color as he turned on his magical sight to break down their skills. Driven by a feeling of having nothing to lose, the rival attacked again, swearing that things would be different this time. Delan rushed forward, his sword becoming a blur. While the rival tried to fight back at any cost, Delan kept total control. He moved smoothly through the strikes and dodged a downward cut with perfect ease. Suddenly, Delan was covered in a bright golden energy. His movements sped up faster than the human eye could see as he prepared a special move. Cleans recorded every detail, using his eyes to study Delan's footwork, the shifting of his weight, and the exact moment he used the tip of his toe to push himself forward with explosive force. The purple-haired rival, blinded by anger, tried a final, winning hit aimed right at Delan's face. Cleans watched in wonder as even the hidden flow of magic energy within the family's secret sword style was shown to his eyes. In a split second, Delan let loose an explosive strike, the famous meteor sword move, hitting his rival dead center. The judge right away stopped the fight, declaring Delan the winner. Always acting like the polite, better person, the blonde boy offered a soft, friendly smile. He pointed out, though, that his rival would have been badly hurt if the hit had landed with full force. As the guests whispered in wonder at the showing of such an advanced move, Cleans realized the whole thing was a planned warning to the side families. Delan then spotted his younger brother and walked over with a teasing smile. He asked if Cleans had been watching for long, joking that he would have tried even harder had he known his brother was in the crowd. Looking at his brother's perfect skill and his mask of fake kindness, the ancient bad guy felt a wave of real disgust. All the while, he wondered what the real reason was behind the gathering of all these side families. The mood in the grand hall changed right away as the presence of the 7th head of the family, Duke Canklin, was felt by everyone. Cleans felt a shock of fear as his father walked up. The room fell into a heavy, choking silence. The Duke gave a rare nod of approval toward his oldest son, recognizing the huge effort Delan had put into reaching such a high level of skill. The former archmage watched this moment with a doubting eye. He realized that Delan was the only source of pride for the Duke and the whole family. Commander Dunnell jumped in, noting that Delan's control over the sword was truly amazing for his age. Always putting on a show, the blonde boy bowed his head with fake modesty, claiming he still had much to learn. As the family head walked past, he spoke briefly of the heroic history they carried. Then the Duke turned his look toward Cleans, a look that was freezing, sharp, and dripping with with clear hate. Without a single kind word, the Duke stared at the boy, his silence loudly showing the shame he felt over this failed heir. Then, to the shock of the gathered guests, the leader reached out and touched the silver-haired boy's head, only to coldly declare that he felt not a single spark of magic inside him. Cleans lowered his head and offered a quiet apology, fully aware that in this world, a noble without magic was considered little more than dead. Wait, Commander Dunnell stepped in to defend the boy, suggesting that the years spent locked away in the monastery had simply slowed his growth. However, the damage was done. The crowd began to whisper meanly, gossiping about the heir who possessed no magic at all. They muttered that if the main line had become this useless, it was time for the branch families to take control. Walking away through the long hallways, Cleans told himself he could put up with the insults thrown at him. But then he remembered Burkle's famous words about protecting the future. Clenching his fists until his knuckles turned white, a giant wave of anger rose inside him. The former archmage found it a bitter joke that he had lost his life to a man whose family line had turned into such sad trash. As the guests began to leave, the teasing didn't stop. Dalton, the purple-haired youth from the branch family, blocked Cleans's path and began to make fun of him, asking how a highborn heir could be so useless that he didn't even know how to swing a sword. The troublemaker continued his angry yelling, calling the boy a shame to the Henland name. Remaining calm on the outside, Cleans looked at Dalton and saw him for exactly what he was, a talentless, nosy nobody of zero value. When Dalton raised his fists in a fit of anger, Cleans calmly called him both foolish and incredibly stupid. Enraged by the insult, Dalton stomped the ground with violent force, preparing to strike. But in a flash of movement, the young heir swept Dalton's legs out from under him, sending the loudmouth crashing face first into the hard stone floor. Blood began to leak from Dalton's nose as he lay there, stunned, listening to Cleans coldly advise him not to take his anger out on others. Desperate and humiliated, Dalton screamed a final low blow, calling the silver-haired boy a motherless bastard. At those words, Clement turned his head, his eyes lighting up with a terrifying, dangerous glow of pure anger. Seeing that demonic look, the coward froze, his skin turning pale as he broke into a cold sweat of real terror while he stared at the shaking boy. The former villain thought that the real sickness in this family was the disgusting pride of people like Dalton. With a spark of ancient magic beginning to wake up in his veins, the Necromancer wondered just how much longer he would have to play the part of the weakling. It was a hard pill to swallow, seeing how far the clan had fallen. Cleans recalled the pure, shining image of the hero who had killed him, and he couldn't help but feel a small bit of pity for the sad state of Burkel's descendants. His dark thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of the commander, whose voice rang loudly through the hallway, ordering the injured Dalton to stop his sad scene. With a stance as firm as iron, the knight made it clear that he would no longer put up with such clear disrespect under his watch. Dalton ground his teeth in a silent, helpless anger, lacking the courage to talk back to a man of the commander's level. As he backed away, he threw a final mean comment over his shoulder, telling Cleans he should be thankful for having such a protective guard. The loser ran away in a silly, hopping walk, leaving the commander staring after him in confusion, resting his hand firmly on the handle of his sword. The knight promised Clement that the area was now safe. The silver-haired boy watched his guard with a distant, unreadable look before breaking the silence. He looked at the knight and asked quite simply if he had an extra sword he could borrow. Later that night, the two walked deep into a dark forest, the ground covered by a thick, swirling fog. Stopping their walk, the great warrior handed a heavy, cold steel blade straight to the boy. The commander asked why the young master needed a weapon at such a late hour, but Cleans remained silent, gripping the handle and falling into a fighting stance that perfectly copied his brother's. Seeing this, the guard decided it was time to head back to the house, guessing that the boy was likely just holding on to a hopeless dream of becoming a swordsman. In his heart, the warrior felt a wave of pity. He knew that without a single drop of magic, all the effort in the world was useless. A person without magical power could never hope to become a knight of the Empire. Unaware of these thoughts, the boy began to swing the blade through the damp air, focusing entirely on his training despite his supposed inability to use the family's secret skills. Closing his eyes, the former archmage brought up the memories of the arena with perfect clearness. He began to repeat the amazing footwork he had seen Deland perform, his body moving with a careful exactness that didn't match his young age. With a perfect leap, he timed his push flawlessly, perfectly copying the genius move. Suddenly, a wild purple energy began to wrap around the sharp edge of the blade. As he copied the sword's exact path with terrifying perfection, purple sparks began to hiss and crack loudly around his glowing eye. Sensing a sudden, violent change in the air, the commander spun around, his breath catching in his throat. He stood frozen, unable to process the overwhelming feeling of power coming from the boy he had thought was a weakling. In that heartbeat, the air unleashed a giant strike of pure, jagged purple energy toward a massive boulder. But just as the power reached its peak, a sharp light tore through the boy's eye, breaking the flow of his massive power. The dark energy shattered, melting into the cold night wind like glass. Despite the break in power, the huge rock was sliced clean in half, the smooth surface of the cut glowing softly. The commander was left completely speechless, his sense of reality falling apart as he stared at the destruction. Cleans turned around slowly, his grip on the blade firm and steady. A surprised, knowing smile rested on his lips as he realized that the ancient power he once held was finally beginning to answer his call once more. He had truly done it. He had copied that powerful move with scary exactness. The scene shifted. Nearby, the young maid Erin stood frozen. Her mouth dropped open in a state of complete and total shock, unable to understand the pure impossibility of what she had just seen. The commander wasn't doing much better, a single drop of sweat rolling down the side of his head as he stared at the cut boulder. His mind was spinning from the realization that the boy with no magic was anything but weak. The scene shifted suddenly to the next morning, finding the young heir with his head plunged deep into a bucket of water. The commander stood over him, casually noting that that the boy could now hold his breath for well over a minute, gasping for air as he pulled his head back out. Clemens had to put up with the knight's dry humor about his water routines. He shouted at the guard, who only laughed in return, though the knight's eyes sharpened as he admitted he had felt a clearly evil energy coming from the young master's room earlier. As the maid began to dry the silver-haired boy's wet hair, a servant walked up with a serious look, carrying a closed letter. The messenger told him that Dalton had sent a personal invite. Cleans blinked, blanking on the name for a moment until the servant reminded him of the apology Dalton wanted to offer. The former archmage remembered the sad punch the boy had tried and right away scoffed. He knew an idiot like that wasn't looking for forgiveness. Gripping the paper, the silver-haired heir felt his suspicion grow. After reading it, he found out the invite was for a hunting contest, a classic setup that clearly looked like a trap. It was obvious that his enemy just wanted an easy excuse to drag him out into the wild woods, away from the safety of the house. When the messenger asked for his final word, Cleans looked up with a sharp, firm look in his eyes, saying he saw no reason to say no. He knew he held the biggest advantage. As he looked toward the sword leaning against the wall, he realized that his time spent watching his brother's moves had shown a scary new skill. He could copy any power perfectly after seeing it just once. The commander moved to get the carriage ready for the upcoming hunt, insisting that he would go with the boy to keep him safe. He eyed Cleans with doubt, asking what kind of plan the young master was cooking up this time. With a serious look, the silver-haired boy reminded the guard of their past talk about the changes in his power. The knight replied that for some reason he felt a totally different weight in the air today. A dark, scary feeling that seemed to follow them as the carriage began its bumpy trip toward the distant castle. The ground was rough and dangerous, causing the carriage to shake wildly as they entered the woods. Inside the tight space, poor little Erin was turning a shade of green, holding her stomach as she got motion sickness. She ended up resting against the commander, who sighed and muttered that he had warned her not to come. Before offering a pillow for her to rest on, Cleans looked out at the thick trees, explaining that the forest floor was always rough for those not used to its paths. The great warrior told the girl to sleep it off, clearly moved by what he thought was the young master's kindness, only for Cleans to plainly say that the pillow was strictly for Erin's comfort, not the knight's. Falling into a quiet thought, the white-haired boy stared out the window at the passing trees. He watched the old woods with a distant look, thinking about how much the world had changed in 200 years. He remembered that 200 years ago, this exact place had looked totally different. The land, now green and full of life, had once been an empty wasteland, buried under heavy snow and the cold weight of the dead. The former villain looked at the changed land with a distant, thoughtful look. A flash of forced respect crossed his mind as he realized that Burkle had truly succeeded in turning this graveyard into a better world. His deep thoughts were broken when a guard swung the carriage door open, announcing they had arrived at the huge property of the Corwell family. Stepping out onto the gravel, Cleans looked up at the tall building, surprised to find that the house looked even more fancy than his own family's home. He dryly noted that for a simple children's hunting contest, the host certainly had a crazy amount of money to burn. Suddenly, a familiar, annoying voice broke the quiet, calling his name from across the yard. Dalton walked up, standing with a pack of thin, breathing hunting dogs, and asked with an ugly smile what the silver-haired trash was staring at. He bragged openly that the luxury of the house had been paid for by money stolen from Cleans' own family, ending the insult with a mocking laugh. Beside him, one of the massive dogs let out a deep, low growl, strings of spit dripping from its mouth. Cleans noticed the animals looked completely starved and asked with a flat tone when the contest would actually begin. Dalton waved off his rushing, telling his rival to watch closely. In a show of planned cruelty, he let the pack of hungry, fierce dogs loose into the woods, explaining that he had hidden food all over the mountain to draw in wild beasts. He bragged that a starving dog's sense of smell was 100,000 times stronger than a human's, and as the dogs ran into the bushes, he raised his bow. The dogs ran fast with their mouths wide open, driven by wild hunger, only to be shot down by Dalton's arrows as they reached the food, crying in pain as the boy laughed at his own success. Horrified by the pointless violence, little Erin stepped forward to defend her master's honor, but Dalton merely saw her as the brat Cleans always dragged around. He reached out, pretending to pat her head, but his look shifted into something truly evil as he asked what a useless girl like her could possibly offer. With a sudden jerk, he grabbed Erin's arm with hard force, pulling her toward him. Before he could do more, Cleans' hand clamped around Dalton's wrist like an iron trap. His eyes lit up with a cold, hunting anger as he warned Dalton to take his hands off her or he would break his arm where he stood. Shocked by the pure strength in the boy's grip, Dalton tried to swing a desperate punch at Cleans' face, but the heir dodged the blow with a quick, easy tilt of his head. Sneering to hide his fear, Dalton jumped onto his horse and challenged Cleans to follow him into the heart of the hunt. Cleans got on his own horse and ordered the commander to stay behind and protect Erin, promising to return soon. However, the knight stood his ground, showing a magic scroll tucked into his belt. He explained it was a signal charm that worked by being torn, a rare tool that needed no magic to use, making sure he could come to the boy's aid in a second. Cleans gave a sharp nod. He knew Dalton's father was a sneaky man, and if he were to vanish into the deep woods, it would likely be part of a much darker plan than a simple game of hiding. The situation had reached a boiling point. Before pushing his horse forward, Cleans looked back at the commander with a look that held far more weight than a normal teenager's, telling him to tear the scroll the moment things went wrong. He promised the knight that a great storm would rise in his hand if that happened. A mysterious promise that left the warrior watching in silence as the young master vanished into the shadows of the trees. Time slipped away as night fell over the forest, turning the woods into a maze of tangled branches and silver moonlight. Riding deep into the darkness, the former archmage thought that his rival couldn't have hidden himself too far off. Finally, he broke into an open space and found Dalton waiting for him, a dark shadow standing standing against a bloody scene. Surrounded by a circle of dead animals, the purple-haired boy smiled meanly, asking why the great heir had taken so long to find him. Cleans got off his horse slowly, his eyes scanning the weird and horrible scene. The dead bodies of the hunting dogs were scattered around Dalton like sick decorations, their blood staining the dark earth. Dalton stood up with a crazy look in his eye, declaring that they had finally reached the grand finish of their contest. Pulling out his sword, the enemy showed his real plan. Cleans himself was the final target. He threatened to kill the boy and deliver the news of his sad accident to his older sister as a prize. Dalton began to make fun of the Heinen family name, calling it an empty, silly joke of a family line. With an evil smile, he signaled for his backup. Suddenly, figures wearing hoods stepped out from the darkness like ghosts. Their bows were drawn and aimed right at the white-haired boy. They cursed him for his bad luck, telling him he had simply been born into the wrong family at the wrong time. The silver-haired boy stood perfectly still, watching the trap with a look of cold, distant boredom. Dalton continued to brag, claiming that by tomorrow the whole continent would be talking about the fall of the famous sword family, and that the young master would be nothing more than leftover food for the forest animals in the face of this sure death. Cleans found his mind drifting back to Burkle's annoying, pure words about protecting the future. A small, teasing smile twitched on his lips, which only worked to annoy and confuse Dalton. Then, to everyone's fear, the boy began to laugh, a deep, wild laugh that rang through the trees, sounding far too old for his small body. Dalton stepped back, asking if the silver-haired freak had finally lost his mind. Cleans covered his face with his hand, unable to stop laughing at the sad joke of the situation. When he finally looked up, his eyes were no longer human. They glowed with a sharp, blood-red light. He called Dalton a rude brat, his voice dripping with a new sense of power. The purple-haired boy froze, sweat pouring down his face as a deep, animal-like terror took hold in his soul. Cleans's voice grew cold as he reminded them that this family had been built upon his own death, and he would not allow such bugs to disrespect it. A violent, dark blue energy exploded from his body, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. Dalton screamed, thinking it was some hidden magic, but Cleans corrected him with an evil smile. This wasn't magic. It was pure evil energy, the raw power of the Necromancer from long ago. The backup men panicked, their weapons shaking as they whispered in fear, wondering what kind of monster they had truly trapped. High above the ground, held up by his own dark power, Cleans reached into the empty space of history, calling the old, buried evil spirits to rise and act in his name once more. The dark energy twisted and turned as the former archmage ordered his creations to eat everything in sight. From the deep shadows, a giant skeleton stepped out, its huge body standing over the battlefield. Cleans ordered the creature to eat all that stood before it. Dalton let out a panicked scream, refusing to believe his eyes as he recognized the terrifying army of the dead from the stories of Ashaman, the ancient demon king. With a scary, hunting smile, the boy pointed a finger at his enemies, deciding their doom. In a sudden rush of memory, he remembered how he once thought he had forgotten the man he used to be. But he had spent 200 long, painful years alone, resting inside a mountain of bones and skulls. It had been an endless loop of days spent in total darkness, where the only thing he could feel was the constant sound of the dead calling out to him from the bottom of the deep pit. That feeling was a homesickness he could never truly escape. It was the physical tie that reminded him of who he really was. Back in the present, the air grew thick and heavy as massive dark clouds choked the moonlight from the sky. Dalton continued to scream that this couldn't be real, repeating the forbidden name of the archmage in a fit of terror. Clean simply smiled, confirming that yes, that was indeed the name the world used to shake at. The backup men, who were frozen at first, began to whisper among themselves, wondering if the stories of the Demon King were actually just made-up tales. They watched as the giant skeleton stood their ground, their empty eyes lighting up with a fierce blood-red light that cut through the dark. However, the hired killers soon found their bravery again, breaking into teasing laughter. They called the skeletons trash, bragging that they had taken apart hundreds of such dead creatures on past jobs. One killer even joked about taking a bone home as a prize, while their leader shouted orders to clear the path and kill the boy standing at the center of the storm. A man stepped forward, lifting a giant, heavy crossbow and aiming it right at the silver-haired boy. With a sharp order to fire, a rain of arrows flew through the air, flying across the dark sky toward the boy and his dead army. The storm of arrows closed in with deadly speed, reflecting in Cleans's eyes as they approached to pierce his skin. But just as the first arrow should have hit, the whole wave of arrows froze in midair, as if crashing into an unbreakable, hidden wall. Dalton let out a happy shout, certain that the air had been turned into a pincushion by the attack. His celebration was cut short, however. As the dust settled, he gasped in fear to see Cleans standing completely unhurt. Massive ghost-like shields had appeared magically in front of the skeletons, catching every single arrow. The army of the dead remained unmoving and perfect. A silent wall of bone and magic stood ready to turn the hunters into the hunted. The skeletons now stood strong, carrying heavy shields that had appeared to block any more attacks. Cleans looked at his enemies with a mix of pity and disgust, thinking out loud that 200 years was a long time, long enough for the world to forget the real horror of his armies. The backup men fell into a panic, their eyes wide at the sight of shields appearing out of nowhere in the bony hands of the monsters. The heir explained with a scary calm that while normal skeletons might be weak, his were made on a completely different level. But with a confident, sharp smile, he stated that his dead army was unlike anything they had ever faced. This news, matched with the boy's total calm, sent Dalton deeper into a state of freezing fear. Cleans then gave a cold order to his first group: break their lines, move forward. He promised to crush with his own hands those who dared to make fun of the future of the North. And with that final word, he sent his soldiers forward with crushing force. The giant skeletons rushed across the open space at a speed that didn't match their bony bodies, catching the hired fighters completely off guard. The enemies gasped, wondering how empty piles of bone could move with such hunting speed. With a silent, bone-chilling deafening battle cry that rang in the minds of the living, the army of the dead jumped into the fight. The leader of the hired fighters screamed for his men to hold the line and fight down their panic, but his orders were drowned out by the sounds of violence. One of his men was brutally hit by a skeleton, his body broken as he was sent flying. The bloodbath truly began. The woods were filled with the screams of dying men and the steady clacking of bone. Dalton watched in horror as the battlefield turned into a bloodbath of his own making. Without missing a beat, the young mage ordered his second group, the crossbowmen, to clear the area and kill the leftovers high in the twisted branches of the nearby trees. Skeletal bowmen moved into position, their empty eye holes locked onto their targets with scary exactness. The surviving fighters felt their blood turn cold as they realized the dead army had long-range weapons. With a dry, direct order, the former archmage commanded them to fire without mercy. A wave of deadly arrows whistled through the dark air at amazing speeds. The fighters were struck down where they stood, the force of the arrows pinning them to the dirt as they cried out in pain. One especially tough fighter leader tried to fight back, blocking the heavy blow of a skeleton with his sword. In his panic, he shouted that this was impossible, that no normal necromancer could command such well-planned power. He realized that if the battle kept going this way, every single one of them would be totally wiped out. Dalton, seeing his world falling apart around him, screamed for his men to listen, but his voice was lost in the wild noise of the killing. A skeleton sneaked up behind him, its sharp blade raised for a killing blow. Growling in a fit of panicked anger, the purple-haired noble spun around and delivered a perfect, powerful hit that cut off the creature's head. For a brief second, he cheered, thinking he had found the weakness of the monsters by attacking the head. However, his victory turned to dust as the headless body of the skeleton didn't fall. Instead, it kept moving forward, swinging its weapon back at him with unstoppable force. Dalton stepped back in terror. Realizing that the rules of life and death he knew did not apply to the puppets of the archmage, the bad guy stood frozen in a state of complete shock. His mind was screaming that a normal skeleton should never be able to work without its head. With a slow, teasing smile, the main character reminded him that he had already been warned. As the headless monster stood back up, it reached down, calmly picked up its own skull from the dirt, and snapped it back onto its neck as if fixing a piece of armor. Cleans explained that this unstoppable toughness was the main reason he had been able to wipe out the whole continent in his past life. The sight of the creature fixing itself with its own hands sent Dalton falling into a deep animal-like fear. The former archmage revealed the dark truth. Spirits called with pure evil energy do not follow the rules of normal injuries. They do not die easily. The surviving fighters were pushed past the edge of madness, crying in hopelessness as they realized they were fighting a war against an army that simply refused to stay down. Cleans sighed, noting that with his current young body, he could only keep 11 of these top monsters around at a time. Before asking the shaking men if they truly wished to continue this joke, while the forest was being painted in blood, the scene shifted back to the peaceful gardens of the mansion, where the commander and the little maid, Erin, were sharing a laugh. Erin giggled, imagining the stories of the young master's supposed bad behavior at the church prison. The commander watched her with a soft look, noting how much she seemed to truly love the boy. With her cheeks stuffed with treats, she nodded happily, declaring that she loved him more than anything. She asked the knight if he truly understood how amazing the young master was, describing him as the perfect picture of kindness. Her words created a scary contrast as she called him gentle. A fighter was currently running fast through the dark woods, screaming in fear as she called him sweet. A skeleton was cutting right through a guard with a blade of dark magic. She smiled brightly, claiming he was the warmest soul in the world because he shared his cookies with her. While at that exact moment, a cold, dark feeling of death was choking the life out of the forest. Back in the middle of the bloodbath, the main character's eyes remained like blocks of ice, completely empty of the warmth Erin so fondly described. One of the fighters let out a final, wet cry as a skeleton ended him, leaving only the purple-haired Dalton to defend himself. He was breathing heavily, his muscles screaming with tiredness as he swung his blade in a wild circle. He managed to land a heavy hit, but the skeleton's bones joined back together instantly, leaving him in a state of total hopelessness. In a fit of desperate anger, Dalton realized that hacking at the puppets was a waste of time. He decided that the only way to stop the nightmare was to kill the master. If he could strike down the young master, the monsters would surely vanish. With a roar of hate, Dalton charged toward Cleans, screaming his name. He declared that the sick game of playing with dead bodies ended now and that everything would be settled by the mage's death. He raised his sword for a final overhead killing strike, pouring every drop of his remaining strength into the blow, but Cleans didn't flinch. His eyes suddenly lit up with a bright purple light, his magic sight predicting the path of the attack with perfect clearness. To the ancient necromancer, the deadly attack was moving in slow motion, a sad cry from a child who didn't yet understand that he was challenging a god of the dead. Purple energy cracked inside Cleans's eyes, the violent sparks lighting up the darkness as he tracked every tiny move of his enemy. Through his magic sight, the deep files of his memory opened, pulling out a move he had seen only once. He remembered with perfect exactness the path and the rhythm of the sword style his brother had shown days ago in the fighting ring. Dalton's eyes grew wide in freezing shock as he recognized the stance. It was the sacred secret sword style of the Heinen family. Cleans let loose the crushing meteor sword move. His blade became a streak of falling light that crashed into Dalton's weapon. With a sickening metal snap, Dalton's sword was cut in half. The broken steel spun into the dirt. Standing over his shaking enemy, Cleans's voice dropped to a freezing whisper, telling him that his true punishment was only just beginning. As the dust of the fight began to settle and the night air grew uncomfortably still, Cleans looked down at the beaten noble and admitted that Dalton had been right about one thing. If a master dies, his creations lose their power. Even the great Ashaman had never managed to fix that basic weakness. However, the former archmage thought about about a new twist of fate. While his past self relied only on dark energy, it was the fighting skill of the Hainan family line that now fixed his weaknesses. The very blood of his ancient enemy running through his current veins had made him something far more dangerous than he had ever been before. Dalton, broken and confused, struggled to ask a question, but he found his arms and legs wouldn't listen, his body acting like dead weight on the earth. Cleans met his look with a face of total control and deep hate, watching the light fade from the boy's eyes. With a final breath, Dalton collapsed, and Cleans looked toward the sky, whispering to the ghost of Burkle that he should wait, for he planned to rebuild this ruined house with his own two hands. Suddenly, Dalton jerked awake, but the forest was gone. He found himself sunk in a choking, total darkness. He tried to move his hands, but they were held down by the cold, heavy bite of thick iron chains. Panic flared in his chest as he realized he was tied to a torture chair, its frame lined with cruel spikes and rusted chains. A shadowy figure stepped out from the empty space, noting with a dry tone that the guest had finally woken up. It was Cleans, though he seemed changed in this space. He revealed that they were in the place where souls are dragged after their light goes out, a personal afterlife built by the will of Ashamit. Dalton's mind broke at the realization that he was dead, trapped in a world of the Necromancer's making. Cleans leaned in, his voice echoing with the weight of hundreds of years. He reminded Dalton of his hobby, of the countless dogs he had starved and killed for the sheer fun of it, and the terrible things he had done under the mask of noble tradition. The mage remembered the look of sick joy on Dalton's face during those hunts, a memory that now served as the plan for his suffering. Dalton screamed, demanding to be let go, but his cries were swallowed by the deep darkness. A moment of clearness struck the bad guy. He remembered the feeling of Cleans's sword piercing him, yet here he sat seemingly whole. Cleans explained the nightmare. Dalton was indeed dead, and this wholeness was merely a body for his karma. Whether the boy believed in the soul or the afterlife no longer mattered. The debt was due, and the time had finally come for him to pay for every drop of blood he had ever spilled. Past sins had finally come to collect what was owed. Dalton's breath caught in a rough sob as a ghost-like pack of hounds appeared from the empty space behind the boy. Cleans ordered his enemy to listen, truly listen to the loud noise of barks and growls from the lives he had ended for entertainment. The ghost dogs jumped, their ghostly jaws sinking into the villain's soul. He screamed in a sadness so deep it felt like his very being was being torn apart. The silver-haired boy stood over him, cold and hard, telling him to remember this pain, for this was the hell he had built with his own hands. Dalton's begging for mercy fell on deaf ears as he was torn apart by the victims of his own bloody game. Back in the real world, Dalton's dead body lay spread out in the dirt, covered in wounds that matched the ghost attack. Cleans put away his blade, his face calm, having finally got rid of the pest that dared to embarrass him. His skeleton army gathered behind him, standing in quiet, loyal rows. Looking at the empty eyes of his servants, the young mage felt a spark of ancient debt. He told his creatures that they deserved a reward for answering his call across hundreds of years, promising to break the curse of their endless service. A bright green light washed over the clearing, and the skeletons began to melt into glowing bits of magic. Cleans watched in a heavy silence as they faded into the wind, thinking about the endless circle of life and death. He wondered once more why he had been pulled back from the empty darkness. In his mind, true death was when bones turned to dust and blew away without a trace. Yet here he was, flesh and blood once more. His deep thoughts were cut short when a hooded figure stepped out from the trees, admitting his surprise at seeing someone so young using the forbidden magic of necromancy. Cleans's eyes narrowed as he questioned the stranger's name and how much he had seen. The man offered a mysterious, teasing smile, stating there was no need for names. With a flick of his wrist, a sickly green light flashed in his hand, and he began to cast a spell of his own. He claimed the boy wouldn't understand the size of his mission, even if he explained it. And before Cleans's eyes, the dead hired fighters began to twitch and stand up. Their eyes glowed with a dead green light, turning into mindless puppets under the stranger's control. The hooded man lifted the dead bodies with his dark magic, noting that while Dalton had been a sad failure, his leftovers were still quite useful. With a final scary laugh, the necromancer vanished into the fog, taking the moving dead bodies with him. Miles away at the mansion, the peaceful mood had begun to sour. Aaron, the small maid, tried to get the commander to listen to more stories about the young master's funny moments, but the knight remained frozen, staring at the emergency scroll in his hand with growing fear. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone horribly wrong. It had been 3 hours since the signals started to feel off, and his gut was screaming of a trap. He moved to leave the house to find Cleans, but his path was suddenly blocked by 2 serious-faced castle guards. The tension in the air snapped like a tight string as the commander realized the secret plot against the young heir went far deeper than a simple hunting trip. The guards at the mansion blocked the way with cold, blank faces, stating that it would be a huge problem if the commander were to leave his post now. The knight stood in a heavy silence. His eyes narrowed as he recognized the symbol of the Corwell family printed on their uniforms. It was the proof he needed. Dalton's family had been spinning this web of lies from the very start, preparing for the worst. The commander stood up to his full height and gave a final warning. He would no longer stand still if they tried to block his path again. Scared by his strong, deadly anger, the Corwell guards paused. The knight turned to Erin, the young maid, and told her to go back to the safety of the house with the priest, who had come with them on the trip. However, one of the guards told him with a dark look that the priest had already left long ago. Remembering Cleans's earlier warnings and feeling the extreme danger of the moment, the commander jumped onto his horse. With the emergency scroll held tightly between his teeth, he tore it in half, certain that these events were no simple accident. He kicked his horse into a run, racing toward the forest as fast as the animal's legs would carry him, fearing what might have already happened to his master. Deep within the dark woods, the young boy stood his ground against the mysterious necromancer's army of the walking dead. Drops of sweat rolled down his pale face as he realized his dark magic had been nearly used up in the last fight. His current young body was at its limit, and he could no longer call upon his own dark magic to defend himself. The hooded magic user, sensing a win, ordered his mindless zombies to attack the boy without mercy. The dead army rushed forward, but Clean simply smiled, making fun of the Necromancer for thinking he could win just by copying the magic of the past. Suddenly, the mark on the magic scroll in Clean's hand burst with a blinding, holy light. The incoming zombies screamed and backed away, their rotting skin twisting in pain as the holy light burned through the darkness. Clean's laughed, teasing his enemy with the news that he was now completely finished. As the Necromancer watched in confusion, the ground beneath them began to glow with a golden, holy power that rushed upward, swallowing the shadows. From the center of the bright light, the priest who had been traveling with the young heir appeared, his eyes burning with a fierce golden fire. With a voice like rolling thunder, he called upon the light to cleanse the monsters before him, turning the zombies into nothing more than floating ash. He promised the young master that he could rest easy now, because the church would handle the rest. The shocked Necromancer demanded to know the name of this newcomer who held such massive holy force. The priest met his look with a face of total focus and introduced himself as an exarch of the Holy Order. Exarchs were the church's greatest human weapons, 3 chosen warriors who promised to carry out the absolute will of the Pope. They were the only ones able to use the holy weapons left behind by St. Galligan, and it was whispered that a single exarch held the fighting power of a whole army base. The Necromancer shook as the priest's holy energy began to physically crush the darkness he had created. Cleans watched as the man he knew only as a simple priest showed his true rank as the strongest fighter among the chosen 3. The exarch stepped forward, protecting the boy and promising to guard him against all evil. The leftover zombies, driven by the Necromancer's panicked orders, growled and attacked with wild anger, but they were no match for the holy light. The exarch raised a holy book, pouring his power into a wave of fire that burned the dead to ashes where they stood. He ordered the sinners to listen and pray for their souls before it was too late, his voice carrying the weight of a final doom. With a powerful stomp of his foot, a wave of golden energy rushed through the earth, breaking the ground and throwing the dead puppets away like leaves in a storm, delivering a final crushing blow. The exarch declared this act to be his mercy, a final doom for lost and ruined souls. The Necromancer was sent flying by the pure force of the attack. His mind was spinning at the crazy idea of an exarch appearing in such a far-off place. He spit a curse into the wind. Realizing that his careful plan had just crashed into the most scary force the Holy Order had to offer, the hooded Necromancer spit at the ground, his voice cracking as he complained that such holy power was nothing more than a giant lie. Scared, he turned to run away from the open space, but in his panicked escape, his mask slipped and fell to the forest floor, showing his secret face to the moonlight. He didn't get far. The exarch appeared in his path like an angry god, asking with a scary, calm voice just where he thought he was going. The Necromancer screamed as the priest's mental power broke into his mind, crushing his will to fight. Gasping for air that wouldn't come, the magic user listened as the priest whispered that the prayer wasn't over yet, and that he should be thankful for the punishment the holy light was about to give him. In the name of the Holy Order, the exarch delivered a final cleansing strike that turned the man into a pile of gray ash. Cleans watched the killing with close attention, noticing one of the Necromancer's eyes roll across the dirt until it stopped at his feet. As he leaned down to pick it up, he thought about the exarch's scary speed and power. With a single step and the pure weight of his presence, the priest had wiped out over 20 bodies instantly. The massive size of that strength left even the former archmage deeply impressed. Suddenly, a bloody hand clamped onto Cleans's shoulder with painful force. It was the exarch. His eyes narrowed as he looked the boy up and down. He mentioned that he had rushed to this spot the moment he felt a burst of dark magic, but now that he was standing here, something felt incredibly strange. His grip tightened as he noted that the feeling of death he had sensed didn't seem to belong to the boy, yet it had come from this exact spot. His look turned full of doubt, sharp enough to cut, and Cleans felt a wave of stress wash over him. He knew he was standing on the edge of a deadly cliff. He realized that if he made even one wrong move or said the wrong word, this holy man would kill him right then and there, without a second of hesitation. The stare down was broken by the sound of loud horse hooves as the commander arrived, shouting Cleans's name in a state of high panic. Seeing his guard appear so quickly brought a flash of relief to the boy, but the heavy cost of the night had finally reached its peak. The stress of using even a tiny bit of his old dark magic was too much for his current weak body. As his legs gave out and the world began to spin, the commander jumped from his horse, catching his young master before he hit the ground. Desperate and worried, the knight asked what had happened, only for the boy to whisper that his strength had simply vanished. When asked about what happened to the hunting group, Cleans confirmed coldly that he had killed Dalton in the heat of battle. Nearby, a single white flower now splashed with drops of red blood moved gently in the quiet, dark wind of the forest. The scene shifted back to the house where an angry questioning was taking place. The news of Dalton's death had struck like a lightning bolt, and Count Dillon Cornwell, Dalton's father, slammed his fists onto the table in blind anger. He refused to believe that his son, a man he praised for his knightly honor and loyalty, would ever try to secretly kill the Duke's heir. An investigator stepped in, showing the Count a paper that proved 20 of his own hired fighters were there at the scene. The Count's face turned pale as he realized his men had been caught, but he quickly switched to a new excuse. He argued that it made no sense. Dalton was a trained fighter, and everyone knew Cleans had no magic and couldn't fight to save his life. Desperate to save his good name, the Count began to attack Cleans's character, bringing up the weird rumors around the boy's dead mother. He blamed the boy for hiring a killer to take out Dalton and then blaming him for the crime. Just as the Count's angry yelling reached its peak, a powerful commanding voice rang out from the doorway, telling him to shut his mouth. Cleans walked into the room, noting with a dry wry smile that there seemed to be no limit to the foolishness these men would speak. He stated clearly that he had acted to protect himself and that the priest had helped him against the true danger of the necromancer. When the Count called him a liar, Cleans met his look with a strong, firm stare, his eyes flashing with a faint, teasing pink light. With a sharp, teasing smile, he asked if him being Ashaman was now a proven fact in their minds. The Count felt a sudden choking pressure as the boy reminded everyone of the serious promise he made the moment he ended Dalton's life. A deep promise to rebuild the falling foundation of the Heynen family with his own two hands. The boy's voice carried a scary certainty. He declared that he would rebuild the family with his own hands and would not allow any more rats to block his path. The heavy tension in the room was suddenly broken by a sharp knock at the door. A blonde woman walked in, her presence so strong that the air seemed to stop around her. This was the commander of the Blue Spear Holy Knights, and her arrival immediately sent a wave of nervousness through the room. Cleans recognized her right away. She had been at the sword show, watching from the shadows. When a noble questioned her right to be there, the investigator explained that Dalton had a long history of doing missions for her group, giving her a strong reason to care about the truth. She locked eyes with Cleans, giving him a sharp, studying look that made the ancient mage inside him naturally careful. Without wasting time, the commander asked for a private meeting with the young master. Though the investigator paused, he finally allowed it, warning the boy not to be long. As Cleans followed her toward a quiet room, his mind raced through the possibilities. He knew this wasn't a friendly visit. It was either a suspicious check or a dangerous test. He decided to use her family, the House of Fervin, as a stepping stone for his own grand plans, no matter what her reason was. They reached a private study and the commander turned, her calm and strangely smooth voice breaking the quiet. Without warning, she pressed the boy against the wall, her eyes locking onto his as she whispered a surprising request. She wanted to touch him to see the truth. This woman was the oldest daughter of the Fervin house, one of the three famous pillars of the continent. Cleans remembered her scary reputation. Stories described her in battle against wild orcs, where her blue eyes would glow with a deadly brightness as she danced through the fight with her spear. She was a living legend who had single-handedly wiped out high-level monster armies, standing alone among piles of dead bodies as the unquestioned protector of the people. Back in the present, her scary feeling remained even as she teased him. When Cleans paused, she snapped at him to stop pretending they were close. Despite their distant family tie, she reminded him that since she was the daughter of a first wife and he was from a different branch, they shared no true blood, meaning she felt no family duty to hold back her personal curiosity. The commander pushed him against the wall once more, her grip tight as she demanded to see his hands. Cleans shouted in confusion, asking what she was playing at, but she ignored his complaints. She took his hand in hers, feeling his skin with a soft yet firm touch. She noted out loud that his hands were as soft as a baby's, completely empty of the hard spots or scars that show a true swordsman. Her fingers slid over his muscles with perfect exactness as she leaned in close, her breath warm against his face. She looked him in the eyes and asked the million-dollar question. If his hands showed no signs of sword skill, what other power had he used to kill Dalton and 20 tough fighters? Cleans pushed her away, stepping back as a cold sweat broke out on his neck. He realized this woman was far more dangerous than the priests. She wasn't looking for a confession. She was looking for a reaction. He knew that in her world, silence meant he was guilty and pausing meant he was caught. Deciding to attack first, he gave a teasing smile and asked her directly what she would do if he truly was the legendary archmage Ashaman. To his complete shock, she burst into laughter. She looked him up and down and told him that a little pipsqueak like him could never be the scary demon king of the past. The insult hit Cleans harder than any physical hit. He stood there frozen with his mouth open, repeating the word pipsqueak to himself in total shock that he, the most feared necromancer in history, had just been called short. He asked if she hadn't maybe made a mistake, but her teasing smile stayed the same. She confirmed it without a second thought, even offering to say it again. She called him a pipsqueak once more, and Cleans felt his anger explode at the pure shame. Deep down, he knew her guess about his height was actually correct. But the emotional damage was done, and his pride as the former demon king was completely shaken. To make things even crazier, the commander made a brave, surprising offer. If he could beat a knight without using a sword or his dark magic, she would kiss him. Cleans was left completely silent, his mind spinning from the shock of the offer. Between his inside injuries and the weird nature of the talk, he struggled to judge the situation clearly, wondering if this was some twisted political trick or a crazy bribe. She looked out toward the sky, noting that it was getting late and she needed to return to the meeting. She added, almost as a challenge, that the legendary archmage would never have been as careless or as brave as the boy standing before her. As they walked back into the meeting hall, every eye turned toward them with burning interest. Cleans admitted to himself that he had been too relaxed, forgetting how deep the political mud was that he had jumped into. He knew the nobles would never truly believe a boy with no magic had acted to protect himself against the Count's son. When the investigator pushed for details on their private talk, the boy ignored the question and walked proudly toward a sword leaning against the wall. He gripped the handle and drove the blade into the floor with a hard, violent smash, demanding the attention of everyone in the room. Shocked by the sudden outburst, the crowd watched in silence as the boy turned to face Count Cornwell. He challenged the Count to prove his claims right then and there to settle the matter of his innocence once and for all. Cleans called upon the old northern rule of trial by combat, a fight with no rules where the winner is declared innocent and the loser is proven guilty. The Count was shocked, wondering if the boy had finally lost his mind. Trial by combat was a bloody piece of the past with no rules, but the Count quickly saw a golden chance. If he could move the fight from the courtroom to the fighting ring, he could bury the proof of his hired killers along with the boy. He accepted the challenge with a hunting smile, announcing he would pick a champion to fight in his place and swearing to end the boy's life. Cleans simply smiled back, unbothered. bothered, declaring that he would be the one to finish the Count's family line. With the fight set for 4 days away, Cleans knew this was only the beginning. He planned to use the Count as a stepping stone to show every terrible person in the family exactly who he was, planning to tear the house down and rebuild it in his own image. In a private area of the mansion, Cleans's older half-brother Delan exploded in anger. He screamed that the challenge was pure madness, asking if Cleans understood that he was playing games with his life. Cleans, tired of the lecturing, told him he knew very well and was sick of hearing it. Delan mentioned that their father had already given permission for the fight, but he desperately offered to take Cleans's place as his champion. Cleans refused right away. Delan argued that as the future leader of the North, it was his duty to protect his younger brother. In a rare moment of open emotion, Delan remembered the first time he saw Cleans as a baby. To him, the baby had looked like a beautiful angel, and he had spent 7 years waiting for his return from the church prison. With tears in his eyes, Delan grabbed Cleans and begged him to change his mind, desperate to stop his brother's sure death. Their emotional moment was broken by a guard who arrived with urgent news. Count Cornwell had already chosen his champion. Cleans pulled away from his brother's grip, his voice cold and focused as he asked who they would be facing. The guard revealed the name Randall, a kicked-out knight who had built a terrifying name for himself on the battlefield. The scene shifted to a dirty bar where the doors swung open to reveal a massive, muscular man with a look of pure, wild violence. Randall had been kicked out of the knightly orders because of his wild, violent need to kill everyone around him. He sat in the middle of a mess of broken furniture and fallen bodies, drinking a blood-red drink straight from a wooden bucket with a scary look of anger. He muttered that it had been a long time since he had heard a young boy scream, his excitement for the killing clear to see. Back at the house, Cleans listened to the description of his enemy, his eyes growing serious and filled with a dark, strong focus. Just then, a man walked up to Cleans carrying a sword wrapped carefully in cloth. Handing it over, he spoke in a serious tone. "Here is the sword you asked for. I made it exactly the way you asked, but please be careful with it. The moment it hits a magic-filled sword, it will break right away." Cleans quietly took the sword into his hands and looked it over for a moment before replying without pausing, "Good, then let's head out right away." At the same time, excitement had already spread all through the whole arena. Every person gathered there was talking about the same thing, the fact that Cleans had finally decided to show up in person. The air was full of wonder and excitement as countless eyes turned toward the battlefield. The scene then shifted toward the nobles sitting high above the arena. One of them looked toward Cleans's father and said with clear surprise, "To think you'd actually come out in person." Then turning slightly toward him again, he continued with a small smile, "But are you truly okay with this? My champion is a knight from the Empire. He might be a bit too much for your son with no magic. It's still not too late to send out Lord Delan instead, don't you think?" However, Cleans's father showed absolutely no reaction to those words. His face remained calm and completely still, as if his mind was already made up long ago. Meanwhile, Cleans continued walking toward the ring, his eyes searching the area as thoughts ran through his head. "Anyway, where is he? Hasn't my opponent come out yet?" But the very next moment, a giant shadow suddenly fell over him. A massive man built like a monster stepped forward. His body looked like solid steel, muscles pushing tightly against his clothes like a true fighter made for battle. Slowly, he placed one heavy hand on top of Cleans's head and looked down at him with a scary smile before speaking. "So you are Lord Cleans." The story then revealed the name of the terrifying man standing before him. He was none other than Cornwell's champion, Randall. Randall looked down at Cleans with a mean smile stretched across his face before speaking in a teasing voice. "You're much younger than I'd heard. Good, those arms of yours are so thin." His eyes narrowed dangerously as he leaned closer. "I wonder what kind of sound you'll make when your neck snaps." The instant Cleans understood what was happening, he jumped backward at amazing speed, creating distance between them in a single move. The sudden reaction shocked the crowd, and whispers quickly spread across the arena. "What was that just now? Did he just run backward?" Up in the stands, the same nobleman from earlier looked toward Cleans again and spoke with a joyful tone in his voice. "Did you see that, Your Grace? He's already acting like this before the fight has even started. Can he really handle a fight against someone like Randall?" Meanwhile, Randall let out a low laugh before speaking once more. "Oh dear, he already looks completely terrified." But Cleans, while staring at him carefully, was thinking something entirely different in his mind. "It's not that. Damn, that scared me. It reminded me of when that priest grabbed my shoulder last time. I backed away without even realizing it for a second. That bastard is useless right until the very end." At that same moment, from high above the arena, Captain Leah Wren was silently watching everything happen below. Her sharp eyes remained locked on Cleans as the air grew heavier with tension. Just then, one of the guards walked up to her in a hurry and said with worry, "Lady Hellion will be very angry if she finds out about this. We should head back, Captain." However, Leah answered right away without even looking at him, "I don't care. That woman isn't my mother anyway." Then, deep inside her thoughts, another idea crossed her mind. "If he actually beats that knight, I'll give him my lips." But even after thinking that, her eyes did not look away from the ring below. "There's also something I need to check," she quietly added. Meanwhile, down in the arena, Clean stood there feeling the weight of everyone's attention on him. Embarrassment crept across his face as he thought to himself, "This is so embarrassing." Then, trying to act calm and relaxed, he awkwardly spoke up while standing up straight. "Well, you see, I've been suffering from a stiff neck lately," Clean said, straightening himself and speaking with clear annoyance in his voice. "So you'd better not touch my shoulder." But despite the warning, Randall slowly reached his hand forward once again, as if trying to make him mad on purpose. The moment Clean saw that, his face twisted in anger and he quickly snapped back. "I told you not to touch me, you weird bastard. Are your ears stuffed with muscles too?" Cleans asked. "Then again, that's exactly why the Empire threw you away." For a short moment, the whole arena fell silent. Then Randall's face slowly broke into a wild smile. "Excellent," he said in a low voice. "The dirtier your mouth is, the more you'll have to scream with it bit later. The moment those words left his mouth, Randall reached forward and threw a crushing punch straight toward Cleans. His giant fist cut through the air with monster-like force, powerful enough to crush a normal man instantly. However, at that exact moment, Cleans calmly unbuttoned his coat, and in the very next second, boom, Randall's fist smashed straight into the ground, causing a violent, explosion-like crash that broke the stone beneath him. Dust and rocks flew into the air as cracks spread across the arena floor, but Randall's eyes grew wide in surprise. The only thing left in his hand was Cleans's coat. Cleans himself had already vanished from that spot before the attack could hit. The crowd immediately burst into loud shouting. The ground broke. Just what kind of power was that? Wait, look over there. Everyone quickly turned toward the other side of the arena, where Cleans could now be seen standing at a distance with a short sword in his hand. His face remained tight as he stared at Randall carefully. That bastard has a seriously bad temper, Cleans thought. Then deep inside his mind, he began studying the situation calmly. A direct fight is going to be hard, just as I expected. If I take even one hit from that giant body, I'll be the one blown apart. I hate to say it, but this isn't a situation where I can afford to take it easy. Meanwhile, the crowd continued whispering nervously among themselves as they watched the huge difference in pure power between the two fighters. I think he dodged that pretty well, but how is he supposed to beat a monster like that? Another man nearby swallowed hard before speaking in shock. Even a single scratch from that attack would break his bones. Some of the people watching were still whispering among themselves. He's just walking to his death. Nearby, Delan called out his brother's name, and at that moment, he remembered what Cleans had said earlier. You're going to take my place in the trial by combat. That would only give them a legal excuse to kill the Rinland heir. As those words echoed in his mind, Delan silently thought to himself, you're right. The fate of the family is on the line, so I can't just do whatever I want. However, before that thought could even fully settle in his mind, the fight had already begun on the other side of the arena. Randall suddenly rushed forward at a terrifying speed, closing the distance between them in an instant. Cleans immediately drew his sword and launched an attack, but Randall easily stopped the blade with nothing but his bare hand. The pure force behind it shocked everyone watching. In the very next moment, Randall struck back, forcing Cleans to slide backward across the ground. But Randall did not give him even a second to recover. Moving with amazing speed, he appeared right in front of Cleans again and continued attacking without pausing. While making fun of him, Randall smiled meanly. Do you think you can win just by dodging? Cleans was using every drop of strength he had just to block the incoming attacks. Each hit felt heavier than the last, pushing him further and further back. Meanwhile, Randall continued to make fun of him without mercy. Why don't you try using your dark magic? Aren't you the great Ashaman? The moment Randall looked straight into Cleans's eyes, he noticed something strange. Cleans was smiling, not a confident smile nor a happy one, but the kind of smile that carried annoyance and hidden anger. Deep inside, Cleans held onto his thoughts and anger. This is annoying. Should I just use my dark magic and kill them all? After feeling that massive, deadly pressure coming from the boy, even Randall naturally stepped back in fear. Sweat began pouring down his face as his body reacted before his mind could fully understand what he had just felt. The confidence and pride he had shown until now were starting to break. Among the crowd, confused voices immediately began to spread. What did Randall just dodge? No way. He must be going easy on him. But Randall himself knew that was not the truth. Inside his mind, he was struggling to understand what had just happened. What was that just now? There was definitely nothing there. But even though Cleans had not done anything anyone could see, Randall could feel a strong, deadly energy coming from inside him. It was not something he could see with his eyes, yet his gut was screaming at him to stay away. That unseen pressure alone was enough to make fear crawl through his whole body. Seeing Randall suddenly back away like that, the man sitting above the arena clicked his tongue in annoyance and shouted, "What's going on? Why is Randall acting like that?" At that moment, Cleans calmly stepped forward and spoke clearly in front of everyone there. Don't worry, I won't use anything like dark magic because I am a Rinland. This is a place to prove oneself entirely with a sword. He paused for a moment before continuing in a firm voice. Therefore, I won't use dark magic. The moment those words were spoken, shock spread through the whole arena. His father, his friend, and nearly everyone watching from the crowd stared at him in total shock. No one had expected him to say something like that. Until now, many people had looked at him with doubt because of his dark magic. But hearing those words straight from Cleans began to change the mood completely. The crowd's feelings slowly started changing. Then little by little, people began cheering for him. Yeah, this is what a trial by combat should be. The arena that had once been filled with doubt and teasing was now slowly being taken over by excitement and support, all because of Cleans's strong promise. Randall poured even more magic into his blade. The energy around the sword grew sharper and heavier as he got ready for another attack. Staring straight at Cleans, he muttered with confidence, "That brat has no magic." It was then explained why the Imperial sword style was feared across the Empire. The true strength of the Imperial style was in never holding back one's magic. By pushing every sense to its absolute limit, breathing, muscles, blood flow, and reactions, a swordsman could let loose a single burst of explosive power able to hunt down an enemy in an instant. Randall gathered all of his strength into one crushing strike and rushed forward at amazing speed. His whole focus was on ending the fight with a single attack. But at that exact moment, Cleans calmly dodged as he watched Randall's moves. Cleans quietly said, "I can see it." His skill, his magic amount, even the swing of his blade, every last bit of it. To Cleans, Randall's attacks had started to look painfully clear, like an annoying fly. Hearing those words only added to Randall's anger. Once again, he gathered every drop of his strength into another attack. This time, it was even more powerful than before. The force behind it was nearly double the last hit. The moment the attack hit, a giant explosion rocked the arena. Dust and dirt spread everywhere, swallowing the battlefield and blocking everyone's sight. The crowd could barely see anything through the cloud created by the crash. Randall's eyes grew wide in shock. Did he actually read every path of my sword in that short a time? Then suddenly, suddenly, from behind him, Cleans appeared. Moving through the smoke without a sound, Cleans stepped right into Randall's blind spot and got ready to strike back. With a body that size, your back is completely wide open. The next instant, Cleans struck. His timing was perfect. The exactness and smoothness of his move were so amazing that everyone watching was left completely stunned. Even the older, experienced fighters in the arena could hardly believe what they had just seen. Meanwhile, inside his mind, Randall was in total confusion. This makes no sense, this bastard. He doesn't have any magic, so how the hell? Not far away, one of the soldiers standing beside Leah Ren spoke in shock. Did you just see that, Captain? At that moment, Leah Ren herself was blushing slightly as she watched Clean's fight, clearly moved by the amazing skill and confidence he was showing before everyone. After that, the scene shifted to another place where a heavy silence filled the room. In the middle of it, a voice could be heard speaking calmly yet filled with frustration. Normally, I would have stepped in myself. Before anyone else could react, another man quickly answered. Your Grace, that's, but his words were cut short by Cleans's father. I know, he said in a low voice. I shouldn't act on personal feelings. If I step forward now, the pride of the Rinland family will only fall even further. His face grew darker as he continued. But the enemy is a knight from the Empire. Cleans has absolutely no chance of winning. The other man looked worried after hearing that and asked carefully, then why did you allow the fight? For a moment, Cleans's father stayed silent, as if carrying years of regret inside his heart. Then he finally spoke. He stepped forward to defend the honor of his dead mother. His voice was heavy with guilt. Even when he was wrongly called Ashaman and locked away in the church prison, I couldn't save him. His fists tightened slowly. So what right do I have to stop him now? The mood became even heavier. In the end, he continued with sadness, I can't protect anything. Not my child, not my family. Hearing those painful words, the other man quickly tried to comfort him. You don't need to worry, Your Grace. The young master doesn't fight losing battles. Right after that, the scene returned to the present battlefield. The fight was still going on, yet even Cleans's father could not hide the shock in his eyes after seeing what was happening before him. At the same time, the story began to explain the history and nature of the Rinland family. The Rinland family was known as the Northern Sword Family. In order to survive the cruel, frozen lands of the north, they created a sword style that kept magic use to the absolute lowest amount. Every move was made to be as useful as possible, saving strength and magic so they could last through long battles within the harsh, icy fields. On the other hand, the Imperial sword style was completely different. The Imperial sword style was like a wild beast hunting its prey. It was a style built completely around total control, crushing the enemy by letting loose a massive amount of magic all at once and destroying them before they could even move. On the other hand, the Rinland sword style followed a completely different idea. It focused on patience, exact timing, and striking only at the perfect opening while using the smallest amount of magic possible. That was the true heart of the Rinland family's Movest ultimate sword style that did the most damage with the least amount of magic. As this realization spread across the battlefield, Clean spoke calmly while facing Randall directly. This is how someone without magic, can still use my family's moves. His eyes remained steady despite the heavy pressure pouring from his enemy. It might lack power, but it's more than enough to beat down a guy like you. The moment those words reached him, Randall's face twisted with pure anger. Veins popped out across his face as he glared at Cleans wildly. You little rat. At the same time, a massive amount of power suddenly began gathering all through Randall's giant body. Magic rushed violently around him, growing thicker and heavier every second. It was clear that he was getting ready to release every drop of magic he had in a single, crushing attack. From above, the man watching the fight noticed the change right away. His eyes grew wide as he thought to himself, there it is. Randall's secret movie, a magic burst that instantly locked the enemy in place. The pressure on the battlefield kept growing without stopping. The air itself felt heavier as Randall's power continued to rise higher and higher. Then with a wild roar, Randall shouted, don't make me laugh, you bastard. I'm the one who will win. In the very next moment, he exploded forward at a scary speed and closed the distance between himself and Cleans almost instantly. His attack came crashing down with monster-like force, powerful enough to crush his enemy in a single strike. But at the last possible second, Cleans moved. Without panic, he swung his sword with perfect timing and blocked Randall's attack head-on. But there was one thing everyone still remembered about that sword. The warning that had been given earlier at the very beginning of the fight. The moment it hits a magic-filled sword, it will break right away. And exactly as guessed, the instant Cleans blocked Randall's magic attack, cracks spread across the blade before it completely broke apart. Pieces of the broken sword flew through the air. Seeing that, Randall immediately gave a winning smile. Serves you right. With this, your sword is, but before he could even finish his sentence, Cleans suddenly smiled. Yeah, he said calmly. Now it's finally complete, the weapon to hunt you. For a short moment, Randall could not understand what he meant. Then it happened. Cleans moved forward in a flash. Instead of treating the broken weapon as useless, he used the broken blade itself like a short knife made for close-up fighting. Before Randall could properly react, Cleans stepped directly into his space and slashed from point-blank range. A sharp strike flashed through the battlefield. Randall's arm was cut clean off. The cut arm flew through the air as blood splashed everywhere and Randall's face twisted into complete shock and pain. He let out a horrifying scream as he fell backward. At that moment, someone loudly declared, the fight is over. Meanwhile, among the people watching the fight, one man stared at the battlefield in complete shock while thinking to himself, just as the young master said, the Rinland sword style can be used with very little magic, but that should only be possible for a highly trained knight. Yet he perfectly copied everything from the footwork to the path of the sword. And on top of that, he tricked his enemy on purpose into breaking his sword so he could strike from up close. The man could barely believe what he had just seen. No matter how you look at it, this is the young master's perfect victory. On the battlefield, Randall continued screaming loudly in pain after losing his arm. Right away, a group of healers rushed rushed forward toward him in a panic. Hurry up and stop the bleeding. Quickly hold his arm down, cast sleep magic. The whole area became crazy as the healers desperately tried to save him. Meanwhile, Cleans calmly watched the scene before asking, can that be put back on? However, despite his calm voice, he actually looked clearly disappointed. After seeing how bad the wound was, the healers quickly answered, no, it is beyond basic healing magic. We'll have to prepare a fake arm. Hearing that answer, Cleans simply replied, oh really, is that all? At the same time, deep inside his mind, he quietly thought to himself, even after 200 years, healing magic hasn't improved much at all. Then from the other side, his father called out to him with a serious look. You feel nothing after seeing a cut-off arm. The moment Cleans heard those words, his face slightly changed. Right, I'm not Asherman right now, he reminded himself inside his head. After that, Cleans quietly began walking away from the scene as if everything was already over. While moving forward calmly, he thought to himself, should I pretend to be scared now? At that very moment, the true mastermind behind the whole setup finally stepped forward. His face was filled with shock and anger as he shouted, this makes no sense for Randall to lose. Do you even know how much money I spent to hire that night? Before he could continue yelling any further, Cleans's father suddenly spoke from behind in a cold and commanding voice, Count Cornwell. The man immediately turned toward him. As agreed, Cleans's father continued, admit your crimes and fulfill the winner's demands. Count Cornwell's face twisted with frustration and desperation. I've lost my son and my private knight, how can I? But before he could even finish speaking, something horrifying happened. In an instant, it looked as though his head had been cut clean off his body. For a split second, everyone froze. Then the scene focused on Cleans's cold, empty eyes as he stared straight at him. Delin Cornwell. The next moment showed the truth. Delin Cornwell was still alive. His head had not actually been cut off. His whole body shook violently as he wildly touched his neck again and again, unable to understand what had just happened. It had only been a trick of the mind created by the scary pressure of Cleans's power. Yet to him, it felt completely real. Inside his mind, panic exploded. What was that? My neck. Definitely. Sweat poured down his face as fear completely took over. Cleans then stood right in front of him and spoke in a freezing voice. As the winner of this fight, I order you, confess your crimes before the Master of the North and kneel to beg for forgiveness. His voice became even heavier, almost as if death itself was speaking through him. Bow your head and beg for mercy, or you will be crushed under the weight of your crimes and pay for them. The moment those words reached Delin Cornwell's ears, true terror swallowed him. He could almost see death standing right above his head. His whole body shook without stopping. Cold sweat dripped down constantly, and even breathing became hard. Unable to fight back any longer, he finally broke down. I was wrong, he stuttered in fear. My son and I dared to try and hurt young Master Cleans at the same time. The story then revealed the truth behind the scary power Cleans had used. This was originally a voice meant to call upon the souls of the dead man's voice. It was a mind-shaking trick known only to Necromancers, a terrifying power able to force extreme fear into the living. Delin Cornwell completely broke down before Cleans. Shaking uncontrollably, he fell to his knees and bowed his head deeply while begging for forgiveness. Also, I insulted the young master's mother, Grand Duchess Claire, he admitted desperately. Please forgive me. The people watching the scene could hardly believe what they were seeing. One of the crowd stared in total shock and muttered, am I really seeing this right now? To think a leader of the Branch family would break down like that. Meanwhile, Cleans slowly raised his broken sword toward the sky. Even though the blade was broken, the pressure around him only felt heavier than before. Then in front of everyone gathered there, he began speaking with total confidence. Good, it begins from here. His voice rang across the whole battlefield. Everyone standing here, listen closely. A statement of who I am. The air instantly became silent. To set this family right, I am the challenger of this trial by combat and its true winner. His eyes remained completely steady as he continued. The son of Grand Duchess Claire Ladillas and the second son of the North's strongest knight, Hankel Rinlin. Then proudly stating his name before everyone there, he finished, I am Cleans Rinlin. After that powerful speech, the scene shifted to a totally different place. The mood there was much calmer and heavier, almost holy. A man could be seen walking into a quiet hall while nearby a priest was praying softly. We shall go where your light does not reach. Even if the path is dangerous, even if it is painful, please watch over our goals, O God of light. Just then, the man who had walked in stepped forward and spoke. Cardinal Morrow. The priest slowly turned toward him. Yes, Garrison, your voice sounds dark. What is the matter? Garrison's face remained serious as he answered right away. The target we were watching was attacked. The attackers were a necromancer and his dead army. For a brief moment, silence filled the room. I need to look into this, Garrison added firmly. I need to look into this myself. However, Cardinal Morrow showed no sign of worry at all. Instead, he calmly replied, there's no need to worry about that. It was all part of the plan. He was sent in a deal with the Empire. Garrison's eyes narrowed slightly. Cardinal Morrow continued speaking as if explaining something completely normal. A necromancer is a being that naturally causes fear. Those terrified by their appearance will naturally look for God. Countless people will run to our holy order. Then his voice became even colder. Understand this, Garrison. If we can bring back the holy order and spread God's will through just a handful of deaths. But before he could finish his sentence, Garrison suddenly moved. In a flash, he grabbed Cardinal Morrow by the throat with huge force. His eyes were filled with anger as he spoke through tightly closed teeth. A servant of the Holy Temple has fallen for cheap political games and made deals with sinners. The next moment, with nothing but pure strength, Garrison crushed the Cardinal's head completely. Blood splashed all over the room as the body fell dead onto the ground. Right after that, another voice suddenly rang through the area. Do you feel any better? The man slowly stepped forward through the blood-covered hall and looked straight at Garrison before speaking in a calm yet teasing tone. You haven't changed, Garrison Vermin. To think you've killed more church members than the necromancers themselves have. A small smile appeared on his face as he continued. The people of the Holy Order really ought to know what you're hiding inside that gut of yours. The story story then revealed the identity of the man standing there. He was the Archbishop of the Holy Order. Palamon L. Garrison glared at him coldly after hearing those words. Was this your doing, Palamon? Palamon simply answered without pausing. Of course not, I only gave permission for it. Then his face became more serious. And besides, he added, I brought a piece of information about the target you're watching. The moment those words were spoken, Garrison instantly moved to attack him as well. His fist shot forward with enough force to kill a normal man right away. But Palamon's speed was far beyond normal. Before Garrison could even realize what happened, Palamon had already vanished from right in front of him and appeared somewhere else, dodging the hit with complete ease. Then Palamon calmly continued speaking as though nothing had happened. When dark magic is used, it always leaves clues behind. He raised a strange cross-shaped object while explaining, this is the cross holding those clues. It belonged to the necromancer you killed. Garrison's face hardened as he listened carefully. Palamon continued, one of the clues belongs to soul returning arts, a type of dark magic that raises dead to something the Empire is actively studying. Then his voice lowered slightly. But the other clue is different. It looks like the original form of dark magic, one that controls souls instead of dead bodies. Garrison immediately reacted to those words. The original form of dark magic. Yes, Palamon answered calmly. The mood suddenly became much heavier. It means there were two necromancers present at the scene. Then Palamon stared straight into Garrison's eyes and spoke slowly, making sure every word carried its full weight. Listen carefully. Clans Rhineland as a necromancer. After that, we are shown a light drizzle falling from above. Deep inside a dark cave, a faint light could be seen glowing from within. Someone was mining there alone, the sound of metal striking stone echoing through the tunnel. A few moments later, the miner slowly stood up to catch his breath. But the instant he turned around, we suddenly saw a terrifying devilish hand emerging right behind him. Before the man could even fully understand what was happening, the creature instantly attacked him from behind. The scene then shifts toward Little Maid, who looked completely troubled as she stared at something in front of her. With an embarrassed expression, she said, this is a disaster. I ended up making a doll of the young master's face. It looks exactly like him. Despite her words, there was also a strange sense of pride in her voice as she smiled awkwardly. Right in front of her sat Cleanse, calmly going through a pile of documents without paying much attention to her reaction. After that, we are told through Cleanse's narration. A week has passed since the trial by combat, defeating Landel, who came out as the champion with the family's technique, then successfully extracting Count Conwell's confession with the dead man's voice technique, and publicly announcing my existence in front of the Branch family faction. I thought I was finally going to be acknowledged by everyone. However, his expression soon turned exhausted as he continued. But the real problem is that this 15-year-old body lacks the stamina to keep up. Cleanse then glanced toward Little Maid with an annoyed expression before saying, if you're done playing, hurry to your room and sleep. Hearing that, Little Maid immediately puffed her cheeks and complained, you're so mean, young master. You always play by yourself. Clint looked at her in disbelief before replying, what do you mean play? Can't you see I'm reading right now? Little Maid crossed her arms before speaking again. It's just a novel anyway, so you are playing basically. Through Clean's narration, we are then told, well, the cover might look like an ordinary novel, but the inside is filled with my secret notes on anatomy, magic circuits, and spell formations. It's all about necromancy. As he quietly drank his tea, Cleans continued thinking to himself, with my current body, I can summon 11 skeletons at most. My control is stable, but I lack the numbers for a war of attrition. I'll need to research this further. His expression slowly darkened as another thought crossed his mind. The biggest problem is that damn priest bastard. He looked ready to exterminate the very seed of any necromancer. He's already suspicious of me, so I have to somehow regain my original power before he comes looking for me. But how can I do that without getting caught by the others? Right after that, the scene shifts toward his father, who appeared to be discussing an urgent matter. He said, we've received reports of sightings of this at the mine. They're commonly referred to as undead. The moment heard those words, his eyes sharpened. In his mind, he immediately thought, this is it. Without wasting even a second, he directly said to his father, I will go. At the same time, another thought ran through his head. Real combat is the best form of research. Hearing his sudden decision, his father looked slightly concerned before asking, I heard there have been reports of casualties. Will you be all right? Clans calmly answered, it won't be a problem. However, deep inside he was still thinking. After the trial by combat, even Henkel acknowledges me. Besides, if it's the undead, it must be related to the one that attacked me before. This is an opportunity. The scene then shifts toward the mission site itself, where a knight respectfully stood beside him before saying, the Duke has ordered me to accompany you for your safety, young master. Hearing those words, Cleanse silently thought to himself, he should have known. Meanwhile, the knight standing in front of him looked completely relaxed despite the mission as he cheerfully said, anyway, the night sky looks amazing during a mission. A moment later, he offered Cleanse a freshly prepared dish and added, here, have this while it's still hot. Cleanse immediately replied with a calm, no thanks. However, the knight did not give up and awkwardly continued, young master, I should also do some work. Cleanse glanced toward the completely burnt lump sitting near the fire before coldly responding, can't you see that lump of charcoal? You staying still is helping me. Through his narration, Kenz then explained, I learned one unexpected fact during this mission, and it's that Dunnell, the supposed knight commander, is completely useless when it comes to skills like cooking or hunting. Hearing that, Dunnell simply gave an embarrassed smile before lowering his head slightly and saying, I have no face to show you, I don't know what to say. Clen let out a small sigh before replying, forget it, just eat and I'll grill some more in a bit. At the same time, another thought crossed Clint's mind. I've spent over a decade running from the Allied Knight Orders, so this much is nothing. The atmosphere around the campfire slowly became calmer after that. The flames crackled softly while the dark night stretched endlessly above them. It was then that Dunnell suddenly spoke in a more serious tone. When I watch you, young master, master, I feel that you are very different from others your age, hiding your talent with the sword and your spirit during the trial by combat. He paused for a moment before continuing carefully. Because of that, I sometimes think that you might actually be the reincarnation of our chairman. The instant those words were spoken, Cleans's expression changed completely. He immediately looked toward Dunnell and coldly warned him, Dunnell, never say that in front of that priest. Dunnell quickly raised his hands in panic before replying, of course I wouldn't. Archcommand was a demon who turned tens of millions of northerners into undead. Young master, he called out carefully. But before either of them could say anything else, loud screams suddenly echoed from behind them. The two immediately turned around toward the source of the noise, only to see what looked like a horrifying corpse-like creature emerging from the darkness. Inside the village, complete chaos had broken out in every direction. Panic filled the streets as terrified people desperately ran for their lives. We could hear villagers screaming at the top of their lungs, it's the undead. Everyone run! All around them, countless undead creatures were chasing after the villagers with horrifying speed, their twisted bodies moving unnaturally as they attacked anyone in sight. At that very moment, Dunnell suddenly arrived at the scene. The instant he entered the village, he immediately cut down several undead monsters with overwhelming force. His sword moved so quickly that the creatures barely had time to react before being torn apart. He continued charging forward without stopping, slaughtering monster after monster as he pushed deeper into the village. After advancing quite far ahead, Dunnell quickly turned around and shouted, young master. However, right behind him, Cleans was already advancing through the battlefield while eliminating every remaining monster in his path. Unlike the panicked villagers, his expression remained completely calm as he moved forward. While cutting down the undead one after another, he coldly said, what are you doing, Dunnell? Go save the people. Hearing that order, Dunnell immediately straightened himself and responded loudly, yes, sir. Not long after that, the two of them worked together and completely overwhelmed the undead creatures. One after another, every monster in the village was destroyed, and the terrified villagers were finally rescued from the disaster. The atmosphere slowly calmed down as the surviving people gathered together, still unable to believe they had escaped alive. One of the villagers then stepped forward with a grateful yet confused expression and said, thank you for helping us, but who are you? After hearing the question, Dunnell proudly answered, this is the second young master of the Rainland family. The moment the villagers heard the name of the Rainland family, their eyes widened in shock. The atmosphere immediately changed as they stared at, cleansed with disbelief and surprise, but Dunnell quickly shifted the conversation back toward the main issue and seriously asked, more importantly, since when did those things start appearing? Meanwhile, Cleans quietly observed the corpses of the undead lying across the village. After carefully examining them, he calmly said, this is a form of reanimation magic used to revive and control corpses. His eyes slowly narrowed as a realization crossed his mind. As expected, it's the same technique as the one that attacked me in the forest before. Right after that, one of the villagers stepped forward and hurriedly answered, since 2 months ago, it was right after the Count's family restricted access to the mine. People started going missing around that time too. His voice trembled with fear and anger as he continued. Also, those undead are all residents of our village. The moment Cleans heard those words, his expression instantly changed. Shock appeared clearly on his face as he slowly turned back toward the villager and asked, what did you just say? But before anything else could happen, another man suddenly grabbed Cleans tightly by his clothes and shouted directly at him, are you a Rainland? Answer me. I asked if you're really a Rainland. Seeing the man grab Cleans so aggressively, Dunnell immediately stepped forward in anger and yelled, hold on. What do you think you're doing to the young master? Dunnell forcefully pulled the villager backward, trying to separate him from Cleans. However, even then, the man continued screaming in desperation. Let go of me. We begged for help for 2 whole months and we got no word back. And now just the two of you show up only to ask, since when has this been happening? His voice gradually broke apart as tears and rage mixed together. Then he pointed toward one of the corpses lying nearby and shouted, on top of that, the person you just cut down, that's my father. He was talking about the same miner we had seen at the very beginning of the chapter. The villager continued yelling in pain. All he did was work day and night at the mine. Why do we have to suffer like this? Meanwhile, Cleanse stood there silently while countless thoughts ran through his mind. The name Archcommand echoed within his head again and again as his expression slowly darkened. It was clear that anger was beginning to rise inside him. Finally, with cold eyes and an irritated voice, Cleanse said, you're too loud, shut up. Why is any of that my fault? Cleanse coldly continued. I wasn't the one who turned your father and the others into undead, was I? If you want to vent your anger, you should pick the right target. The moment he said those words, flames slowly began emerging from his hand, their glow illuminating the dark surroundings. Seeing this, Dunnell immediately stepped forward and hurriedly said, young master, I'll handle things here. But before Dunnell could finish speaking, Cleanse calmly began chanting in a solemn voice, I command the innocent spirits who died in sorrow. The atmosphere instantly became heavy. Dunnell stared at him in complete shock as Cleanse continued the incantation. I shall light the lantern to illuminate your path. His voice echoed through the silent village while the flames around him flickered unnaturally. I, Klein Reinland, shall uphold your will. Then, raising his glowing hand slightly forward, he declared, so follow my guidance. At that very moment, an unbelievable sight unfolded before everyone's eyes. Blue-colored souls slowly began emerging from inside, the undead bodies lying across the village. One after another, the trapped spirits that had been imprisoned within those corpses finally started breaking free. The glowing souls quietly floated into the air while looking down toward their own lifeless bodies below. Cleans was performing all of this using his own ability. The liberated spirits began speaking softly among themselves, but the language they used was something only could understand. After listening carefully for a moment, Cleanse quietly replied, I understand. The villagers watching this scene were left completely speechless. Shock and disbelief covered every face present there. Then suddenly one one of the people spoke in astonishment, a technique said to have been used 200 years ago during the plague in the north to liberate the dead. Meanwhile, the same villager who had been blaming Cleanse earlier slowly looked toward his father's spirit. The old man turned back toward his son with a gentle smile on his face before his soul gradually drifted away alongside the others. Right after that, we are shown one of the spirits pointing toward the mountains while saying, "The mine is that way. If you go straight up that mountain path later while following behind Cleanse," Dunkel finally broke the silence and asked, "What did you talk about with the spirits earlier?" Cleanse calmly replied, "Nothing much, it was just the spirits thanking me for helping them pass on." For a brief moment, his expression darkened before he added, "And pleading with me to get revenge." Dunkel quietly repeated the word revenge. At that instant, memories from earlier flashed through his mind. He remembered asking Cleanse, "You might actually be the reincarnation of Archcommand," and Cleanse replying with visible anger, "Never speak of that matter." The suspicion inside Dunkel's heart only grew stronger. Suddenly, he unsheathed his sword and directly placed the blade against Klee's neck before coldly asking, "So let me ask you this. Who exactly are you?" After that, the story shifted into the past. Inside the grand estate, voices filled the halls as people whispered among themselves in fear and disbelief. Is this boy Lord Clen Rhineland? The young master who had been locked away in the monastery for 7 years has finally returned to the estate. The cursed young master who calls himself Archimet. But what disturbed everyone the most was not his return. It was his eyes. His pitch-black gaze looked so empty, so close to complete nothingness that it was hard to believe those eyes belonged to a young child. Anyone who looked at him felt an unexplainable chill creeping down their spine, and perhaps everything truly began from that very day. The first dead cat was discovered inside the estate's kitchen. The second one was later found in the backyard garden. Then another appeared the following day, one after another. The bodies kept appearing until a total of 7 dead cats had been found throughout the estate. Fear quickly spread among the servants and nobles. I heard he used necromancy the moment he was born. They say his mother's bloodline was involved with dark magic. Didn't he say his name was Archaman? See, the rumors were true all along. It's a cursed bloodline. Before long, everyone in the estate had begun suspecting a single person. Yet despite the growing tension and terrifying rumors surrounding him, the young master himself showed no reaction at all. Ever since returning to the estate, Clans had done nothing but quietly stare out the window in silence, as if the whispers of the people around him held absolutely no meaning to him. One of the knights spoke in a low voice, just as everyone says, the young master is suspected of being Archimand, but he's still too young. He probably has nothing to do with these incidents. That night, while the entire estate slept under the darkness of midnight, Dunnel suddenly noticed someone walking alone through the halls. Young master, where is he going at this hour? Cleanse did not stop or look back. Without saying a word, he continued walking deeper into the darkness. Feeling uneasy, Dunnel quietly followed behind him while keeping his distance. After some time, Cleans finally arrived at a place that made Dunnel freeze in surprise. The cemetery. Why did he come here? The moonlight barely reached through the rows of old tombstones, making it difficult to see clearly. I can't see him properly because of these gravestones. Should I get closer and check? Carefully stepping forward, the uncle moved between the tombstones until he finally got a clear look at the young master. And the moment he saw the scene in front of him, his eyes widened in shock. What in the world is this? There, surrounded by the dead cats, stood young Master Clans. He seemed to be quietly preparing something. Beside their small, lifeless bodies, hearing Dunnel's voice, Ken slowly turned around and looked back at him with those same dark, emotionless eyes. Then in a calm and quiet voice he replied, "I'm going to perform funeral rites for them." Now stared at the scene in confusion before speaking again. "Pardon? Funeral rites?" Cleans quietly looked down at the dead cats lying before him and calmly explained. "Looking at the lesions, this is an infectious disease. It's harmless to humans but fatal to animals. If these bodies are left alone, the disease will continue to spread. Other beasts might dig them up as well." Hearing that, Dunnel's expression slightly changed. For a moment, he simply watched the young master kneeling there in the cold cemetery at the dead of night, personally handling the infected corpses with his own hands. "It will ruin your hands," Dunnel said with concern. "We should call someone else to handle this." But Cleanse slowly shook his head. "Someone has to do it anyway." His voice remained calm and emotionless, yet strangely sincere. "A job that someone must do." And with those words, the story from the past slowly came to an end. The scene then returned to the present. The atmosphere had become incredibly tense. Dunnel stood facing Cleanse with his sword pressed directly against his neck. His sharp eyes were filled with suspicion, hesitation, and confusion as he demanded an answer. "Tell me, on who exactly are you?" After hearing those words, young master remained completely calm. Rather than answering immediately, he quietly looked at Dunnel and spoke in a composed voice. "Let me ask you something first. Do you remember the very first saying of Berkel Rinland?" Dunnel answered without hesitation, as if those words had long been engraved into his heart. "It is one's actions, not their roots, that define a being." Cleans gave a faint nod. "Yes, that's right." Then he slowly continued speaking. "The reason you, a poor peasant, were able to rise and become the captain of the knights, and the reason I, the son of a foreign mother, am still alive today is because of those very words." The silence between them grew heavier. "Since leaving the monastery, the person who has spent the most time by my side has been you, Dunnel." Cleanse looked directly into his eyes as he continued. "So you decide. If you truly believe that I am Archimand, then strike me down." The moment those words left his mouth, the tension in the air became suffocatingly heavy. Dunnel's sword remained still for several seconds before at last he slowly lowered it. However, even then the doubt in his eyes had not completely disappeared. "I haven't decided yet," Dunnel said firmly, "and I am certainly not convinced." He tightened his grip on the sword before continuing in a cold voice. "However, the one I serve as the second young master of Rhineland. Clean, not some atrocious devil feared across the continent." After hearing Dunnel's words, Clans quietly turned his head and looked deeper into the darkness ahead of them before calmly saying, "We need to move forward." The two of them then continued deeper inside the underground passage. passage. As they walked further in, the atmosphere gradually became colder and heavier, almost as if death itself filled the air around them. Inside his mind, Clan silently thought, "I see. Thanks for the compliment." The deeper they went, the darker the surroundings became. Realizing they could barely see anything ahead, Dunnel lit a torch. The orange flames flickered against the stone walls, finally revealing the horrifying sight hidden within the darkness. It smells like corpses. Scattered all around them were countless dead bodies. To be more precise, many of them had already decayed into skeletons. Bones were piled across the ground in every direction, creating an eerie and disturbing scene. But then Dunnel suddenly noticed movement ahead. Some of the corpses in front of them were slowly beginning to move. The moment he realized that, his expression hardened. "I can see 7 of them. There must be more deeper inside." At that moment, Clint calmly stepped forward and began chanting in a cold, composed voice, "I call upon you. Answer me." Then his voice echoed through the dark chamber once more. "I grant you flesh to crush your enemies." The instant those words were spoken, the skeletons lying across the ground suddenly began to react. One after another, the undead bodies rose from the floor and rushed forward toward the enemies ahead. Dunnel's eyes widened in complete shock as the battle instantly erupted. The undead creatures violently clashed against each other inside the narrow underground chamber. Bones shattered, weapons collided, and horrifying growls echoed through the darkness as the corpses tore into one another. Watching the scene unfold before his eyes, Dunnel could barely believe what he was seeing. This makes no sense. Skeletons that look like that actually exist. Cleans glanced at him after hearing that and calmly replied, "Dalton's mercenary said the same thing." Then with the slightest hint of amusement in his voice, he added, "Is it really that fascinating?" Not long after, the battle finally came to an end. The remaining undead collapsed onto the ground one after another, their bodies crumbling apart as silence slowly returned to the chamber. He immediately stepped forward while raising the torch higher to illuminate the path ahead. "Young master, this way." As the horrifying sounds echoed deeper from within the underground ruins, the uncle immediately tightened his grip on his sword and carefully listened to the movements ahead. Judging by the sound, there are around 40 of them. His expression darkened as he quickly realized the situation they were facing. We're outnumbered. However, unlike Dunkel, Cleans remained completely calm. Without even the slightest trace of panic, he slowly raised his hand and began chanting once again in a cold, commanding voice, "I release the bindings that shroud your bodies." The air around them suddenly grew heavy as dark energy spread across the battlefield. "Free your souls bound in agony and obey my command." At that moment, the exact same scene that had once been shown before unfolded again. The defeated undead bodies scattered across the ground suddenly began moving once more under Clint's control. Dunnel watched the scene with widened eyes. "Young master, is this?" Clans calmly answered while keeping his eyes fixed ahead, converting subdued undead into allies. Then he continued as though explaining something completely ordinary. "It's a basic tactic when necromancers fight each other." After saying that, Clans glanced at the growing number of undead now standing under his command and quietly muttered, "Well, this should be enough to put up a fight." Then, without hesitation, he gave his orders. Vanguard charged forward. The skeleton soldiers immediately rushed ahead like disciplined warriors responding to a commander's call. The uncles were running too. The two of them immediately moved forward behind the advancing undead army. As they pushed deeper into the ruins, even more undead creatures appeared from the darkness ahead. Grotesque corpses and skeletons flooded the narrow passageways from every direction. But even then, Cleans's army continued advancing without stopping. The undead under his command clashed directly against the enemies, tearing through the hostile forces with frightening coordination. Bones shattered, rusted weapons collided, and horrifying cries echoed endlessly through the underground corridors. Watching everything unfold before him, Dunnel could hardly believe his own eyes. Rear guard, support the attack. Cleans continued giving commands with absolute precision. Keep breaking through. And every single skeleton obeyed perfectly, moving exactly like trained soldiers on an actual battlefield. As Dunnel fought alongside them, he could not stop the thoughts running through his mind. It's hard to believe this even while watching it happen. He cut down another undead before continuing his thoughts. Skeletons are considered low tier even among the undead, yet the scene in front of him completely shattered that common belief. But they can move like this just like a real army. The more he watched, the more impossible it all felt. The skeletons weren't fighting like mindless monsters. They moved with coordination, strategy, and discipline, almost as if they were veteran soldiers following a perfect commander. Before long, the battle finally came to an end. Countless undead enemies lying before them had been completely annihilated. As silence slowly returned to the underground ruins, Dunnel stared at the overwhelming destruction around them in disbelief. We annihilated a force more than 4 times our size. Even now, he still struggled to fully understand what he had just witnessed. What in the world is this? But Clan simply looked deeper into the darkness ahead before calmly speaking once more. "From here on out, it's just the two of us." Cleans calmly continued speaking as the two of them moved deeper into the underground ruins. "You said you would believe in me." Then he looked straight ahead into the darkness and added in a quiet but firm voice, "Then believe in me until the very end." Dunnel silently followed beside him before eventually speaking again. "While observing their surroundings, it seems we've come quite deep already. How much farther do we need to go?" But before Clans could answer, something suddenly fell from above. A drop of blood landed directly onto Dunnel's face. His expression instantly hardened. Slowly raising his torch toward the ceiling ahead, he cautiously stepped forward. "There's someone here." However, the moment the light illuminated the area before them, Dunnel froze in horror. Dozens of dead bodies were hanging from ropes above them. The corpses swayed slightly in the darkness, their lifeless bodies dripping blood onto the cold stone floor below. The horrifying smell of decay filled the air so heavily that it became difficult to breathe. Dunnel stared at the gruesome scene in disbelief. "What in the world is all this?" Cleans quietly looked at the hanging corpses before calmly explaining the truth. "It looks like these are the villagers who were reported missing." His voice voice remained cold and steady. They were kidnapped and used as materials for reanimation magic. At that exact moment, another voice suddenly echoed through the chamber as expected. You understand it very well. Both Clans and Dunnel immediately turned toward the source of the voice. From the darkness ahead, a witch slowly revealed herself. A sinister smile appeared on her face as she began speaking. Reanimation magic is a spell that revives corpses and turns them into one's familiars. She slowly spread her arms while looking proudly at the horrifying scene around her. That's why it requires a massive quantity of high-quality bodies. Then she looked directly at Cleans and smiled even wider. It's basic knowledge among us necromancers, isn't it? The atmosphere instantly became much heavier. I never imagined I would meet you in a place like this. Her eyes narrowed as she addressed him with a title that should never have been spoken aloud. It's been a long time, Devil of the Continent. Then with complete certainty, she called him by another name, Lord Archaman. The moment those words reached his ears, Clen's expression completely changed. For the first time, genuine shock appeared on his face, and just then, the story once again shifted into the past. The scene changed back to the Rhineland estate. Dunkel was standing beside Clans as he spoke respectfully. Shall we head straight to his grace, the Duke? After hearing that, Clans calmly replied, let me change my clothes first. Dunnel quietly nodded, but at that moment, Clen suddenly felt a strange presence nearby. The clan's failure was once the continent's strongest. Inside his mind, he thought, I thought someone was there. And indeed, someone had been watching him. At that very moment, Liar Ren was secretly present nearby, silently observing everything from the shadows. Then, as the scene continued, we were finally told one important truth: Necromancer. The story then began explaining the true origin of necromancers derived from the words corpse necros and divination. The term originally referred to those who summoned souls in order to receive prophecies and oracles from the dead. In ancient times, necromancers were feared, but they were not yet seen as absolute monsters. However, everything changed after that day. The world was thrown into terror during the great catastrophe known across the continent as the Archaman incident. It was a disaster unlike anything humanity had ever witnessed before. Tens of millions of undead suddenly invaded the entire continent. The army was beyond human understanding. They neither ate nor rested. They did not fear pain, exhaustion, or even death itself. Conventional warfare became completely meaningless against them. Cities fell one after another. Kingdoms collapsed beneath the endless tide of undead. No matter how many enemies were slain, more would continue rising endlessly from the battlefield. The continent itself was pushed to the brink of destruction as the terrifying undead army devoured everything in its path. And standing above that horrifying force was a single being, Archimand, the master who commanded the dead. The war only came to an end when the legendary hero Berkel Rinland finally succeeded in striking down Archimand himself. After the catastrophe ended, countless people became fascinated by the terrifying power necromancy possessed. One after another, they attempted to research and recreate those forbidden arts. However, in the end, the only thing modern necromancers managed to reproduce was reanimation magic. Because of that, today's necromancers had been reduced to nothing more than second-rate magicians who merely raised corpses to use as disposable soldiers, just like the necromancer currently standing before Cleans. The scene then returned to the present. The red-haired woman slowly stepped forward with a mysterious smile on her face before elegantly introducing herself. It has been a while, Lord Archaman. Her crimson eyes quietly stared at Cleans. I'm Pale, a necromancer. The moment those words were spoken, Dunnel's expression changed completely. The shock on his face was impossible to hide. Archimand, but before he could even fully process those words, another terrifying detail immediately caught his attention. His eyes slightly narrowed as he sensed the overwhelming power surrounding her. You're right, he quietly admitted. His gaze moved toward the robe she was wearing. It's an incredible amount of mana. Then, after observing her more carefully, he continued, she infused magic directly into her robe. As far as I know, they are the only ones capable of imbuing mana into soft materials. Realizing the danger standing before them, Dunnel immediately stepped forward and pointed his sword directly toward Pale. You there? His voice echoed sharply through the underground chamber. This is young Master Clean. His expression hardened with anger. Don't you dare call him by the name of scum like Archamand. For a brief moment, silence filled the room. Then, after noticing Clement's reaction, the red-haired woman suddenly smiled mischievously and lightly laughed. I was only joking. Her tone sounded playful, yet something about her presence still felt deeply unsettling. I suppose it was rude toward the young master of Rainland, but then her smile slowly faded as she continued speaking in a much calmer voice. Still, I do know. Her eyes focused directly on Cleanse. The rumors surrounding you, then she slightly narrowed her eyes. And the unfamiliar magic I sensed just now. You are definitely a necromancer just like me. The red-haired woman continued speaking while staring directly at Cleans with great interest. But how should I put it? For a necromancer to use a sword? Her smile slowly widened as though she found the very idea amusing. However, before she could continue any further, Dunnel suddenly stepped forward and interrupted her with an angry voice. Stop spouting nonsense and answer the question. His sword remained pointed directly toward her. What did you do to those people? His expression became even colder as he shouted once more. And who put you up to this? But the red-haired necromancer completely ignored his questions. Instead, she slowly raised her hand while calmly continuing her own explanation. A true necromancer does not rely on tools. Dark mana began spreading from her body in every direction. We command souls. The air inside the underground chamber instantly became heavier and controlled death. The moment she released her energy, all the corpses hanging around the room suddenly began reacting violently. The dead bodies twitched unnaturally while dark magic spread through them like a curse. Bones cracked, flesh twisted. The entire chamber started trembling beneath the overwhelming amount of mana. Dunnel immediately stepped back in alarm as the horrifying scene unfolded before them. The woman slowly spread her arms as if proudly presenting presenting her greatest creation. So let me show you. A terrifying smile appeared across her face. The true meaning of necromancy. Then in a voice filled with obsession and madness, she declared the masterpiece I dedicated my entire life to. At that exact moment, something massive began emerging from the darkness ahead. First, an enormous hand appeared. Then gigantic legs slowly stepped forward, causing the entire underground chamber to shake violently with every movement. The creature was so huge that even the ceiling itself seemed too small to contain it. Dunk stared at the monster in complete disbelief. This is insane. His voice trembled slightly. I have never seen anything like this even on the battlefield. The gigantic creature slowly revealed its full form from the darkness. A massive one-eyed monster. Dunnell's eyes widened as realization finally struck him. That's definitely a cyclops. Meanwhile, the red-haired necromancer gently approached the gigantic monster as if comforting a beloved pet. Her voice suddenly became strangely soft and affectionate. Come here, baby. The enormous cyclops lowered itself slightly toward her. I'm so sorry. She gently placed her hand against its massive body. It must have been difficult holding yourself back this whole time, right? Then she slowly pointed toward Cleans and Dunnell standing ahead. Her smile twisted into something terrifying. I have a favor to ask you. The cyclops let out a deep, monstrous growl that echoed throughout the underground ruins, and then with cold excitement in her voice, she gave the order, crush those two into a pulp. The enormous monster immediately began charging toward Cleans and Dunnell with terrifying speed, its massive footsteps shaking the entire underground chamber as if an earthquake were tearing through the ruins. The moment Dunnell saw the cyclops move, his eyes widened in shock. It's incredibly fast. The gigantic creature closed the distance between them almost instantly, and as soon as Dunkel realized that the young master's life was in immediate danger, he shouted at the top of his lungs, "It's dangerous, young master." But in that exact moment, Clen suddenly pushed Dunnell away with all his strength. Dunnell's body was thrown backward across the ground, just as the cyclops' devastating attack came crashing down directly onto Cleans instead. The impact violently shook the underground ruins. Cleans was sent flying far into the distance, before crashing heavily against the stone floor. Dust and debris scattered everywhere, and his condition instantly became terrible from taking the attack head-on. Meanwhile, the gigantic cyclops slowly stood before him once again. The monster raised its enormous arm, preparing to crush Cleans completely before he could even recover. But before the attack could land, Dunnell suddenly appeared between them. With a furious roar, he swung his sword with all his strength directly toward the cyclops. Stay away from the young master. The powerful slash struck the monster head-on, creating a loud impact that echoed throughout the chamber. Seeing this, even Cleans looked momentarily surprised. At the same time, the red-haired witch calmly watched the battle from a distance with amusement in her eyes. That was a splendid strike, Mr. Knight. Her smile slowly widened. But with that level of talent, you can't even leave a scratch on my masterpiece. And Dunnell's expression immediately stiffened after hearing her words, because at that very moment he saw it happen with his own eyes. The cyclops' injured leg was regenerating. Its flesh twisted unnaturally before restoring itself completely as though the damage had never existed in the first place. Dunkel stared at it in disbelief. Its leg is growing back. For a brief second, fear crossed his mind, but then his eyes slowly shifted toward Cleanse, lying injured behind him. Doesn't matter. His grip on the sword tightened. The young master threw himself into danger to save me. The thought alone shook Uncle deeply with a body that doesn't even possess a trace of mana. He lowered his head slightly in shame. I can't believe I actually dared to suspect someone like him of being Archaman. The guilt inside his heart became heavier than ever before. Meanwhile, the gigantic cyclops once again charged toward them with monstrous force. Dunkel immediately rushed forward to stop it. He unleashed countless rapid strikes across the monster's massive body, his sword moving faster and faster as sparks flew with every impact. Slash after slash crashed against the cyclops relentlessly. Yet no matter how many times he attacked, it felt completely meaningless. Still, Dunnell refused to stop. There is only one way to repay this shame. His breathing grew heavier as he continued fighting desperately. I will put my life on the line. Another powerful strike landed and protect the young master. After unleashing countless attacks, a small wound finally appeared on the monster's body. But before Dunnell could even feel relieved, the flesh immediately began regenerating once again right before his eyes. The wound disappeared completely within moments. Dunnell's eyes widened in frustration and disbelief. Damn it. His expression darkened as he watched the monster regenerate once more. The battle continued, growing more and more intense. Even after realizing the Cyclops possessed terrifying regenerative abilities, Dunnell still refused to give up. He rushed forward once again and unleashed several more powerful strikes against the gigantic monster. His sword repeatedly crashed against its massive body with tremendous force. But no matter how many attacks he landed, none of them had any real effect. The Cyclops simply kept moving forward as though it were completely unstoppable. Then in the very next moment, the monster swung one of its enormous arms toward Dunnell. Boom! The devastating attack struck him directly. Dunnell's body was violently thrown across the underground chamber, smashing heavily against the stone walls before collapsing onto the ground. His condition instantly became terrible from the impact. Watching this scene unfold, the red-haired necromancer slowly smiled. It truly is beyond my imagination. Her eyes were filled with obsession and pride as she looked toward the gigantic creature she had created. Pale is deeply moved. The story then revealed the truth behind her madness. Her endless obsession with necromancy had consumed her entire life. After conducting countless experiments and pursuing forbidden knowledge far beyond ordinary understanding, her research had eventually surpassed the limits of conventional necromancy itself. And finally, she succeeded in creating a completely unique variant that nobody else could ever replicate. Because of that, she believed something with absolute certainty. This is innate talent. Her voice trembled with excitement. Not even the Archaman himself could create something like this. Her smile twisted with overwhelming overwhelming pride and arrogance. I have surpassed Archimonde's knowledge. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, the Cyclops slowly lifted Dunnell's broken body into the air with one massive hand, preparing to crush him completely. But at that exact moment, a calm voice suddenly echoed through the chamber. Core connection point. Clem slowly walked forward while speaking calmly as though he were explaining something simple. That's the first key to synthesizing a Cyclops. The monster continued holding Dunnell in the air while Cleans kept walking toward it without fear. The second is the core suture. His eyes remained completely focused on the Cyclops. That's why its limbs regenerate even after being cut off. Then he quietly added, it's also the source of its regenerative power. The atmosphere suddenly changed. Even Pale's expression slowly stiffened as she listened to him. So how do you kill that thing? Cleans calmly continued explaining the answer himself. Attacking its body directly like Dunnell did is pointless. He slowly raised his weapon. All it takes is destroying a single core and it's over. Pale's eyes widened slightly. Then where exactly is that core? Clans answered immediately. A Cyclops core never stays in one place. His gaze sharpened because that single point is directly connected to its death. It constantly moves throughout the body. He took another step forward just like blood flowing through veins. The moment those words were spoken, Pale's confident expression finally began cracking apart. That's impossible, she shouted, finding it is impossible because it never stops moving. Then she desperately pointed toward her masterpiece once more. And didn't you hear what I said earlier? Her voice became louder and more unstable. This is the masterpiece I devoted my entire life to creating. She stretched out her hand and gave another order filled with killing intent. In the face of true talent, you're nothing. Then she screamed at the Cyclops, crush him. At that very moment, Cleans quietly closed his eyes for a brief second. Memories from his previous life flashed through his mind. Memories of slaughtering thousands upon thousands of Cyclopes across countless battlefields. The sensation remained so vivid that it felt as though it had happened only yesterday. He simply needed to trust those instincts once again. Then in a single instant, Cleans moved. A sharp flash cut through the darkness. Before anyone could even react, his attack pierced directly through the Cyclops' moving core with absolute precision. Crack. The core shattered completely. The gigantic monster suddenly froze in place. Then its massive body began collapsing part piece by piece before crashing lifelessly onto the ground. Silence filled the underground chamber. Hale stared at the destroyed Cyclops in complete disbelief. What exactly are you? Her voice trembled as fear finally appeared on her face for the very first time. Cleans calmly looked at her and answered coldly, if this is what you devoted your entire life to creating. His eyes remained emotionless, then perhaps you should make it a hobby in your next life. After that, in a completely different dimension, a voice could be heard speaking. Death is often compared to falling asleep, just as a body soaked with fatigue is released from the weight of everyday life perhaps. It is also thought that a body soaked in life is freed from its karma. At that moment, the red-haired witch slowly opened her eyes. Her gaze wandered across the strange place surrounding her. Countless coffin-like boxes floated through the endless space around her. Looking around in confusion, she muttered, where am I? The mysterious voice answered her calmly, you have awakened. This is the place beyond the world where souls arrive the afterlife. Standing there was cleansed in his former appearance. The one speaking to her all this time had been him. The red-haired witch immediately frowned and shouted, the afterlife. Stop talking nonsense and get me out of here right now. Holding his weapon while standing among the floating coffins, Cleans looked at her with a cold expression. Saying you want to leave means you still do not understand the situation. So shall we begin? The judgment of your sins. The moment those words reached her ears, the witch's expression completely changed. Her confidence vanished and panic began to spread across her face. In the name of Archimonde, as soon as she spoke that name, countless thoughts raced through her mind. The judgment of my sins. No, I just said Archimonde. Pale knew that name. It was a name recorded throughout history and feared by generations. The name that appeared within the ancient textbooks of necromancers. The name of a catastrophe that had once shaken the entire continent. The monarch who created an unprecedented army of death. The demon of the continent. The beginning and the end of all necromancy. The one who commanded tens of millions of undead. The king of the necromancers. Even now, the mere mention of that legendary existence was enough to send fear through the hearts of those who understood what that name truly meant. His legend had transcended time, becoming a symbol of terror, destruction, and absolute mastery over death itself. Clem spoke again in a deep and heavy voice that seemed to echo through the endless space. Come closer. The moment those words reached her ears, the red-haired witch was overcome with fear. Her body trembled and an uneasy feeling spread through her entire being. Yet before she could react, Cleanse in his former form continued speaking, Necromancer Pale. The witch's eyes widened in shock and confusion. Why does my body move on its own? No matter how hard she resisted, she could feel herself being pulled forward against her will as though an invisible force had taken complete control of her movements. Clean stared directly at her and continued his judgment. You turned innocent people into test subjects. You kidnapped and tortured them to use as tools and kept them tied up so they could not die, all to satisfy your desires. Every word struck her like a blade cutting deeper into her mind. No, that cannot be. Her voice shook as she desperately tried to deny everything. Archimonde is dead, isn't he? And that was 200 years ago. She covered her ears with both hands, trying to block out his voice, but it was useless. His words continued to reach her as clearly as before, echoing directly inside her mind. You even use the dead as tools, so from now on you will become my tool. At that moment, the countless coffin boxes floating throughout the afterlife began descending from above. One after another, they moved downward until they surrounded her completely. Then the door of one coffin slowly opened. A terrifying force emerged from within and immediately began pulling the red-haired witch toward the darkness inside. She struggled desperately, trying to resist while shouting for everything to stop. Wait, stop. What does any of this even mean? Why would I become your tool? But no answer came. The pull only grew stronger until she was dragged completely into the coffin. Finally, the door slammed shut. The sound echoed throughout the endless afterlife like the final judgment of a condemned soul. Then the mysterious voice spoke one last time. Are you afraid of dying? If so, rest assured we will meet again soon. At the same moment, a sharp snap echoed through the darkness. Immediately afterward, the screams of the red-haired witch could be heard reverberating through the afterlife, growing fainter and fainter until they disappeared completely. The scene suddenly shifted back to the present. Back in the real world, the red-haired woman abruptly opened her eyes. Her body jolted as if she had just escaped from a nightmare. Her breathing was heavy and her heart pounded violently inside her chest. She looked around in confusion, still trying to understand what had happened. Then she whispered, "Is this mine, the truth?" A look of realization appeared on her face. "I did not die, that was only a dream, I am alive." Dunnell stared at the scene in complete disbelief. His eyes were fixed on the remains before him as he muttered, "I can't believe only his head actually survived." A look of confusion appeared on his face as he looked around at the devastation surrounding them. What the hell is this? Meanwhile, Cleans remained calm as he silently observed everything around him. Inside his mind, Dunnell was struggling to understand what had happened. "I lost consciousness for a moment, but what on earth happened here? Did the young master do all this by himself?" No matter how much he thought about it, the answer seemed impossible to believe. Nearby, the red-haired woman finally spoke, her voice filled with confusion and panic. "What in the world is going on here?" Clans ignored her question and turned toward Dunnell. "Let's begin, Dunnell." At once, Dunnell straightened himself and responded without hesitation, "Yes, young master." The red-haired woman could no longer hold herself back. She began shouting desperately, "How did this happen to me? How could this happen?" Cleans finally looked at her and spoke in a cold and indifferent tone. "Are you finally regaining your sanity? You should already realize your situation." The instant she heard his voice, her entire body froze. That voice. It was the exact same voice she had heard inside her mind. As fear began rising inside her once again, her vision blurred. Standing behind Cleans, she could suddenly see that terrifying former version of him once more. The figure from the afterlife looked directly at her and said, "I told you we would meet again. If we're done, let's go. I'm fed up with this girl." As if the matter was already settled, Cleans immediately turned around and started walking away. The witch desperately called out to stop him. "Wait, tell me quickly. What exactly happened to me? I told you everything you wanted to know." At her desperate plea, both Clans and Dunkel slowly turned back. A faint smile appeared on their faces. Then Cleans replied calmly, "I promised to kill you, didn't I? Don't worry, I keep my promises, only it lasts a week or so." As he spoke, he stretched one hand forward and a dark energy began flowing from it. "They will take care of killing you." The moment those words left his mouth, countless cockroaches suddenly began swarming forward from every direction. They crawled across the ground like a living black tide, moving straight toward the woman's body and even toward her severed head. The horrifying sight instantly shattered the last remnants of her composure. She began screaming at the top of her lungs. Her terrified cries echoed throughout the area as the endless swarm continued advancing toward her. And with those desperate screams filling the air, the scene slowly shifted away to the next moment. Rhineland residence. Back at the Rhineland residence, Cleanse stood before his father while a detailed report lay open in the Lord's hands. His father carefully read through every page before finally speaking in a low and serious voice. "Did the Empire unleash necromancers in the north? And did the Holy Order turn a blind eye to it? Is this true?" Standing respectfully before him, Clans answered without hesitation, "Yes, it is exactly as writ. The undead in the mine, including the test subjects, numbered around 150. Almost 30 people disappeared in the village. We visited alone, so it must be even worse elsewhere. In addition to that, the nobles who should be resolving this are too busy fighting over political power." The room fell silent for a moment as Cleans's father absorbed the gravity of the situation. Then he turned toward his butler. "Berkemen, dispatch the order of knights to the places Clean mentioned." The butler immediately bowed. "Yes, sir. Should I request reinforcements from the border as well? Send them a letter. It is better than doing nothing." After giving his orders, Cleans's father looked back at his son. For the first time, a trace of approval appeared in his eyes. "You've accomplished a great feat, Clean." Hearing those words, Ken calmly shook his head. "It was only a stroke of luck. If it were not for Dunnell, I would have died there. As the situation has grown more serious, we have decided to remain silent about the necromancy for the time being. That is assuming Dunnell keeps it secret." Of course, his father listened quietly before reaching into his desk and taking out a small object. He held it out toward Cleanse. "Keep this. I originally planned to give you a few more missions, but it seems that is no longer necessary. It is the badge of a Rhineland knight. For now, you will begin as an apprentice knight. Considering what you have accomplished, perhaps this is not enough." Cleans accepted the badge respectfully. "It is more than enough." His father stared at him for a few moments before giving a small nod. "I see you must be tired. Go and get some rest." Cleanse lowered his head respectfully. "Thank you, father." With that, he turned and left the room. As soon as the door closed, the butler finally spoke. In a confined space, he faced over 70 common undead, a giant type undead, and even an armed Negro march. Even considering Commander Dunnell's combat power, this is before he could finish his sentence. Cleans's father interrupted him. "Send Luna a letter to my brother." The butler blinked in surprise. "Excuse me, but he is. I know he is not the type to come for just any reason, so tell him this. The genius you've been looking for your whole life is here." The scene shifted. A lively atmosphere filled the area as Cleans slowly walked forward through the grounds. Unlike the Duke's residence where outsiders can come and go freely, the place where the knights are stationed is a classified military zone. Even someone like Garrison will not be able to enter without permission. That bastard must still suspect me. He is probably already itching to perform a purification ritual. What a shame. You will never see me again. His expression hardened slightly as old memories resurfaced. "I had already made my decision the day I killed Dalton Rhineland. I decided to restore this family to its former glory. Now that I am an apprentice knight, the next step is suddenly someone shouted his name from behind." Cleans turned around and immediately saw a familiar little red-haired girl rushing toward him at full speed. "What's wrong?" wrong, Aaron? Are the cookies all gone in your room? Ain nearly collapsed from frustration. You just broke my seventh vertebra. Inside her mind, she screamed. Do you seriously think cookies are the only thing I care about, young master? Completely missing her point, Clint casually replied, well, I do not know. Go to the kitchen and ask for more. Aaron stared at him in disbelief before hurriedly blurting out the real reason she had come. Priest Garrison is here right now. The moment those words entered his ears, every painful memory and unpleasant encounter associated with Garrison came flooding back into his mind. Before Cleans could even react, another voice suddenly came from behind him. Did your mission go well? I've been waiting for you, young Master Clean. Reinland slowly turned around. Standing there with his usual calm smile was Garrison himself. The priest had arrived before him, and now their unavoidable meeting was about to begin. The scene then shifts to the grand estate. A group of uniformed guards and servants fan out through the dense foliage, their voices echoing in frustration. Young Master Klein, where are you, young master? Come out now, young master. One servant looked toward the others and asked anxiously, any sign of the young master yet? He doesn't seem to be over here. Another replied after checking the area thoroughly. This is bad. It's almost time for the purification ritual, and he's vanished out of nowhere, young master. Father Garrison is getting very angry. He'll forgive you if you come out now. Hidden nearby, Cleans listened to every word and couldn't help but sneer inwardly. Don't make me laugh. That bastard did the same thing last time before hanging me up naked. The servants eventually gathered together and began discussing their next move, deciding that they should search around the entire mansion once again in case he was hiding. Somewhere they had overlooked. Clans watched them with growing irritation as more and more people joined the search party. Just get lost already, you guys. Time slowly passed, and before he realized it, night had fallen over the state. The search had continued for hours while Cleansed remained hidden high up in the tree. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with him and he drifted off to sleep among the branches. Much later, he suddenly opened his eyes and looked around in confusion. Garrison not there. For a moment, he was disoriented before fully waking up. Did I fall asleep? They should have given up by now. Time to head back. As he carefully began climbing down from the tree, a strange sound echoed from below instantly. He froze and narrowed his eyes. Is someone still down there? Not wanting to take any chances, he quietly climbed back upward and hid himself among the branches. Once he looked down toward the source of the noise, his expression immediately changed. Below him stood several enormous bears. They were northern grizzly bears, apex predators native to the northern regions. These terrifying creatures were infamous for their extreme aggression and their cruel hunting habits. Their massive claws were perfectly designed for tearing through flesh, shredding muscle, and stripping meat from bone with horrifying efficiency. The moment Clans recognized what they were, a chill ran through his body. Without necromancy, I'm just a snack to them. His current body was far too weak to fight monsters of this level. Cleans tightened his grip on the branch and forced himself to stay calm. I have no choice but to wait until they leave. Cleanse stared out into the cold northern landscape. The bitter wind cut through him like a blade, and as he sat helplessly on the tree branch, old memories began surfacing in his mind. This northern weather. His gaze hardened as thoughts of his previous life flooded back. I gave everything for the northerners who died so unfairly, and yet I was reborn into the family of the man who killed me. And even here, I'm still living a life on the run. The voices of countless people who had once mocked, blamed, and condemned him echoed through his head. Their taunts mixed with the howling wind, making the darkness around him feel even heavier. Unable to bear the cold any longer, Cleans wrapped his arms around himself and curled up on the branch. It's freezing. His eyelids slowly grew heavier and heavier until he finally lost consciousness. A long time passed. When Cleans eventually opened his eyes again, his vision was blurry and unfocused. He could feel himself moving. As his senses gradually returned, he realized that someone was carrying him. The familiar voice above him spoke calmly. Are you awake, young lord? Clans looked up and immediately recognized the man, Garrison. For a moment, he was stunned before asking, did I freeze to death? Of course not, Garrison replied. Still confused, Clans continued. But there were grizzly bears around the tree though. Don't worry, I took care of them. The state of Garrison himself was far from perfect. His clothes were damaged and signs of a fierce battle could be seen all over him. It was obvious that dealing with the northern grizzly bears had not been easy even for someone as strong as him. Cleanse stared at him for a moment before speaking coldly. Put me down, I'd rather die than be carried by you. Garrison didn't even slow his pace. You're burning up with a fever, just stay still. Clen clenched his teeth. Why did you even save me? If you'd left me there, I would have frozen or been eaten. I thought you wanted me dead more than anyone. For several moments, Garrison remained silent. Then he finally answered in a calm and thoughtful voice. A star does not create its own darkness. It simply shines where it is. Cleanse remained quiet as Garrison continued. A young life is the same. They don't know right from wrong yet. They are the future of a young being. I have no right to cut off that potential. Hearing those words, Clans could only stare at him in disbelief. Is that really something you should be saying to me? He thought silently. However, Garrison's expression suddenly became much colder. However, if that being chooses to become the darkness itself, his grip tightened slightly. In other words, if you are the real Archhammond I've been looking for, then watch yourself. His eyes sharpened with absolute determination. Because I will kill you with my own 2 hands. The weight of those words lingered heavily between them. Before long, they arrived back at the mansion and entered Kenz's room. The atmosphere became strangely quiet. Garrison slowly closed his eyes for a moment before speaking. It's been a while, young lord. Kenz looked directly at him. Countless emotions passed through his mind as memories of the past and present collided within him. A while indeed. His gaze never left the man standing before him. Garrison. Garrison looked at Cleans with the same calm expression he always wore and said, it certainly has. I had some urgent business at the order. While I was there, an old friend of mine gave me something interesting. As he spoke, he revealed a strange object in his hand. The moment Cleanse saw it, his heart nearly stopped. That's ectoplasm. Fear instantly gripped him. Wait, is it detecting my demonic energy? His mind began racing as cold sweat formed across his forehead. Garrison calmly held up the device and continued. A necromancer appeared when you were attacked in the forest, young master, and I took care of that bastard myself. Cleans remained silent, trying desperately not to reveal his panic. But here's the thing, Garrison continued. According to this device, there wasn't just a single necromancer trace. His eyes remained fixed on Cleans. There were two. The room suddenly felt much colder. That's what it's indicating. The moment those words left Garrison's mouth, Cleans felt his entire body stiffen. Sweat rolled down the side of his face despite the fever burning through him. Inside his mind, alarms were ringing non-stop. His voice is calm as usual, yet that calmness was exactly what terrified him. But I can hear it. After surviving countless battles, facing legendary masters, and fighting monsters beyond imagination in his previous life as Archiman, his instincts had become incredibly sharp. And right now, every one of those instincts was screaming at him. Danger, extreme danger. The warning was so intense that it felt as though death itself was standing directly behind him. Can I handle him with my current strength? His mind desperately searched for possibilities. What if I use my ability to copy his techniques? The thought lasted only a second before he rejected it himself. No, it's impossible. He had only recently begun rebuilding his strength. His body was weak, his mana was limited, and his combat experience in this life was almost non-existent. Me against Garrison? The answer was obvious. Not in a million years. No matter how he calculated it, the outcome remained the same. If Garrison attacked him now, there would be no fight. There would only be an execution. Then Garrison spoke again. Perform necromancy. The words struck Cleans like a thunderbolt. Right now, the room became completely silent. I'm giving you a chance out of respect for our history. Garrison's voice remained steady, but the pressure behind his words was overwhelming. If it's just soul-returning art used to control corpses, I might simply report it to the Order. For a brief moment, Cleanse almost felt a trace of hope. Then Garrison continued. But if it's the original form of necromancy that manipulates souls, his gaze sharpened. If it's the same technique formula used by that man I'm thinking of, the killing intent hidden beneath his calm demeanor finally became impossible to ignore. Then you won't escape death. At that moment, every thought in Cleans's mind vanished. His calculations, his plans, his excuses, everything disappeared. Only a single realization remained, echoing endlessly inside his head. I'm going to die. Again and again, that thought repeated itself. I'm going to die. A smile suddenly appeared on Cleans's face. Looking directly at Garrison, he spoke without the slightest hint of fear. You bastard who did nothing but water. Torture me under the guise of a purification ritual. For a brief moment, he almost laughed. It's funny though, someone I used to know said something similar to you. His eyes narrowed. His old memories resurfaced. The future of children, I didn't understand what that meant back then. Then he repeated the words Garrison himself had spoken earlier. The future of a young being. No one has the right to crush that potential. A strange expression crossed Cleans's face. But when you said that, I understood for a brief moment. His voice became calmer, that this is the justice you believe in. The room fell silent, and I know it's not because you hate me. Cleanse slowly clenched his fists. I was a loser and that's why I died. His gaze hardened. But now you want me to use necromancy here? A mocking smile appeared on his lips. You'll kill me if I'm Archiman. The moment those words left his mouth, Garrison's patience finally snapped. No, cut to the pressure filling the room intensified instantly. Yet Cleans refused to back down. I'll decide who I become. His voice echoed through the room. I'm not running away anymore. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. Then Garrison spoke. I have no choice then. His eyes became cold. I'll just have to force you to use necromancy. The instant those words were spoken, Garrison stepped forward, his fist tight. He was no longer questioning Cleanse. He was attacking him. Pure killing intent exploded from his body as he launched a punch, powerful enough to crush stone. Cleanse's eyes widened. So it begins. His instincts screamed, I have to dodge this somehow. But the attack was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Even with all of Archiman's battle experience, he couldn't properly perceive it. The punch was simply too fast, too overwhelming, too far beyond the limits of his current body. He couldn't even understand the trajectory until the attack was already upon him. At the very last possible moment, his body moved barely. The fist tore past him. A shock wave exploded through the room. Cleanse stumbled backward, breathing heavily. At least I dodged it once. But his expression made it obvious just how difficult that had been. He was struggling desperately. The blood-covered cross he had been carrying could no longer withstand the pressure. Cracks spread across its surface before it shattered completely and fell to the floor. Outside the room, servants had already gathered after hearing the commotion. Their eyes widened in horror. What is happening? The priest is attacking the young lord. Panic spread among them as they watched the scene unfold. Meanwhile, Cleanse's mind raced. Now, for the first time, Garrison's attention had shifted toward the servants. If I attack him while he's distracted, Cleanse immediately reached for his sword. But before he could draw it, a calm voice came from behind him. Are you looking for this? Cleanse froze. His eyes widened. There in Garrison's hand was his sword. When did he hadn't even noticed the weapon being taken? Not once, not even for a second. Garrison casually tossed the sword into the air, a necromancer using a sword. The weapon spun before crashing onto the floor. Cleanse gritted his teeth. I knew it. His heart sank. This bastard. The reality finally became crystal clear. He really plans to kill me right here. Garrison looked at him without emotion. You don't need such a thing. And then he attacked again. This time there was no hesitation, no warning, only overwhelming power. His fist shot forward like a cannon. The resulting shockwave tore through the room. Tables exploded into splinters. Chairs shattered instantly. Decorations were ripped apart. Walls cracked under the force. Everything in the room was destroyed as if a hurricane had suddenly appeared indoors. Dust and debris filled the air. Garrison stood amidst the destruction, staring forward. Then a new presence entered the room. A pressure completely different from Garrison spread throughout the area. Heavy, authoritative, absolute. Standing before him was a man with a drawn sword. Cleanse's father, the 7th Duke of the Rhineland family, Henkel Rhineland. His blade was already pointed directly at Garrison. The temperature in the room seemed to drop instantly. With a cold expression, Henkel spoke. Can you explain what you've just done, Garrison? Garrison. The edge of his sword gleamed sharply. Before my sword cuts you down. Garrison returned the glare without showing the slightest fear while Klein silently watched the entire situation unfold before him just as I thought. Everything is going according to plan. At the same time, Dunkel immediately began issuing orders to the surrounding knights and guards. Guards, take your positions over there. Protect His Grace, the Duke and the young master. The atmosphere had already become extremely tense and Klein could clearly see where everything was heading. As he observed the people around him, he calmly analyzed the situation in his mind. Knights are highly sensitive to hostility and bloodlust. If I stall for a little longer, Henkel and the Rhineland Knights will come running. After all, the opponent is Agent Garrison. Henkel then stepped forward once more and pointed his sword directly at Garrison. His voice was calm but carried an unmistakable warning. I will ask again. Garrison, were you trying to attack Klein? For a brief moment, silence filled the area before Garrison finally answered in a serious voice. The young master used necromancy. Surely you know what that means. Henkel replied, there is no law prohibiting necromancy anywhere on the continent except for the Holy Kingdom. Garrison said, you must know better than anyone what necromancy means for the young master. His words immediately made the atmosphere tense, yet Henkel showed no intention of backing down. Instead, his eyes became even more determined. As he replied, he suffered for 7 years. Because of a baseless rumor, I can no longer let it continue. Besides, I am his father. I will no longer allow you to lay a hand on my son Agent. If you do not want to keep Rhineland as your enemy, suppress your bloodlust. The moment those words entered Garrison's ears, his expression instantly hardened and the tension in the area rose to him entirely new level. The guards could feel that something was about to happen and several of them unconsciously tightened their grip on their weapons, while the surrounding knights remained on high alert, ready to react at any moment. And then suddenly a terrifying surge of energy began pouring out of Garrison's body. The pressure spread outward like a violent tidal wave, crashing into everyone around him, and the atmosphere became so heavy that even breathing felt difficult. His clothes fluttered under the force of his own aura, and a strange, almost fanatical smile slowly appeared across his face, making him look even more unsettling than before. As that overwhelming energy continued to rise, he began reciting sacred words in a loud and unwavering voice. Therefore, let there be no shame in your faith. Do not entrust your heart to the tongue of an unbeliever. I swear before God, show no mercy to the heretic. The moment he finished speaking, the energy erupting from him became even stronger, and the terrifying pressure flooded the entire area. Like an invisible storm, the guards were now in genuine danger, as the force pressing down on them was far beyond what ordinary people could easily endure. Some instinctively stepped back, while others struggled to remain standing under the crushing weight of his presence. The air itself seemed to tremble, and the atmosphere felt as though it could explode into violence at any second. Dunkel looked at the scene unfolding before him and immediately realized how serious the situation had become. His expression changed as he shouted in alarm, we're in danger. At the same moment, Henkel Rhineland also began releasing his own energy to oppose Garrison's overwhelming pressure. The two powerful forces started colliding with each other, and the entire mansion trembled under the strain, seeing cracks spreading through the structure. Dunkel raised his voice even louder and warned everyone around him. The mansion is collapsing. Everyone, watch out. Panic quickly spread among the people present as both Henkel and Garrison continued unleashing more and more power. The pressure generated by their auras was becoming too much for the surroundings to endure, and it seemed as if the entire building could come crashing down at any moment. Despite this, neither side showed any intention of backing away. Henkel tightened his grip on his weapon and gave Garrison one final warning in a cold and determined voice. I will warn you one last time. Lower your fist, Agent. However, Garrison remained completely unmoved and replied without hesitation. This is divine judgment, Rhineland. As soon as those words left his mouth, Garrison firmly planted his feet and strengthened his stance. His entire body seemed to gather immense power as he prepared to attack. At the same time, Henkel moved first, bursting forward with incredible speed. He charged directly toward Garrison like a meteor, crossing the battlefield. The distance between them disappeared. In an instant, Garrison responded by throwing an extremely powerful punch carrying enough force to destroy everything in its path. The violent attack tore through the air and headed straight toward Henkel. Yet Henkel continued, advancing fearlessly, pushing forward. Despite the terrifying power coming at him while rushing toward his opponent, he briefly glanced toward his son and then activated one of the most closely guarded techniques of the Rhineland family. His voice echoed across the battlefield as he unleashed it. The Rhineland family secret technique, Meteor Sword Second Form. The moment the technique was activated, a massive surge of energy erupted from his weapon and collided directly with Garrison's attack. The impact between the two powers created a tremendous explosion of force that shook the entire area. Everyone nearby was forced backward by the violent shockwave, and the surrounding air seemed to explode with energy as the two fought against each other. Watching this chaotic scene unfold, Klein immediately realized that things were spiraling out of control and muttered in concern, wait, things are getting complicated. Just when it seemed as though the clash between Henkel and Garrison would engulf everything around them, a small figure suddenly appeared. Between the two devastating attacks, it was Erin, to the complete shock of everyone present. She stepped directly into the path of both attacks and raised her hands as if telling them to stop. The sight was so unexpected that for a moment everyone froze in disbelief. The terrifying collision that had threatened to destroy the area was suddenly interrupted by the appearance of a young girl standing fearlessly between two monsters of power. The people watching could hardly believe what they were seeing. Dunkel was especially horrified and immediately shouted at the top of his lungs, it's dangerous. Get out of there, why on earth are you there? Ignoring the panic around her, Erin calmly stepped down and walked forward as if nothing unusual was happening. Then she looked directly at Garrison and spoke in a completely innocent voice, voice that contrasted sharply with the deadly atmosphere surrounding them. "Father Garrison, you promised to bring me a present when you come back." The moment those words reached everyone's ears, the entire battlefield seemed to freeze. Every person present stared at her with expressions of absolute disbelief. The tension that had been building toward a life or death battle was suddenly interrupted by a conversation about presents. Even Garrison appeared caught off guard by her words, and after a brief pause, he simply replied, "Present." Aaron nodded seriously and continued, "Yes, a present you definitely promised to buy me when you know like how heaven punishes liars." Her words left everyone speechless. Klein watched the bizarre scene and could not help commenting, being that oblivious to the atmosphere is almost a talent. For a few moments, Garrison remained silent before finally reaching into his pocket. His terrifying aura had not completely disappeared, but his expression softened slightly as he pulled something out. Then he spoke in a surprisingly ordinary tone, "These are cookies from a famous bakery on 3rd Avenue in Royal Gate." He handed the sweet treat to Aaron, who immediately accepted it with sparkling eyes as if the life-threatening confrontation from moments ago had never happened. She looked at the gift with genuine excitement and said, "This is mind-blowing, but what about yours, father?" Garrison remained silent for a moment before speaking, in a much calmer voice than before, as if he were recalling memories he had buried deep within his heart. "When I was young, I grew up in a place where it was hard to get a sip of water, let alone food. Most of the friends I was with never made it to adulthood. The name of that place was the Archaman cult." The moment Klein heard that name, his eyes narrowed in confusion, and he immediately began thinking to himself, "Did I create that? No, I have no memory of such a thing even in my past life. What on earth is that?" The name meant absolutely nothing to him. Yet judging by Garrison's expression, it clearly carried a painful history behind that calm face. There was hatred, sorrow, and regret that had been building for years. Garrison continued, speaking while looking into the distance as if he could still see the terrible place. "From his childhood, that is why I must destroy it. The name that ruined my life and took away my young friends, even if it cost me my life." His voice grew heavier with every word, and then he turned his attention toward Aaron. "So Aaron, please eat and enjoy my share too, because that is all I can do." Then his gaze shifted toward Klein and his expression hardened once more and young. "Master Klein, next time, it won't end like this." After saying those words, Garrison turned around and began walking away from the mansion. The enormous pressure he had released earlier gradually disappeared, and many of the soldiers nearby visibly relaxed. The fact that a battle had been avoided made them feel relieved, and several of them looked genuinely happy that they had survived the confrontation. Klein watched Garrison's retreating figure and thought to himself, making an enemy of Garrison Berkeman of all people. Can't do that again. Besides, next time means he's coming back to kill me in the end. We'll keep chasing each other until one of us gives up. Before he could continue thinking, Aaron suddenly appeared beside him holding the cookies and asked cheerfully, "Do you want to bite too, young master?" Klein was startled by her sudden appearance and replied, "You startled me, Aaron. You like strawberry cake, right?" Ain immediately nodded. "Of course." Klein smiled slightly and said, "Then go ask the chef to make one. Tell him I sent you. You can have the whole thing." The moment she heard those magical words, Aaron's eyes lit up and she ran away at incredible speed. Toward the kitchen, Klein watched her disappear and could not help thinking, seeing her like this makes all that life or death drama feel so pointless. However, there was still one important matter left. Unresolved, Henkel Reinland approached him and spoke in a serious tone. "It seems we need to speak in private. Did you learn necromancy?" Later, after moving to a more secluded location where nobody could overhear them, Klein simply answered, "Yes." Hearing that direct confirmation, Henkel stared at him for several moments before speaking again. "It's the very shackle that bound you for 7 years. So why of all things, did you learn necromancy? How on earth did you even do it?" Klein had already prepared an answer for this question and calmly replied, "I learned it from the books in Mother's Annex." The moment he said it, he silently thought to himself, "Of course that's a lie, but given my background, it's the most believable excuse." He then continued aloud, "I won't make excuses for keeping it from you, but necromancy was my only way to survive." Henkel frowned immediately and answered, "There must have been other ways, even with just your swordsmanship." Klein shook his head and responded firmly, "You must have seen the report Dunnell submitted. I have no mana. I could never have accomplished any of it if I had only swordsmanship." His expression became serious as he continued explaining the larger danger. "Facing the Dutch, the Empire was using necromancers to eat away at the north, and we didn't even suspect it. You must accept what I am before it's too late." While speaking those words, Klein was already calculating everything in his mind. "It's an extreme move, but I have no choice. My goal is the revival of the family." Looking directly into Henkel's eyes, he finally said, "I have decided to use necromancy long time ago." Even after speaking those words, Klein continued thinking to himself, "Now make your decision, Henkel Rhineland." Then he added aloud, "That is if you truly believe I am not the reincarnation of Archaman." Deep inside his mind, another thought followed immediately. "Will you use me to save the family or let us fall to ruin?" Then for a moment, silence filled the room. Henkel stood there quietly reflecting on everything that had happened since Klein returned to the Dutch. Finally, he spoke in a low voice, "When you first returned to the duchy, even after being locked in the correctional institute for 7 years, you called me father without a single trace of resentment. Even though I'm a pathetic father who failed to protect your future." Hearing those words surprised Klein, and he found himself thinking, "You've been holding on to that all this time." The guilt Henkel carried was clearly far deeper. After a long pause, Henkel finally looked at him and gave his answer, "Do not worry at this point. I have neither the right nor the reason to stop you, so do as you wish." Those simple words carried an enormous weight because they represented acceptance, trust, and permission. All at once, the obstacle Klein had feared the most had finally been cleared. Meanwhile, somewhere else a woman was quietly reading a letter. While sitting alone, the contents appeared to interest her greatly, and after finishing it, she spoke calmly, "It is about time I met Klein. Could you bring him to me?" Standing nearby was was Leah, who immediately bowed her head in understanding and replied, "Understood, Grand Duke Helen." After that, we see a monster-like human killing everyone in sight, leaving nothing but panic and ruin behind. Bodies are scattered everywhere as terrified people desperately try to escape, but no one is able to stop him. Watching this scary scene, one of the soldiers says, "Even our fighter group is no match for him. Forget it, I don't care anymore." With fear turning into hopelessness, he grips his sword tightly and charges straight toward the monster, determined to fight even if it costs him his life. However, the moment he reaches his target, the monster-like human casually throws a single punch. The hit is so powerful that the soldier is blasted far away, completely unable to defend himself. Seeing their friend defeated so easily, another member of the group immediately loses his courage and turns around, running for his life without looking back. The monster-like human only laughs at the sight of the running man. He casually picks up a sharp piece of stone, throws it with incredible force, and the rock tears straight through the escaping man's body, leaving a massive hole as he falls down instantly. Not far from there, a frightened brother and sister are hiding together, completely frozen by fear. The little brother looks at his sister with tears in his eyes and says, "I'm scared, sister, I don't want to die." His sister is shaking just as much and can only cry out, "Please save me." At that very moment, the monster-like human lifts an enormous piece of stone high above his head, preparing to crush them both beneath it. With a cruel smile on his face, he meanly tells them that there is no need to cry anymore because they should get ready to die just as he is about to throw the massive rock. Liren suddenly appears from behind him like a flash. She launches a fast attack that forces him away before instantly rushing toward the terrified children. Without wasting another second, she rescues the brother and sister and urgently tells them, "It's dangerous here. Leave this place immediately." Hearing her warning, the two siblings quickly run away as fast as they can. Finally escaping the deadly battlefield, the monster-like human wastes no time and immediately charges toward Leia Ren, attempting to strike her down. She responds with incredible speed, performing a graceful backflip that allows her to dodge the attack perfectly. As she lands, she keeps her eyes locked on her opponent, carefully watching his every movement. Suddenly, the monster-like human disappears from his position and reappears right above her, launching another surprise attack. But Leia Ren reacts instantly and fights back with a powerful strike of her own, slashing his hand and drawing blood. Looking at the wound with a smile still spread across his face, the monster-like human says, "You're strong." Those words mark the beginning of a fierce battle between the two. Blow after blow, they continue exchanging attacks at incredible speed, and with every passing moment, the fight becomes even more wild. Gradually, Leia Ren begins taking control of the battle, pushing her opponent further onto the losing side. Despite being trapped, the monster-like human never stops smiling. Finally, Leia Ren finds the perfect chance and throws her spear with deadly aim. The weapon flies straight through the air before stabbing deep into the monster-like human's body. Just then, another man arrives at the scene, looking at everything in shock before saying, "This is already the third time this month." The sudden wild attacks the superhuman strength, and the man continues speaking. Even the stories from people who saw it of those strange veins. Before anyone can make sense of what is happening, everyone realizes that the monster human is still alive. Despite the deadly wound through his body, he slowly speaks with a twisted smile. Anyone can become strong as long as they have that, even stronger than Archiman from 200 years ago. Hearing those words, Leia Ren calmly pulls her spear back out of his body and coldly replies, "No one can ever be Archiman. He's not someone a bastard like you should even speak of. So whatever that is, I'll find out myself." Her voice carries absolute confidence as the monster human finally collapses, while the mystery surrounding the strange power he mentioned only grows even deeper. The scene then shifts to the Queen's mansion, where everyone is busy cleaning up the massive damage left behind after the recent battle. Workers can be seen repairing the damaged walls, while servants clear away the piles of broken stone and rubble scattered throughout the estate. Looking around at the damage, one worker sighs and says, "I can't believe the wall is still in this state." Another man responds, "Still, considering what happened, we were lucky." The person beside him immediately shakes his head and replies, "We're lucky. Are you kidding? If it weren't for his grace, the Duke, the entire mansion would have been blown away." Their conversation quickly attracts another worker who curiously asks, "By the way, is it true that Aaron rushed in to stop it?" Someone else immediately waves away the rumor, saying, "No way. What kind of strength could a tiny girl like her have? Must have been my imagination." As they continue talking among themselves, the cleanup of the mansion goes on all around them. At the same time, the cheerful red-haired girl runs through the hallway while happily calling out, "Young master." She enters his room carrying a large stack of books in both arms and excitedly says, "Young master, I brought your books." Cleans is already sitting in his room, surrounded by countless books, completely lost in reading. Looking at him, the girl suddenly smiles and says, "You've got handsome, young master. If you're handsome, girls won't leave you alone. They'll all get played with." Hearing such unexpected words, Cleans looks at her in surprise and asks, "Where on earth did you learn that?" She proudly answers, "I heard the older maids talking about a novel. It's called There's No Way the Prince on a White Horse Would Do That." Cleans lets out a helpless sigh before replying, "Good grief. If you want to read, bring a fairy tale book next time. I'll read it to you, though I might be a bit busy for a while." The narration then explains that it has now been an entire week since Hankel and Garrison Berkman fought. Even though their physical fight lasted only for a brief moment, the sheer force let out during that single exchange was enough to destroy. The narration explains that the result of the battle was so terrible that the repairs had continued for several days without stopping. And despite all the destruction, Cleans quietly thinks on everything that happened, saying to himself, "If it weren't for Aaron, I would have actually died. But even so, if there's one thing I gained from all of this." Before he can continue his thoughts, the door suddenly opens and Dunkel walks into the room carrying a large collection of books. He respectfully says, "Young master, the medical books and how the body works texts have arrived." The moment Little Red hears that, she immediately pouts in disappointment and shouts, What about my fairy tale book? Ignoring her complaint, Cleans calmly tells Dunkel to place all the books over there. As the books are being arranged, the narration shifts to Clean's inner thoughts. Back when I was Archimand, I worked like a dog as a servant in the magic tower just to learn a single magic spell. I plotted and made secret plans just to get my hands on a single torn page of a magic book. And when I was caught trying to steal it, I almost lost my fingers in those days. Knowledge was forbidden to everyone except magic users and rich rulers. He slowly looks around at the mountain of books surrounding him before smiling to himself. But now I can access any knowledge I want. He immediately begins reading through the body science texts one after another, carefully comparing different ideas. Just as I thought, this guess is wrong. The connection between magic flow and the human blood vessels has also been completely proven wrong. And it's already been 200 years since I died. This is the first real excitement I've felt since my rebirth. Time to stuff all of this into my head. While those thoughts continue racing through his mind, Dunnel and Little Red simply stand there silently staring at him. Their young master has become so completely focused on his studies that the way he is flipping through books and muttering to himself almost makes him look crazy. Their confused expressions grow even stranger when Clean suddenly notices a book lying off to one side. The title catches his attention immediately, Lud Rinland. Before he can continue reading, Dunnel curiously asks, "But young master, why are you collecting so many body science books? And what's that paper you're holding?" Cleans casually lifts the paper into the air and replies, "Oh, it's a spirit building spell." The moment they hear those words, both Dunnel and Little Red repeat them in complete surprise. Spirit building spell. Seeing their confusion, Cleans begins explaining, "You remember the skeleton I called forth, right? If I sprinkle this on it and put in my dark magic." He pauses for a moment before adding, "My death magic is a bit unique. First, I use my dark magic to form a contract with a soul. Then I use that soul's magic power to build a spirit body." Little Red listens with sparkling eyes before excitedly saying, "It's amazing." Cleans nods before continuing his explanation. "But most souls can't form anything more complex than a skeleton. They either lack enough magic power or they don't possess a strong enough sense of self to keep up a more advanced spiritual body." Cleans continues explaining his death magic in greater detail, saying, "They are solid magic constructs, but their structure is incredibly simple. They can follow basic orders to attack or defend like a soldier, but they would never stand a chance against powerful knights or skilled magic users. That's exactly why I had to deal with Dalton myself." He then pauses for a moment before his expression turns thoughtful as a new idea crosses his mind. "But what if it isn't an ordinary soul?" Hearing that, Dunkel looks at him in confusion and asks, "Not an ordinary soul?" Cleans calmly continues, "For instance, what if that soul belonged to a knight with huge magic power?" Dunkel's eyes widen as he immediately realizes what the young master is hinting at and nervously asks, "Young master, you don't mean?" Before he can finish the question, Cleans reassures him, "Don't worry, I'm not planning to make one anytime soon." Even so, his thoughts continue silently inside his mind. Besides, powerful souls like that aren't easy to come by. You would be lucky to find even one on a massive battlefield, and it's not like I need one right now. Just then the butler enters the room and respectfully bows before saying, "Young master, an invitation has arrived from Paul Wyvern. They say it is an extremely urgent matter." Hearing the name Paul Wyvern immediately reminds Cleans of someone, and he quietly thinks to himself, "Paul Wyvern, that's Leah's family. Come to think of it, she did say something about inviting me if I won the fight." Dunnel immediately finds the situation suspicious and asks, "An urgent matter for you, young master, and not for the Duke?" The butler nods before answering, "It was sent personally by Lady Hellion." The moment Dunnel hears that name, he is visibly shocked and blurts out, "Wait, did you say Lady Hellion? She married into the distant side of the family and completely cut ties. Why is she inviting you to a place crawling with them?" The butler calmly replies, "I know, but she is Duke Henkel's older sister, and as the female boss of Paul Wyvern, it would be extremely difficult to refuse her invitation." After hearing the entire explanation, Cleans calmly makes his decision and says, "I will go. This actually works out perfectly. I wasn't planning on making that yet, but now I have a reason to." His words suggest that the invitation has unexpectedly given him the perfect opportunity to carry out the next step of whatever plan has been forming inside his mind. The scene then shifts to the middle of the night when the mansion has fallen completely silent. Everyone else is asleep while Cleans quietly steps out of his room alone. He walks through the dimly lit hallway before stopping in front of a single book resting nearby. His eyes settle on the title written across its cover, Ludel Rhineland, the 6th Duke of the Rhineland family. As Cleans continues walking deeper into the silent burial grounds, the narration begins to reveal the history of the man whose grave he has come to visit. Henkel's father was once praised as the strongest knight on the entire continent. He was the only duke in history powerful enough to rival the first Duke Berkel. Yet despite his unmatched strength, he was remembered as a tragic hero who spent his entire life fighting on countless battlefields before meeting an early death at a young age. Looking toward the ancient grave before him, Cleans quietly declares to himself, "I must make him mine." After entering the burial chamber, he slowly looks around while carefully sensing the lingering spiritual energy in the area. Most of the souls here have already moved on. There isn't even a trace of them left. He pauses for a brief moment before his gaze settles on a single location, and his expression becomes serious. But there is one soul that still remains bound to this world by lingering regrets. Can't even imagine what Henkel would say if he ever found out about this. Without another moment of hesitation, Clean steps forward and calmly says, "Shall we begin digging up my own ancestor? It's our first meeting, but forgive this disrespect, grandfather." He then begins chanting the ritual. "Call upon the unfortunate soul bound by the deeds of your past life. In the name of the guide, I shall light your path ahead. If you wish to walk that path, accept this contract." A heavy silence fills the chamber until a powerful voice suddenly echoes through the darkness. "Show yourself, death magic weak user. Hearing that voice, Cleans is not surprised at all and quietly thinks to himself, just as I expected. The title of former Duke wasn't just for show. He absorbed every last bit of dark magic. The narration then explains the existence of a Death Knight, a high-level undead warrior created by binding the soul of a noble knight to a spiritual vessel. There are only two ways to complete a contract with such a soul. The first is to force it through overwhelming dark magic, while the second is to earn its willing cooperation through mutual agreement. The Death Knight slowly reveals himself before looking directly at Cleans and says, "At first, I wondered what business my cute grandson had with me. But to think that the biggest enemy of the Rhinelands would take over the body of a Rinlin." Hearing those words, Cleans immediately realizes something and thinks to himself, "A soul sees the true core, not the physical form. It's impossible to hide the fact that I am Archcoman." He then calmly explains the entire situation through the contract, including everything that has happened since his rebirth, believing that the proposal should be more than reasonable. After listening to everything, the Death Knight finally responds, "It's not a bad offer. In fact, I found it quite impressive. But as someone who was once the Duke of Rhineland, how can I so easily trust the biggest enemy of my own family?" As he finishes speaking, he raises his weapon and points it directly at Cleans, making his intentions perfectly clear. Without showing even the slightest fear, Cleans stares back at the legendary knight and confidently replies, "Then I shall prove it to you. Proof that my contract is genuine and a promise that I will set you free. They say a knight's trust is forged by the sword. Am I wrong?" By this point, both of them have already left the burial chamber and stepped into an open area where nothing would interfere with their battle. The Death Knight lets out a faint smile before replying, "Talking about a knight's trust after ripping open your own ancestor's coffin." The very next instant, both warriors unleash their power and charge straight at each other with incredible speed. Weapons aimed directly at one another as an intense battle begins between the legendary Death Knight and the reincarnated Archiman. After that, we are told that 200 years ago Emperor Melior founded the greatest superpower on the continent, the Empire. From the very beginning, the Empire dreamed of ruling every corner of the continent. But there was one obstacle they could never overcome. So easily, the three independent Dougal families, Rhineland in the north, Fall Wyvern in the west, and in the east. Because of their power and influence, the Empire could not simply force them into submission. So instead, it spent many years preparing another method to achieve its goal. And that plan centered around Heel and my aunt, Hankel's sister, Leah's stepmother, and the leader of the collateral branch. If she has suddenly summoned me now, then it can only mean something important is about to happen. At that moment, Dunkel walks into the room and respectfully says, "I've finished organizing the books." Young Master Cleans looks at him with satisfaction and replies, "Good work." Then he calmly continues, "We're leaving for Fall Weaver. In 3 days, can you get everything ready?" Dunkel picks up the invitation and carefully reads through it before looking back at Cleans. "According to the invitation, I cannot accompany you. Will you really be all right?" Cleans lets out a faint smile before answering, "Not really. One wrong move and I might not make it back alive." Hearing that, Dunkel immediately becomes concerned and asks, "Then why do we have to go there in the first place?" Cleans leans back and answers, "Because I want to know what Helen is thinking, what she wants from me, and what the balance of power inside the collateral branch looks like." Then his expression turns cold as he quietly adds, "If things go south, I can simply turn a few of her aides into undead and have them attack each other before he can continue." Dunkel immediately interrupts him with a firm voice, "You cannot do that. If you do something like that, then how are you any different from them?" As a knight that is however cleansed cuts him off before he can finish speaking, "What's wrong with doing bad things to bad people? You saw the Conwell estate with your own eyes. So you already know the truth. The main family is falling apart, while those collateral branch bastards are living in luxury, using the money they extorted from us. And after seeing all of that, you still want to talk about knightly ideals?" Dunkel does not back down, even after hearing those harsh words. Instead, he answers with unwavering determination, "Even so, Rinland must never abandon its principles. Is losing honor and faith just to chase profit is never the path a true knight should walk." Cleans looks at him for a moment before asking, "Honor and faith, are those things really that important?" Without the slightest hesitation, Dunkel replies, "Yes, they are more important than anything else in this world." Those words leave Clint completely stunned. For a brief moment, he quietly places his hand on the table while a faint smile slowly appears on his face. Then he softly says, "Then that's a relief because I am an evil necromancer." After that, the story takes us back to the same battle between Cleans and the Death Knight that had been raging since the previous chapter. After exchanging another fierce clash, Cleans quickly jumps backward to create some distance while carefully watching every movement of his opponent as he studies his breathing. He calmly analyzes the situation in his mind. The first strike is a thrust, predicting the follow-up after a standard attack. The very next moment, he perfectly times his own attack against the Death Knights. Incoming strike, and the collision releases an enormous burst of energy that shakes the entire battlefield. Seeing this, the Death Knight lets out a faint grin and says, "Not bad." Without taking his eyes off his opponent, Cleans continues thinking to himself, the duel between Delane and Dalton, and the fight between Hankel and Garrison Berkman. I've already analyzed the principles and mechanics behind every technique they used. All that's left now is to test them in real combat and completely master the transitions between them. However, the Death Knight remains completely unfazed and replies, "It doesn't matter. You're still full of openings to me." As soon as he finishes speaking, an overwhelming wave of power explodes from his body and rushes straight toward Cleanse with terrifying force. Seeing the deadly attack racing toward him, Cleanse immediately makes his move just like back then. "I'll take his back and end this in an instant." He activates his skill and disappears from the front, only to reappear directly behind the Death Knight before launching a surprise attack. But even this perfect ambush fails because the Death Knight somehow senses his presence. At the last possible moment, he calmly turns around, blocks every single strike with flawless precision, and says, "You're not that fast, but I have to admit it's a little surprising to block all my strikes with a body that has no mana. You've got some decent talent. While staring at the Death Knight, Cleanse silently recalls his true identity. Rudeli Rinland, the 6th Duke of the Rhineland family, and the man who was once known as the strongest knight on the entire continent. What truly made his name legendary was his one-of-a-kind swordsmanship, a style so extraordinary that no one else could ever truly replicate it. After casually blocking the attacks, the Death Knight suddenly changes the topic and says, "Anyway, have you been having fun playing Henkel's kid? He's my son, but that guy doesn't know a single thing when it comes to reading a room. If he ever found out that the child he raised so dearly was actually Archhamid, he'd probably pass out on the spot." Hearing those words, Cleans cannot help but respond. Why does a former duke talk like such a thug? The Death Knight simply laughs before saying he has no clue. He takes after his father, completely clueless. Then with an amused expression he adds, "Insulting my own father like that? You really might be my blood after all. Well, whatever. I'm going all out from here." The moment Cleans hears those words, his eyes widen in complete shock. An overwhelming sense of danger fills his heart because he instantly realizes what is about to happen. Before him, this is the tragic sword style created by Rudd himself, a legendary technique that disappeared from history because of its unbelievable complexity, and because no one after him was ever capable of mastering it. Cleanse continued staring at the Death Knight, who stood silently with his sword raised in a strange battle stance. The very next instant, countless phantom images surrounded him, making it impossible to tell which one was real. As Cleans watched the terrifying display, he immediately realized what he was facing: his personal secret technique that makes it impossible to tell which one is real. The phantoms rushed toward him from every direction, and Cleanse focused with everything he had except for one. Every sword path is fake. I can't just watch the blade. I have to predict and block. This strike must be a horizontal slash from the right, next is from the left one. After another, he accurately predicted and blocked every incoming attack, relying entirely on his judgment instead of his eyes. However, when the final attack arrived, the Death Knight suddenly changed the pattern and came crashing down from above with a powerful overhead. Cleanse barely managed to avoid it at the very last second before quickly analyzing the attack. As expected, the first strike was only a feint. I have to anticipate the highly erratic follow-up combo. Next is from behind. Once again, he successfully defended against the attacks coming from his blind spot, but the very last thrust pierced straight through his defense, sending him flying across the battlefield before he crashed heavily onto the ground while struggling to stand back up. Clint stared at the Death Knight in disbelief. The amount of mana in his spirit form shouldn't be any different from an ordinary knight. The Death Knight calmly shook his head before replying, "You shouldn't underestimate the efficiency of northern swordsmanship. Besides, this is a brutal technique that even my own children couldn't master. Even the strongest necromancer on the continent couldn't crack it." Hearing those words, Cleanse slowly looked back at him before speaking in a calm voice, "I didn't expect to show my hand this soon. I'm going all out from here." As soon as he finished speaking, he took the exact same sword stance as the Death Knight and confidently declared, "I've already seen it with my own eyes. It's not even that difficult, is it?" The Death Knight immediately frowned and shouted, "You crazy boy, this isn't a technique you can copy just by seeing it once." Without another word, both of them exploded into motion at incredible speed. Their swords clashed repeatedly while countless phantom blades filled the battlefield, making it almost impossible to distinguish reality from illusion. The fight continued at a terrifying pace, with both warriors using the exact same sword technique against each other, until finally the Death Knight shouted, "Don't get cocky, Archhamid. You're nothing more than a necromancer trying to help your enemy's family. Why would you do that of all people on this continent?" After another fierce exchange, Cleanse was finally wounded, and it was clear that he had lost the duel. Seeing this, the Death Knight looked at him with confusion and asked why you could have dodged that. Cleanse quietly lowered his head before softly speaking, "Two simple words: honor and loyalty." Then he slowly continued, "Those are the words you knights treasure even more than your own lives. I spent my entire life as a necromancer, and I could never understand them. What's wrong with doing bad things to bad people? I honestly thought it was pathetic, but then I saw someone who suffered the exact same pain that I did choose the complete opposite path. They did it for the children's future. I don't care what you think. I simply want to see that future with my own eyes." After silently listening to every single word, the Death Knight finally spoke in a much calmer voice, "I became a lingering spirit. Because of my unresolved regrets, I have no intention of telling you what those regrets are, but perhaps the answer truly lies in the future you keep talking about. Therefore, I wouldn't accept your contract." Hearing those unexpected words, Cleanse could not hide his shock. He stared at the Death Knight for a moment before extending his hand toward him and saying, "Good. Resolving those regrets is my job. After all, this is a mutual contract, not a subordinate contract. Read the terms one more time just to be safe." The Death Knight simply waved his hand dismissively and replied, "Terms? Forget all that. Just make it a subordinate contract. It'll be easier for both of us." Clint immediately shook his head and refused. "No way. I'm already turning my own ancestor soul into a Death Knight. If I also force him into a subordinate contract, then I'd be a real villain." After hearing that, the Death Knight let out a laugh and admitted, "Fine. You're surprisingly reasonable when it comes to things like this." With that, he accepted the magical oath, and only moments later the mysterious magic surrounding both of them gradually faded away. The narration then reveals that the contract with the 6th Duke Rudd Rinland has finally been completed. Clint smiles with satisfaction before saying, "Shall we go pay our respects to my Aunt Death Knight?" Contract complete. With that, the scene suddenly shifts to Little Red's room later that night, where she suddenly opens her eyes in alarm and quietly whispers, "Death Knight," but only a moment later, she convinces herself that it was nothing more than a dream, closes her eyes once again, and slowly falls back to sleep. After that, we heard Little Red's voice calling out, "Young Master, Master Cleanse." As the scene shifted, we saw Cleanse fast asleep. She walked over to him, looked at his motionless body, and said, "We're all ready to leave for Paul Wyvern. Is he dead?" At that moment, Clem suddenly woke up. Because of Little Red's tiny punches, blood was dripping from his nose. As he slowly gathered his senses, he remembered his fierce battle against the Death Knight and thought to himself, I used up every drop of my demonic energy for the Death Knight contract 3 days ago. I still haven't recovered. I feel absolutely exhausted. My body is operating at less than half capacity. It's only a few more hours until we reach Paul Wyvern. If I can just get a little more sleep before we arrive. But before he could relax, Little Red looked at him suspiciously and asked, something's off. Why have you been so sluggish for the past 3 days trying to act normal? Cleans replied, I just haven't been sleeping well lately. Little Red immediately narrowed her eyes and answered, liar. What could you possibly be doing in the middle of the night that would make you lose sleep? Hearing that, Clans forced a smile while nervously thinking to himself, did she figure it out? Keeping his composure, he quickly answered, I had some research to do late at night. However, Little Red wasn't convinced at all. She picked up the magic book, opened it and said, that's not true, your book is still open to the exact same page as before. The moment Clans saw the page, his expression froze in shock. In his mind, he panicked. Of all things, why did it have to be open to the Death Knight summoning circle? Trying to cover it up, he hurriedly said, I was just reviewing it. Give it back. But Little Red wasn't fooled in the slightest. Looking straight at him, she called him a liar and demanded, be honest. What were you doing all by yourself in the middle of the night? And behind both my back and Sir Dunkel's, no less. Flustered, Cleans immediately waved his hands and stammered, no, it's not like that. Just then Dunnel, who had been quietly standing nearby the entire time, finally spoke. Young Master Cleans, the moment Cleans heard his voice, he slowly turned toward him and a look of pure horror spread across his face. Inside his mind, he could only scream, damn it, was he listening to all of that? Cleans immediately looked at Dunnel and nervously asked, Dunnel, did you see it? The moment those words left his mouth, countless thoughts raced through his mind. It's too early for him to find out. If he discovers that I turned our ancestor into a Death Knight, just imagining the consequences made his heart sink. He couldn't even begin to picture what Dunnel would do if the truth came out. His mind screamed, I can't let that happen. But instead of reacting with anger, Dunnel simply stepped forward, gently placed a hand on Clean's shoulder and calmly said, it's all right, there's no need to be ashamed. Cleans froze in complete confusion. Wait, what? Is he actually letting this go? Thank goodness, hold on. What does he mean by no need to be ashamed? Instead of feeling relieved, he became even more puzzled because Dunnel's reaction was nothing like he had expected. Without explaining himself, Dunnel respectfully bowed his head toward Little Red and said, Lady Erin, listen closely. The young master is currently going through a very important phase of his life. Hearing that, Little Red tilted her head in confusion and asked, an important phase. Dunnel nodded with complete seriousness before continuing. Yes, and you can expect things like this to happen quite often from now. I'm still trying to understand what he meant. Little Red glanced at Cleans's exhausted appearance and asked, so he's going to keep looking completely drained like that? Dunnel answered without the slightest hesitation. Yes, but it's a perfectly natural phenomenon. Boys tend to have a lot of pent-up energy during puberty, you see. The moment Clans heard those words, his entire expression changed. He stood there in complete disbelief, thinking to himself, what does this crazy knight think I was doing? Realizing that Dunnel had completely misunderstood the situation, Clans hurriedly tried to clear things up. Look, I know exactly what you're thinking, but it's not like that. The truth is, before he could even finish his explanation, Dunkel calmly interrupted him and said, do not worry, young master. It's a rite of passage that every young man goes through. Cleans instantly lost his composure and shouted, I said that's not it. But Dunnel only smiled warmly and replied, like I said, there's really no need to be embarrassed. By now, Cleans was completely furious. I'm telling you it's not. I really didn't do that. Why on earth would I spend my nights doing something like that? Hey, I'm not finished talking. Where are you going? His desperate voice echoed through the room as Dunnel casually turned around and started walking toward the door. Hearing Cleans yelling behind him, Dunnel finally stopped and looked back before saying, I must go report this to the Duke as your escort knight. Why wouldn't I share such wonderful news? Besides, young Lord Delane went through the exact same phase. With a satisfied smile, he gently closed the door behind him and left without giving Cleans another chance to explain. Watching him disappear, Clans clenched his fists and angrily thought, I should have turned that bastard into a Death Knight instead of Rudd. Just then, Little Red looked at him and innocently asked, young master, aren't we leaving? But Cleans completely ignored the question. He immediately rushed toward the door, shouting Dawn, hoping to stop him before he could tell the Duke. The instant he threw the door open, however, he froze in surprise. Standing right in front of him was his. She was blushing shyly the moment their eyes met, staring at her in confusion. Cleanse softly called out her name before asking, Leah, why are you here? Still blushing, she smiled gently and answered, I'm here to pick you up clean. As soon as Clans heard that, he began thinking to himself, today is the day I agreed to visit Grand Duke Helen. But Leah came here in person. Instead of sending a regular servant or even one of her direct knights, the situation immediately felt unusual to him. A worried thought suddenly crossed his mind and he cautiously asked, wait, don't tell me, you didn't happen to hear what we were seeing in the room, did you? Leah looked at him with her usual calm expression and answered without hesitation, I have no interest in your private affairs, let's go. Grand Duke Halen is waiting. Hearing that response, Clans quietly sighed in relief, but his thoughts quickly shifted back to the real problem. Using the lady of the Fall Wavery family as nothing more than an errand girl. This proves that Hellion is ruling over the Fall Weaver family like a tyrant. She's already joined hands with a collateral branch to infiltrate the Rain Manos. If I don't deal with her now, she'll become an enormous threat in the future. During this visit, I have to make my presence known, and if necessary, I can even use Rudd. As they stepped outside, Clans noticed something strange and immediately asked, what? There are 2 carriages. Why are you getting into this one? Where's Erin? Leah calmly explained. She wanted to ride a horse, so I let her sit up front. The moment Clans heard that, his eyes widened in shock. Erin is riding a horse, then you stay here, I'll take the other carriage. However, Leah immediately rejected the idea. Looking at him without changing her her expression, she simply said, "We're leaving now." Before Clenny could argue any further, the carriage was already preparing to depart. Sitting inside with only Leah beside him, he could only think to himself, just the two of us. The awkward silence between them made the atmosphere feel even more uncomfortable. The story then shifts to explain the current state of the Fall Wyvern family. It was one of the three great families of the continent, a legendary bloodline known as the descendants of the Dragon Slayer. However, after the sudden death of the late Duke, the family's authority split into two rival factions. The first was the Grand Duchess faction, led by the late Duke's second wife, Helene of Rhineland, who had gradually seized control over the family's affairs. The second was the conservative faction, which followed the late Duke's eldest daughter, Leah, the respected commander of the Blue Holy Spear Knights. With the family's power divided between these two opposing sides, the conflict within Fall Wyvern had already begun, and Clans knew that his visit would place him right in the middle of that dangerous political struggle. As Clen sat inside the carriage, he reflected on the current situation. With the Grand Duchess faction on the rise, Helene now holds the real power, and because of that, Leah had to come and pick me up herself. Before he could think any further, Leah suddenly looked at him and said in a calm but commanding voice, "Take off your clothes." Clen stared at her in complete disbelief. "Are you serious? Why is all of this happening?" When she didn't answer immediately, he repeated himself even more nervously. "Are you serious? Am I cursed today? What is wrong with everyone in this situation? The vibe is exactly like last time, just like back then. What is her problem with me?" Unable to understand what was going on, he sighed in frustration before joking. "Is a knight commander mugging me instead of escorting me?" Without showing the slightest hint of amusement, Leah replied, "I'm not joking, take them off." Realizing she wasn't kidding, Cleans became cautious. "I need to find out what she's trying to dig up." Looking directly at her, he said, "If you're asking a young lord of Rhineland to strip, I'll need an explanation first." Leah calmly nodded before explaining. "Do you know what's been happening outside the Rhineland territory lately? People have suddenly gone berserk, wielding abnormal strength. They can throw objects with one hand that even three grown men couldn't lift together. Their behavior defies all common sense." Cleans frowned in confusion. "Abnormal strength. Isn't that just some new kind of magic? And what does that have to do with me taking off my clothes?" Leah answered without hesitation. "The trial by combat. As I said back then, your hands are definitely not those of a knight. Yet you defeated a knight from the Empire in swordsmanship as if you possessed that same abnormal strength. The people showing these symptoms all share one common trait, the irregular appearance of blue veins. So I need to check whether your body has similar marks. I expect your cooperation." After hearing her explanation, Clen silently thought, "Blue veins? That's news to me. Even if I told her that my swordsmanship comes from my eyes, she wouldn't believe me anyway. But since she went through all the trouble of investigating this, I might as well play along as he prepared himself." Another thought crossed his mind. A child throwing tantrums yesterday might be driving a carriage today. Even those you hated to death fade from memory over time. Cleans took a deep breath before calmly explaining, "Learning is no different. With talent, effort, and necessity pushing you forward, swordsmanship is something you can master incredibly fast. Understand, nothing in this world stays the same. Everything changes, even at this very moment as we speak." Before he could finish, Leah cut him off with a completely straight face. "Then why is your height still the same? You're still shorter than me. Your back is the same and your shoulders are still so narrow. You're just a narrow-shouldered runt." Her blunt remark left Clen speechless for a second, then as if something suddenly clicked in his mind, he changed the topic. "Wait, now that I think about it, the trial by combat, you were there, right? Didn't you say you'd give me something if I won?" The instant he asked that question, he noticed a subtle change in Leah's expression. "She's flustered," he thought to himself. "Perfect. I need to keep pressing her so she can't change the subject." With that advantage in mind, Cleans continued pushing the conversation while the two of them argued back and forth over whether she would keep her promise. Smirking, he said, "Look at this. What is the world coming to? Do knight commanders lie these days? If you can't even keep a straight face, what are your knights supposed to learn from you?" Trying to shut him up, Leah simply replied, "Just take them off already." Seeing her reaction, Cleans celebrated inwardly. "I knew this would work. See, even a knight commander is helpless against this. This is the power of..." But before he could finish that thought, he suddenly shouted, "Then why don't you strip first?" The carriage instantly became filled with awkward tension once again. The two continued arguing over the same issue, but the story deliberately skipped whatever happened next between them, leaving the outcome completely unseen. The scene then shifted to the magnificent Fall Wyvern estate. As soon as they arrived, Little Red looked completely amazed by the luxurious surroundings. Cleans was equally stunned. Looking around at the enormous estate, he couldn't hide his surprise. "It looks at least 3 times larger than our estate." As he admired the breathtaking view, he silently thought, the scale, the architecture, it's practically a palace. "I didn't realize the Fall Wyvern family was this powerful." Before he could take in everything, Little Red looked around in confusion and asked, "But where did the Night Lady go?" Clen shrugged and replied, "No idea. She vanished the moment we arrived." Just then, a voice called out from behind them, "Rhineland, I am Gordon, the chief butler of the Fall Wyvern ducal estate." Cleanse and Little Red immediately turned toward him, respectfully bowed their heads and introduced themselves. "Thank you for the invitation. I am Klein Rhineland." The butler politely dismissed the formalities and said, "There is no need for such courtesy. The Grand Duke is already waiting for you. Please follow me." Following Gordon through the estate, they entered a grand hall where numerous influential nobles and attendants were already gathered. As they walked through the corridor, Gordon casually remarked, "It has been a very long time since a member of the Rhineland Duke's family last visited us." Cleans responded, "Is that so?" The butler nodded. "Indeed, even the late Duke was deeply concerned about it before he passed away. But now that you are here, young lord, I expect many things will soon change." Those words immediately caught Clen's attention. What does he mean by change, he wondered. As the chief butler, he was the late Duke's closest confidant. There's no reason for him to say something like that to an outsider like me. Does he actually actually consider me an ally? Curious, Cleans was about to ask, excuse me, but may I ask you something? However, before Gordon could answer, another voice interrupted from ahead. That face, you look just like your mother. The entire hall instantly fell silent. Everyone's attention shifted toward the person who had just spoken. One after another, the nobles in attendance respectfully lowered their heads as the figure approached, making it clear that someone of extraordinary authority had arrived. The story then revealed the identity of the newcomer, the leader of the collateral branch. Looking at Clans with a warm smile, she said, "Welcome, my beloved nephew Clean." And with that, she was formally introduced as Grand Duke Helen. The scene then shifts to the Death Knight who was speaking with Clans. Clans calmly says, "It's already in our contract, but I should remind you to restore Rhineland. The very reason I summoned you, the person I am about to meet, is my current enemy, your daughter." The story then returns to the present, where Helen is standing directly in front of him, silently staring at Cleans. We are then told more about her. Helen was Henkel's older sister who had married into the Fall Weaver family, one of the Empire's 3 great dukes. However, after the Duke of Fall Wyvern died, she formed an alliance with the Empire. She seized absolute power within the family and eventually became the one who brought about the downfall of the main Rhineland family. Now she stands as the leader of the collateral branch of the Rhineland family. Breaking the silence, Hellion looks at him and says, "Come over here, Klein." The people standing nearby immediately begin whispering among themselves, "Is that young Master Clean? Who is he?" One of them answers, "You know, he's the boy who kept insisting he was Archimond ever since he was a kid." At that moment, Little Red, who had come along with Cleans, looks at him and innocently asks, "Master, what about me?" Cleans points toward another side of the hall and says, "Go over there and eat some sweets. Those will be gone in no time." The moment she hears the word sweets, Little Red excitedly dashes toward the dessert table without wasting a single second. Right after that, the scene transitions to a massive dinner table where everyone has gathered. Looking at Helen, Ken calmly greets her. "It has been a while, Aunt Helen." Hellion calmly looks at him and says, "Yes, sit down, Klein." As Clans takes a seat, his eyes briefly fall on the young man sitting nearby and he quietly thinks to himself, "So he is Helen's son, he doesn't seem pleased that I'm here." At that very moment, another voice suddenly echoes inside his head. It is the Death Knight. In a serious tone, he says, "Hey, Archaman, make sure I am never forced to strike down my own daughter." Hearing those words, Clans can't help but sigh inwardly. What is he talking about? He didn't even read the contract properly. Before he can think any further, Hellion notices his expression and asks, "Is something wrong, Klein? If you are uncomfortable, feel free to tell me anytime." Clans glances around the enormous dining hall, sensing the heavy tension filling the room, and silently thinks, "Good grief. It feels like everyone here is ready to draw their swords, trying to continue the conversation." Helen looks at him carefully before speaking again. "Anyway, seeing how much you've grown brings back memories, and those eyes, you look so much like your mother, Claire." Cleans listens quietly before replying, "So that's how it is." Helen gives a faint smile and says it's a compliment. Since Claire was truly beautiful, Clee remains calm as he answers, "Aunt Helen, unfortunately, I have almost no memory of my mother. I was told she passed away when I was very young, so if you're trying to win me over, wouldn't talking about something else be better?" Helen's expression immediately turns cold after hearing those words. Looking straight into his eyes, she firmly replies, "You misunderstand. I'm not trying to win your favor. I am giving you the opportunity to choose a chance to leave Rhineland and join me." Without taking her eyes off him, Hellion continues speaking in a calm yet commanding voice. "I have heard all about you, Clean. How you defeated an imperial knight without a champion and brought the proud Count Cornwell to his knees, all by your own strength." She pauses for a moment before her tone grows more serious. "But what about Rhineland? The main family and the collateral branch have long been divided, and those who are supposed to protect the family can't even take care of themselves. That is why I led the Fall Wyvern family and allied with the Empire, because the era of surviving on a family name alone is over." As she says these words, she slowly pours water into her glass, her calm movements making it seem as though she has already decided the future she believes in. Cleans listens to everything without changing his expression before finally responding. "Rhineland has ruled the North successfully until now. Are you telling me to throw all of that away and become the Empire's dog?" Helen remains completely unfazed by his sharp words. Looking directly at him, she calmly replies, "The Empire's dog. It's only natural you'd think that way. Before the Emperor, our ducal houses are nothing more than mere droplets of water. However, just because a droplet is lost in the river doesn't mean it has ceased to exist." She gently swirls the water in her glass as she speaks, then finishes her thought with complete confidence. In fact, it might even turn the tide one day. Hearing Hellion's words, Clans quietly thinks to himself, is she pretending to align with the Empire while secretly planning to seize control? She isn't called the Queen of the Collateral Branch for nothing. A faint smile appears on his face as he replies, "Sure, I guess. I wondered how a bunch of worthless collateral relatives could act so boldly. Now I see they have quite the backing." The moment those words leave his mouth, the atmosphere around the table instantly turns tense. Helen's son can no longer contain his anger and suddenly rises in fury, clearly offended by Clen's remark. Before the situation can escalate, Helen calmly stops him and continues as though nothing had happened. Looking directly at Clen's, Helen says, "Don't waste your talent on a sinking family, Clen. Join me and I will give you something worthy of that choice. Something money can't buy, more precious than life itself." She pauses for a brief moment before revealing what she means, and that is time. Even the devil who shook the continent and the hero who defeated him eventually both vanished before time. Neither power nor honor can overcome it. Everyone in this world must ultimately bow before time, but I possess a special power to overcome even that. If you become mine, I will grant it to you as well. Those words immediately catch Clans' attention. Deep in thought, he says to himself, "Time, a special power. Her eyes are far too calm for this to be a mere bluff. Does she really possess something like that?" After a moment of silence, he finally gives his answer. "Aunt, if you're asking why I'm protecting Rinland, I don't really know myself. Unless I'm the one ruining them with my own hands, I have no intention of letting anyone else do it. At the same time, another thought crosses his mind. Sorry, but I haven't seen the future Burkle spoke of yet. Until then, I have no intention of handing this family over to anyone. Hearing his unwavering response, Helen simply looks at him before calmly saying, I never expected to be rejected. Clans calmly breaks the silence and says, there are many things you'll experience for the first time in life. You'll have to get used to it from now on. The moment he finishes speaking, the man sitting beside Helen suddenly stands up, drawing his sword. He walks straight toward Cleans and points the blade directly at him, staring him in the eyes. He declares, kneel and beg my mother for forgiveness this instant. If you do, I will overlook your insolence just now. Clint doesn't look the slightest bit intimidated. Instead, he calmly replies, Hector Rossfall, I didn't realize my aunt's son was such a mama's boy. Hector's face immediately darkens with rage as he snaps back. There's no way a bastard like you could understand such noble devotion since you grew up without a mother. In the very next instant, Cleans casually blocks Hector's sword with his fork before saying, let me give you some advice. Don't interrupt when adults are speaking. Didn't your mother teach you any manners? Tightening his grip on his sword, Hector angrily shouts, a brat like you who looks younger than me. Cleans immediately cuts him off. Shut up, I'm way older than you. Stop talking back, kid. Seeing the argument spiral out of control, Helen firmly orders, enough, Hector. Even so, Hector's anger refuses to settle. Inwardly, he thinks making such a scene in front of mother. Then lowering his head slightly, he says, I apologize, mother, but this bastard insulted the Duchess of Fall Wyvern. I must take at least one of his hands before anyone can stop him. Hector lunges forward to slice off Clee's hand. Cleans instantly jumps backward with incredible speed, sending forks and knives flying into the air from the table. Without hesitation, Hector grabs the airborne knives and hurls every single one of them toward Cleans. Cleans effortlessly blocks every incoming attack before the two clash in a brief but intense sword fight. Their blades collide repeatedly, but Cleans completely dominates the exchange from start to finish. In the end, he overwhelms Hector, slams him to the ground, grabs him by the throat, and coldly says, come to think of it, and is right. To me, time is more precious than life. Since I've only just woken up after so long, that makes this even harder to understand. Why should I waste my precious time on a worthless pest like you when I can just kill you? Just as the tension reaches its peak, a man suddenly appears beside them. Placing a hand on Clemen's shoulder, he calmly says, please release the young master. You are in her grace's presence. Please return to your seats. The story then reveals his identity. He is Sanchez, Helen's direct knight. Feeling the overwhelming presence behind him, Cleans quietly thinks he didn't even reveal his presence until the moment he placed his hand on me. Meanwhile, Hector, now back on his feet, grits his teeth and thinks to himself, I let myself get too worked up in front of mother. Continuing this would only cause trouble for everyone. He steadies himself, raises his sword once more, and says, fine, consider this my mother's mercy. But the very next moment, he suddenly charges forward again, launching a surprise attack with a knife, clearly intending to kill Clans. Before the strike can reach its target, someone suddenly steps between them. A young woman blocks the attack, making a dramatic entrance. This is the first appearance of Kenz's future wife. Standing protectively in front of him, she looks straight at Kenz and declares, I'm here to make you pay for your insolence on the carriage, Klein. After hearing those words, Kenz quietly thought to himself, rudeness in the carriage. At that moment, the scene shifted back to the conversation they had earlier inside the carriage. Leah had calmly declared that she would take full responsibility for everything that had happened. Remembering those words, Clans realized what she had truly meant when she spoke to him. Just then, as Leah started walking away, Helen's youngest son suddenly stepped forward and shouted, wait, that bastard insulted not only my mother, but also the authority of Fall Wyvern, and yet you're protecting him instead of subduing him. Without showing the slightest hesitation, Leah turned toward him and replied in a cold, unwavering voice, as someone who swings their sword at a guest has no right to speak of our family's authority. What about you? You're the one who got subdued, aren't you? Her sharp response left him furious, and he looked ready to explode before he could say another word. His mother interrupted him with a voice so commanding that everyone instantly fell silent. Stop it, Hector. This was supposed to be a pleasant gathering. How long do you plan on making a fool of yourself? Her expression was filled with anger, and the overwhelming pressure pouring from her body was enough to terrify even her own son. Watching the entire scene unfold, Clee thought to himself with just one word, the atmosphere completely changed. What overwhelming pressure. Showing proper respect, Leah immediately bowed her head and said, I apologize for causing a disturbance. Grand Duchess Helen. However, the Grand Duchess calmly replied, there is no need for that. I will remember once again who it is you are protecting. Leah remained composed and answered without wavering. The primary duty of the Blue Holy Sphere Knights is to ensure the safety of our guests. I ask for your generous understanding without wasting another moment. She turned toward her knights and gave her next order. Now then, listen, and Blue Holy Spear Knights. We have training tomorrow, so prepare yourselves. The knights immediately responded in unison, yes, Commander. Seeing the discipline and authority she commanded, Clans couldn't help but think, so that is the first princess of Fall Wyvern and the commander of the Ya Blue Holy Spirit Knights. Leah and Fall Wyvern after giving her orders. Leah began walking away and calmly announced, I will be resting in my room. Everyone is dismissed. Her soldiers respectfully followed behind her and answered together, understood, Commander. Once she finally returned to her room, she quietly closed the door behind her. The moment she was alone, the strong and emotionless expression she had maintained all day completely disappeared. Letting out a long breath, she softly whispered, I made it through another day. I did well, right, Father. I can't take it anymore. I need to relieve the stress. With no one around to see her, the burden she had been carrying finally began to show. The story then revealed more about her. Lady Leah of the Fall Wyvern family belonged to one of the most prestigious noble houses in the Western region. Across the kingdom, she was renowned for her extraordinary combat skills and her cold, emotionless personality. To To everyone around her, she appeared to be the perfect warrior, strict, fearless, and impossible to approach. However, beneath that icy exterior, Leah was hiding a secret that no one else knew. As soon as Leah pulled on the hidden rope, a secret compartment opened, revealing countless treasured items before her. The moment she saw them, her eyes began shining with excitement and a bright smile spread across her face. In a voice filled with admiration, she softly whispered, "Lord Archamond." The story then revealed the truth about her biggest secret. Leah was an enormous fan of Lord Archamond. Over the years, she had gathered an incredible collection dedicated entirely to him. There were countless portraits of Lord Archamond, all carefully drawn by her own hands because she was never satisfied with the official versions. She had also collected rare necromancy relics that were said to have once belonged to Lord Archamond himself, even purchasing some of them at expensive auctions. Her room was filled with circular portraits of him, biography collections documenting his life, and most precious of all, her favorite possession, a handmade double-sided Lord Archamond cushion. Hugging the cushion tightly against her chest, she happily imagined him speaking to her. In her fantasy, Archamond gently smiled and said, "Your battle was perfect, Leah. I shall pat your head as a reward." Hearing those imaginary words made her blush with embarrassment as she shyly replied, "I'm so embarrassed, Lord Archamond." Still hugging the cushion, Leah continued talking to herself. "By the way, are historians blind? Every official portrait has a completely different face, and even the clothing patterns are all over the place. At this rate, I have no choice but to redraw them myself, though thanks to that, I got to make them exactly to my taste." As she spoke, she imagined Archamond standing right in front of her. In her imagination, he calmly smiled and told her, "Calm down, Leah, I'm right here." The fantasy was so vivid that she completely lost herself in it, becoming so excited that she accidentally fell over with a loud thud. The noise was so loud that it could even be heard outside her room. Embarrassed but still unwilling to let go of the cushion, she climbed back onto her bed, hugged it even tighter, and quietly whispered, "Everyone points fingers at you and calls you the devil of the continent, but sometimes I envy that. Because no matter what the world called you, you lived as yourself until the very end. That's why it's such a shame that you disappeared before I was even born. I wish I could have met you just once." Her cheerful expression slowly faded into one filled with longing and regret as she held the cushion close to her heart. Just then, someone suddenly knocked on her door. Startled, Leah quickly sat upright and called out, "Who is it? I thought I said I would be resting today." At the same time, panic filled her mind as she desperately thought, "I can't let anyone see this. My reputation as the commander." From outside the room, a familiar voice answered, "It's me, Klein. Are you inside?" Standing outside the door, Klein silently thought to himself, "I don't want to get involved with a woman who calls me a kid, but it's true that she helped me, so a simple thank you should be enough." When Leah opened the door, she immediately asked him, "What are you doing here?" The moment her eyes landed on Klein, countless thoughts rushed through her mind. Klein Inland, the guy who has been rumored since childhood to be Lord Archamond's reincarnation. I investigated him several times just in case, but there wasn't the slightest trace of necromancy. There wasn't even any sign of other spells. Of course, there's no way Lord Archamond would be reborn with such a blank face. No, that's not what's important. Leah continued observing Klein in silence while countless thoughts ran through her mind. The only suspicious thing is that his swordsmanship is improving at an abnormally fast rate for someone who has no mana. And above all, the way he looked at his opponent during the trial by combat. Those were definitely the eyes of someone choosing their prey. Besides, he carries the same Rhineland bloodline as Helen. I must never trust him carelessly. Although she couldn't find any proof that the rumors about him were true, something about Klein continued to make her uneasy. Before either of them could say another word, Little Red suddenly rushed into Leah's room without permission. Looking around with sparkling eyes, she happily exclaimed, "The Night Lady's room is huge." Startled, Leah immediately tried to stop her. "Wait, don't go inside my room." But before the situation could become even more chaotic, Klein stepped forward and sincerely said, "Thanks. If it weren't for you, things would have got much worse. It must have been difficult for you to stand in front of Grand Duchess Helene. So thank you for helping, I mean it." Hearing his genuine gratitude caught Leah off guard. For a brief moment, she wondered, did I go too far? He only came here to say hello. However, Klein wasn't finished yet. Looking directly at her, he asked, "Do you want to make a deal with me? I got some information from Gordon before coming here." The story then shifted to the conversation Klein had previously had with Gordon. Klein asked, "The cause of death for the former Duke of Fall Wyvern was suspicious." Gordon nodded and answered, "Yes, officially it was reported as an illness, but there are far too many suspicious details. Grand Duchess Helen was the only person present at his deathbed, and she is also the one who possesses the Duke's will." Those words strongly suggested that Helen might have been connected to the death of the former Duke of Fall Wyvern, Leah's own father. Returning to the present, Klein calmly said, "As you already know, we share the same enemy, Helen, so let's trade what we need. What do you say? Neither of us has anything to lose. If there's something else you want." He paused for a moment before asking, "Why aren't you answering?" Leah wasn't even looking at him anymore. Instead, she quietly asked, "You heard about my father from somewhere, didn't you? And that made you so sure." Klein finished her sentence himself, "That I'd team up with you just because I hate Helen." Looking straight into his eyes, Leah finally revealed what she truly thought. "You're just like Helen. You're the kind of guy who sees someone's pain and immediately calculates how to use it." Klein frowned in confusion and replied, "So you're saying I'm just like her?" Before either of them could continue arguing, Little Red's cheerful voice interrupted the tense atmosphere. Holding something in her hand, she excitedly shouted, "Young master, I found a cute frog doll." The moment Leah saw what she was holding, her face instantly turned pale. "Archamond's handmade doll," she screamed internally. Klein looked at the doll with a puzzled expression and casually commented, "That thing looks pretty ugly." Hearing those words, Leah immediately rushed toward Little Red in a panic, desperately trying to take the doll back. However, Little Red happily hugged it and replied, "No, this frog doll is really cute." Trying her best to stay calm despite Despite the panic in her heart, Leah hurriedly said, "It's important." Watching the entire scene unfold, Klein couldn't help thinking, that piece of rag is important. But the disaster had only just begun. Being an innocent little girl, Little Red had absolutely no idea what she was about to uncover. She noticed the hidden rope nearby and curiously reached for it. The instant Leah realized what she was doing, she completely lost her composure. "No, don't pull that," she shouted while rushing toward her. Unfortunately, she was already too late. Little Red pulled the rope and the hidden collection was instantly revealed. Countless portraits of Lord Archamond appeared before everyone. Innocently pointing at them, Little Red innocently said, "This guy looks really ugly." Seeing everything exposed, Klein's eyes widened in disbelief. Wait, that doll, and now this could it be? Then another shocking thought crossed his mind. No way, is that supposed to be me? Before he could recover, Little Red ran toward the handmade cushion and excitedly picked it up. "Young master, look at this weird pillow." Klein stared at it in complete disbelief. No way, is that really supposed to be me? Meanwhile, Leah's mind had gone completely blank. What do I do now? I'm the commander of the Blue Holy Spear Knights. What will happen to my reputation? Embarrassment, panic, and despair all hit her at once. Unable to think rationally anymore, she suddenly swung her hand and delivered a powerful slap straight across Klein's face. The scene then abruptly shifted elsewhere. Helen was shown gripping her own son by the neck, lifting him off the ground with terrifying ease. His condition looked miserable as he desperately struggled to breathe. Looking down at him with eyes that had turned completely blood red, Helen coldly declared, "You're completely useless." Barely able to speak, her son weakly gasped, "Mother, why?" But there wasn't the slightest trace of sympathy on Helen's face. Her crimson eyes radiated nothing but terrifying rage. "Do you have any idea what you did today? You drew your sword in front of those fools from the conservative faction, and in a fit of emotion, you provoked someone you couldn't defeat. In the end, Leah was the one who had to subdue you. To think that the heir to this family could be so careless." The moment they returned home, she let go of him and walked forward as if nothing had happened. Without even looking back, she continued, "And it was such a rare opportunity to have dinner with my nephew." Hearing those words, Hector could no longer hold back his emotions. "Mother, that bastard insulted you right in front of me. Before my duty as an heir, I'm a son who loves his mother. What child could simply stand there and listen while his own mother was being mocked? But instead of standing by my side, you took his side. I would even give my life for you, mother. So why is it that you do not love me?" Helen quietly listened to every word before finally speaking in a calm but cold voice. "My son Hector, I love you more than anyone, but right now that is of no use at all. Go to the fortress city of Garland in the southwest. For the time being, take charge as the defense commander there. It is a position comparable to that of a knight commander, and it is a great opportunity. There you'll receive every kind of training you need." The moment Hector heard her decision, his expression stiffened. Deep inside, he thought, "No, mother isn't giving me an opportunity. She's trying to get rid of me. I have to become a more useful son." Even though those thoughts filled his mind, he simply lowered his head and replied, "Understood." Without saying another word, he turned around and quietly left the room. As soon as Hector was gone, Helen returned to her room and spoke in a firm voice. "Come out, Sanchez." A shadow emerged from the darkness and Sanchez respectfully bowed his head. "You called Grand Duchess?" Helen looked at him without hesitation. "Contact Fallen Leaves." Sanchez's eyes narrowed slightly. "By Fallen Leaves, you don't mean?" "Yes," Helen interrupted. "Get rid of Klein and the maid who came with him." Sanchez immediately voiced his concern. "If they make a move, this could get out of hand. Please leave it to me." Helen calmly shook her head. "I do not doubt your abilities, Sanchez. You were the one who turned the tide of the battle at Carmen Gorge several years ago all by yourself. But Klein is a member of the main Rhineland family. There is no need for us to be unnecessarily connected to his death right now. Stay nearby and report back to me once everything is over." Sanchez respectfully lowered his head once again. "Understood. As you command, Grand Duchess." After giving her orders, Helen immediately opened a drawer. Inside was a small bottle filled with a strange crimson-red liquid. She picked it up without the slightest hesitation and began drinking it. The instant the liquid entered her body, a mysterious power rapidly spread through her veins. Its energy surged throughout her entire body and an overwhelming aura burst out from her, filling the room with immense pressure. As that terrifying power continued to spread, Helen quietly muttered to herself, "Go on then. Prove it to me. Prove whether you're worth keeping alive." Meanwhile, elsewhere, after Leah had slapped the protagonist earlier, she stood there silently, lost in thought. Wait, Leah was still standing there, completely frozen after what had just happened. Her mind was in chaos as she stared at her own hand. What did I just do? I hit the second young master of Rhineland with my own hand. No matter how angry I was, this is she stopped halfway through her thoughts before slowly taking a deep breath. A strange expression appeared on her face as she quietly admitted, "I see. The truth is he's the person I despise most in the entire world." Hearing those unexpected words, Kenz looked at her in confusion. Before he could even ask anything, Leah continued, "You know him too, right? Archamond, the devil of the continent from 200 years ago. I'm a knight commander, so I have to study history. In order to defeat someone strong, you first have to know them." At the same time, however, a completely different train of thought was racing through her mind. If this guy opens his mouth, rumors will spread throughout the entire mansion, won't they? Then my dignity as a knight commander will be completely ruined. I have to smooth this over somehow. Trying her best to sound natural, she immediately added, "So it's all for studying history. That's why I've been collecting materials too." Clans nodded as if he understood. "Studying history? I see. You're working hard." But inside, he was on the verge of panicking. "I'm screwed. She goes this far just to study history and because she hates me. More importantly, my cheek still hurts from that slap earlier. Why is she so strong? No, get a hold of yourself. If someone like her finds out who I really am, she might kill me. No, before I die, she'll probably hit me a few more times first." Meanwhile, Little Red was still happily playing with her doll, as if none of the tension around her even existed. Looking back and forth between the two of them, she innocently said, "No matter how I look at it, he's exactly like you, young master." The moment those words left her mouth, both Both Cleanse and Leah rejected the idea at exactly the same time and in exactly the same tone. No, without wasting another second, Klee grabbed Little Red's hand and began pulling her away. Let's go. If we stay here any longer, it'll shave years off my life. Just as he was about to leave, Leah suddenly stopped him. I'll do it. The deal. She lowered her head slightly before continuing. I'm sorry for hitting you. I got too emotional just now, and you're right. If I truly want to stop Helen, I can't do it alone. I let my useless pride get in the way. As for the terms of the deal, we can each decide them ourselves. Clen remained silent for a moment before shaking his head. Forget it. Let's call off the deal. Leia looked at him in complete surprise. What? Why? Clerd, honestly. That look on your face earlier keeps bothering me, and I don't want to drag you into this if it means seeing you make that kind of expression again. So don't decide right now. When you're truly ready, tell me then. The moment she heard those words, Leah's heart skipped a beat. What was that? Why did he suddenly overlap with Lord Archaman just now? Clen simply apologized before turning around to leave. As he walked away, his own thoughts became heavy. The one who tried to use my pain against me until just moments ago. The absolute worst. Before he could get very far, Leah suddenly called out to him once again. Instead of a deal, how about an alliance? Clen stopped walking and looked back at her. You protect Rhineland and I'll reclaim House Paul Wyvern. It's true that we need each other. Cleans replied, that's no different from a deal. Leah gently shook her head. It is different. A deal ends the moment one side is at a disadvantage, but if it's an alliance, shouldn't we be able to entrust our backs to each other? As she spoke, another thought quietly echoed inside her heart. He isn't Lord Archama. That man is already gone. I was only giving myself false hope, but I feel like I'll regret it if I don't do this. Gathering her courage, she looked straight into his eyes and extended her hand. I'm asking you to be my ally, Clean. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. Silence filled the space between them. Then, without saying another word, the protagonist slowly reached out his own hand. Seeing his response, Leah's eyes widened in surprise. The two of them shook hands, and with that single gesture, their alliance was finally sealed. As the protagonist looked at their joined hands, a deep thought echoed in his mind. This is only the beginning. After that, the scene shifted to Sanchez, who was quietly making his way through a dark underground sewer. He continued walking through the narrow passage until after a while he arrived in front of a massive iron door. Without saying a word, he placed a single golden coin on the ground before it and calmly spoke. Request. The moment the coin touched the floor, a voice echoed from beyond the door. What is the request? Sanchez answered without hesitation. The assassination of Rinland's second young master, including the maid who came with him. The maid he was referring to was none other than Little Red. An old man's voice responded from the other side of the door. The condition for submitting requests to Fallen Leaves is that there must be no face-to-face contact. Use this and you will be connected to them. Do not open your eyes under any circumstances. Sanchez immediately took the strange circular object that had been handed to him and activated it. The instant he connected with it, a dark and ominous energy spread through the surroundings. Moments later, an eerie voice echoed through the darkness. We will verify the details of the request. Elimination targets Klein Rinland and his maid. They are currently confirmed to be under the protection of Lady Leah of House Paul Wyvern. As we must avoid the night order surveillance, an additional fee is required. Without showing the slightest hesitation, Sanchez pulled out the same crimson-red bottle and held it forward as payment. This is something you can't obtain unless it comes directly from the Imperial family. After the request is complete, I'll give you 10 more. After a brief silence, the mysterious voice finally replied, payment confirmed. We will deploy 3 assassins from Fallen Leaves and eliminate them all. The scene then shifted elsewhere. Inside a room, Sol was surrounded by a strange presence. An unusual energy floated around his ears and wrapped itself around his entire body, almost as if it were silently delivering information directly to him. After listening for a moment, Sol gave a faint smile. I see. So Helen has finally made her move. At that very moment, the scene shifted once again, revealing the very group of assassins that had been dispatched to kill the protagonist. The protagonist looked at every one of them with a calm expression before smiling slightly. Good. Shall I use some necromancy for the first time in a while? A few moments later, the scene shifted to the open training grounds outside. Numerous people were slowly making their way across the area, completely unaware of the danger lurking nearby. High above them, 3 assassins stood silently on a rooftop, watching every movement below. One of them calmly gave the order, begin pursuit. Another immediately responded while reviewing the mission details, confirming target information. Name, Klein Rinland. According to public battle records, his swordsmanship matches that of a knight commander, but he possesses no mana. Hearing this, the second assassin asked, what about the other target? The first assassin continued, she's an ordinary maid except there's no information on her identity. The maid young Master Clean brought out of the reformatory beyond that her birthplace, age, family ties, prior history, and everything else. Even after combing through our organization's entire information network, we found nothing that made us a person who appeared out of thin air. The remaining 2 members were visibly surprised. One of them couldn't believe it and said, our information network spans the entire continent. That shouldn't be possible. However, the leader showed no concern. It doesn't matter. Fulfilling the contracts we accept is the duty of Fallen Leaves. Even if information is lacking, that is no reason to halt the contract. Besides, considering we'll receive that as payment, Delphin, I'll leave the maid to you. After saying that, he turned around and disappeared from the rooftop. Delphin simply nodded and replied, understood. The remaining assassin then stated, we will take down young Master Clean just as they prepared to move. The first assassin suddenly stopped and quietly warned, the target has stopped. Meanwhile, Clean had already noticed every single one of their movements. Looking completely calm, he thought to himself, Auntie is quite cruel. She was rather kind to me earlier too. I can't believe she really sent Fallen Leaves. Fallen Leaves was an underground assassination organization active throughout the entire continent. Once they accepted a contract, they completed it by any means necessary. They were a shadow organization that valued secrecy above everything else, and their greatest weapon wasn't wasn't simply their strength. It was the enormous amount of personal information they possessed on nearly everyone across the continent, north, west, east, or south. No matter where someone tried to hide, fallen leaves could find them. Even if an unnamed child had been abandoned in the middle of the sea, their information network could still uncover the identities of that person's mother and father. Their intelligence network was considered unmatched anywhere in the world. Suddenly, one assassin realized something was wrong and shouted, "Our position has been exposed." How? The leader didn't waste a second questioning it. There are no exceptions. Eliminate the target according to procedure. The very next moment, several smoke bombs appeared in his hand. Without hesitation, he threw every one of them toward Klein at incredible speed. Within seconds, the entire area was swallowed by a massive cloud of thick smoke, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Taking full advantage of the cover, the assassins immediately launched countless sharp weapons toward their target. Every single blade disappeared into the dense fog. For a brief moment, complete silence filled the battlefield. Then, as the smoke slowly began to clear, something completely unexpected happened. All of the weapons suddenly came flying back toward the assassins themselves. Caught completely off guard, both assassins were forced to desperately dodge their own attacks with great difficulty. Moments later, they landed on the ground directly in front of Klein. Looking at them with a relaxed smile, Klein casually asked, "What's wrong? Didn't you account for them coming back? I'm the kind of person who returns what I receive. I guess that incredible information network doesn't include personality profiles. Anyway, Auntie really spent a fortune. Fallen leaves must have been quite expensive. She didn't drain the family's emergency fund just to catch me, did she? But if she wanted to kill me, she should have sent one more squad." And one of the assassins narrowed his eyes and muttered, "He knows information about the client." The leader immediately responded, "Don't let him get into you. Continue the mission." Without another word, both assassins rushed toward Klein at tremendous speed, drawing their swords as they attacked from both sides. Their coordination was flawless, and their katanas struck one after another with relentless speed. However, Klein calmly raised his own sword and effortlessly blocked the first strike. The assassins refused to slow down, unleashing an endless stream of fast and precise attacks, gradually forcing Klein backward step by step. Even while being pushed into the defensive, Klein remained perfectly composed, watching their movements carefully. He thought to himself, "Fallen leaves, they certainly know how to fight. In that case, let's see how far my swordsmanship will take me." The two assassins charged forward once again without wasting a single second. Moving with incredible speed, they attacked Klein simultaneously, hoping to overwhelm him through perfect coordination. One of them launched a powerful kick while the other prepared to follow up with another strike. However, Klein reacted instantly. He blocked the kick with ease and, using the force behind the attack, threw both assassins backward at the same time. The impact sent them flying several steps away, although the sheer force also pushed Klein back slightly. As soon as he regained his footing, he calmly raised his sword back into a ready stance. One of the assassins immediately warned his partner, "Don't let your guard down, Klein." Couldn't help but smirk before replying, "Oh, are you worried about me?" The very next moment, the assassin's katana clashed against Klein's sword, producing a sharp metallic sound that echoed across the battlefield. Without changing his expression, the assassin coldly answered, "I wasn't talking to you." At that exact instant, his partner silently appeared behind, Klein with his katana already swinging toward his back. Sensing the ambush at the last possible moment, Klein instantly leaped away, disappearing from that spot before the blade could reach him. As he landed safely several meters away, he carefully analyzed their teamwork and thought to himself, "One creates an opening and the other exploits it. These aren't just assassins, they're human weapons trained for battle." Just then, the Death Knight's voice echoed inside Klein's mind, "Don't get sloppy, Archimant. Those bastards move well. Get careless and they'll take your head." Klein sighed while keeping his eyes on the enemies. "Thanks for the concern, but don't talk to me in the middle of a fight." The Death Knight immediately replied, "Concerned? You've got the wrong idea. If you die, I have to go back to the coffin too." Watching Klein seemingly speak to himself during the battle, both assassins exchanged confused looks. They silently came to the same conclusion, talking to himself during combat, a possible mental instability. Hearing that, Klein looked annoyed and muttered, "See, because of you, they think I'm crazy." The Death Knight laughed and answered, "You were since the beginning." "Don't blame me," Klein shot back. "What, want me to send you back to your coffin for real?" The Death Knight ignored the threat and simply warned him once more, "Watch what's in front of you." The instant those words were spoken, both assassins rushed at Klein once again from different directions. Their attacks came so quickly that they left almost no room to breathe. But this time, Klein smiled confidently and said, "Now that you've said that, I can't just stand still." Before either assassin could react, Klein suddenly vanished from between them as if he had disappeared into thin air. Their eyes widened in shock. In the very next instant, Klein's voice echoed behind them, "Watch closely, old man." Rhineland family's secret technique, Meteor Sword. His sword flashed like a falling star with a single breathtaking movement. He sliced across one assassin before instantly continuing toward the other without losing even a fraction of his speed. Watching the technique unfold, the Death Knight couldn't hide his surprise. The family's secret technique? No, it's different. It's faster and sharper. Klein's sword danced across the battlefield with unbelievable precision, attacking both assassins in rapid succession. Even these elite killers who had faced countless opponents were stunned by the technique they were witnessing. Within moments, both assassins collapsed lifelessly onto the ground. Silence filled the battlefield as the Death Knight stared at Klein in disbelief. He didn't merely imitate it. From the moment he first saw it, he understood its framework. In that brief moment, he saw the completed form of illusion sword. It is a tragic technique that was never passed down to anyone, yet he even modified it to suit himself. "I can say with certainty, this brat has talent surpassing mine." Feeling proud of himself, Klein smiled and asked, "Did you see that, old man?" But before he could celebrate, something caught his attention. Several scrolls had fallen onto the ground near the assassins' bodies. Even Klein looked surprised by their presence. At that very moment, a new figure appeared above them, standing calmly while looking down at at the battlefield. The man was clearly the leader of the assassination squad. His cold voice echoed through the area. Meteor sword. It was a technique used by Henkel Rinland, the seventh head of the Rainland family. That was in the records. The footwork used to quickly get behind someone is also a technique of the eldest son delay, and that too is in the records. But Illusion Sword Rud Rhineland's technique was one whose succession ended. A technique that does not exist in this world. It's a record that should not exist. Klein looked directly at the leader without showing the slightest fear and calmly replied. Then starting today rewrite the records. The continent's strongest sword, the one that cut off my head. The continent's strongest swordsmanship passed down through that bloodline. What the man who killed me left behind. And now all of that swordsmanship is in my hands. That is if you survive today. Hearing those words, the leader's expression remained completely unchanged, changing tactics. To ensure a mere sword can't block it all, we simply need to burn the entire area to ashes. As soon as the order was given, all three remaining members immediately spread out in different directions, creating distance from one another. They began chanting a strange incantation in perfect synchronization. Moments later, two of them combined their power and unleashed a powerful technique, fire-style fire dragon formation. Instantly, an enormous wave of blazing flames roared across the battlefield, racing straight toward Klein with overwhelming force. The fire was so intense that it seemed capable of reducing everything in its path to nothing but ash. Watching the sea of flames consume the battlefield, the two assassins looked down confidently. One of them declared, "These flames can burn through even steel forged with mana. There's no way he can survive. Mission complete. I'll report to headquarters." Just as he turned to leave, his partner suddenly froze and whispered, "Wait, what is this?" Something inside the flames didn't look right. Instead of disappearing, a massive shadow began taking shape within the inferno. Thick spiritual energy spread throughout the battlefield as countless dark silhouettes slowly emerged from the blazing fire. Standing calmly at the center of it all, completely unharmed, Klein smiled as he said, "Swordsmanship was just something I brought along. After all, this is my real profession." The next moment, the ground trembled violently as his entire army of the dead answered his call, rising one after another to surround the battlefield. Looking at the terrified assassins with an unwavering smile, Klein finally gave his command, "Assassin hunting begin."